Chapter 1301 New Life. Through the eyes of mystery prying, Bernadette saw that the interior of the dark red baldachin was empty. Nothing was there. All she could see were shadows that usually shrouded things in reality. She was unable to prophesize anything from it. Having no choice but to look away, she followed her intuition and made the invisible servant walk towards the other end of the open area, which was also part of the primitive forest filled with towering trees. As the invisible servant couldn't be too far away from her, she silently followed behind while wearing the invisibility hat. She unhurriedly passed through the area where all the creatures on the island were gathered. Here, the sky seemed to be perpetually gloomy, one permeated by a faint blackness. Time passed quickly. The invisible servant entered the forest that blotted out the sky with the tree branches and everything before it suddenly dimmed. Right on the heels of that, the nearly transparent, cold, and undetectable eyes of mystery prying saw through the dim environment. There were pale white corpses placed in between the trees. Skulls and rotting corpses hung down from many branches. They consisted of dragons, avian creatures, and some had 8 legs, while others were strange giant trees that occupied every empty spot in the forest. At a glance, Bernadette seemed to have arrived at a cemetery. A scene naturally surfaced in her mind. It was a scene of supernatural beings giving birth to their descendants before they died, thus passing on their beyonder characteristics to them. And these creatures would struggle towards this region in the primitive forest from every direction, in search of an unoccupied spot. Then, facing a particular direction, they would silently die, gradually rotting and being reduced to bones. What's the meaning behind this? As a clairvoyant, Bernadette fully believed that the scenes produced in her mind were what had happened in the real world. However, she was puzzled about the type of power that made the creatures on this primitive island choose this area as their tomb. Furthermore, since Grimm, William, and Polly, who had died long ago, appeared to remain alive in some form, it didn't make sense that supernatural and mutated creatures that had stayed on this island all this while and had suffered even more corruption would end up dying. This made Bernadette frown slightly as she directed the invisible servant to continue proceeding deeper into the creature cemetery. Just like that, the invisible servant proceeded forward for nearly 15 minutes in this forest filled with bones and corpses. Finally, it saw a fourth object beyond trees, weeds, and corpses. It was a black stone pillar. It was very thick, with a width spanning about 6 arm spans and 30 to 40 meters tall. Its surface was covered with rings which were signs of weathering. It resembled a finger-wearing rings that didn't suit its size. Read more chapter on vipnovel.com. Bernadette made the eyes of mystery prying observe the stone pillar for several seconds, but she didn't discover anything mysterious about it. It was as though it was a symbol that was casually erected. The invisible servant looked around and discovered that the surrounding corpses around the stone pillar didn't suffer from serious rot. They were even covered in rather intact flesh and skin. There aren't any supernatural powers or magical effects that are different from other places. Unless the new deceased were gathered near the stone pillar, it's impossible for them to have such a unified trend. Bernadette suspected that it wasn't because there was no mysterious influence in this matter, but that it would only happen at a specific moment. She didn't use her powers of prophecy to search for the reason. This was because a prophecy, at its core, was to pry into the secrets of the river of fate. The more serious the problem involved was, and the higher her status and level, the more damage the backlash would bring to her. And at this moment, it was impossible for Bernadette to not be cautious. She was afraid that it might involve an unknown existence. In addition, this hadn't caused any harm to her. She didn't have to take the risk to make up prophecy. After searching for a while to no avail, the invisible servant continued forward, attempting to pass through the cemetery and head to other regions of the forest. Just then, Bernadette heard a rustling sound. It was the sound of a breeze passing through the vegetation, a tidal wave in the void. Ever since she landed on this strange island, this was Bernadette's first time feeling the wind. Subconsciously, she made the invisible servant look back at the black stone pillar. In the eyes of mystery prying, the corpses around the stone pillar began to rot and shed one by one. New flesh and blood grew out like they had their own spirituality, and their skin slowly covered this harrowing scene 1 inch at a time. This change lasted for less than 10 seconds before stopping. A small number of the corpses no longer showed any signs of decay. It looked like they had just died. In the next second, a mutated curly-haired baboon and a wolf with 8 legs wobbled to their feet. Their fur was slightly white and their skin was slightly dry, their eyes dull and cold. Then, the 2 originally deceased creatures each got their bearings and left the cemetery from different spots. Bernadette's gaze froze as she watched this. Her brows raised slightly as she finally understood why the creatures on this island had struggled to come to this area before dying and why they had to die here. Here, death, an endpoint, didn't mean entering the state of eternal slumber, but rather a new beginning. Furthermore, This wasn't the resurrection of a zombie or skeleton that a spirit guide was capable of. It was a new life with a certain will and vitality, a distortion and disorder of the world's underlying rules. In addition, it seems to contain some mystery from the Black Emperor's resurrection. However, those who obtain new life aren't in a proper state. They're even closer to zombies. Such revivals are very problematic. Klein, who was above the gray fog, also saw this scene and had many guesses. Of course, this was under the premise that the Emperor had fundamentally left his last mausoleum here and exerted some form of influence here. As he thought about it, Klein rejected this idea. This was because, before the Emperor became an angel, this primitive island had a similar situation. The dead Grim was proof. Yes, the exact details that happened back then might not be the same as what's happening now. Perhaps, compared to the past, it has already been distorted and disordered. Klein nodded gently, prepared to bless and protect Bernadette at any time. Bernadette also came up with a guess. She didn't allow the invisible servant to stay in its spot to wait for a new tide of life. This was because she had foreseen a development. After being repeatedly affected by the new tide of life, the invisible servant would oddly develop some sort of sentience and come alive. In addition, it wasn't that the invisible servant hadn't done any investigation prior to this, but it had ultimately failed to discover anything special about the Blackstone Pillar. Bernadette didn't believe that it would gain anything new by remaining here. In such a situation, it was better to establish a basic understanding of the primitive island rather than alarming an unknown existence due to a deeper study. Many a time, there were problems that eluded one in the beginning, but the answer might be nearer to the end. This was thanks to the experience that Bernadette had accumulated over all these years. The corpses on the trees and branches gradually grew fewer as the invisible servant moved forward. During this process, Bernadette discovered another phenomenon. In the new tide of life, it wasn't certain that a corpse would be revived. However, once they revived and left the empty area, the rest of the corpses would be attracted. Like metal to magnets in the next 5 minutes, they would stiffly move towards the center, filling up the corresponding spots like they were in line for a bestowment. The law of beyonder characteristics convergence? No, it doesn't seem like it. The deceased have already passed down their characteristics. As Bernadette's thoughts wandered, she suddenly thought of a question. It's impossible for the deceased to produce new beyonder characteristics after obtaining new life, but do they still possess their powers in their previous lives? Once I have a complete grasp of the situation on this island, I can find a resurrected being to test it out. Bernadette quickly made a decision and followed the invisible servant's route forward. She didn't use any beyonder powers other than her invisibility hat. She hoped that she wouldn't disturb the environment and miss out on any details. Therefore, she didn't walk too fast. She took about 15 minutes to leave the cemetery. The invisible servant had already entered the forest up ahead. It could hear the occasional bird chirping and beast roars. The vibrant vitality here was different from the other remaining regions. Above the gray fog, Klein sighed. Thankfully, I'm now the owner of Sapphira Castle. Here, I have the status of a king of angels. I can observe reality for as long as I want to, and I don't have to worry about draining my spirituality. Yes, the only thing I need to pay attention to is my body that's hidden in the ancient city located in the fog of history before the first epoch. After traveling for another few minutes, the invisible servant suddenly saw something that appeared incongruous to the primitive island's environment. It was a log cabin that seemed to be a residence of a forest ranger. The log cabin was brown in color and was less than 2.5 meters tall. It looked like it was prepared for humans, but every detail was rough and crude. At that moment, the cabin's door was open, allowing Bernadette to see the situation inside through the eyes of mystery prying. A wooden table, a fur-covered bed, and a low-back chair formed a scene of a residence lived by humans. Who lives here? With a thought from Bernadette, the invisible servant rapidly approached the cabin in search for possible clues. It then realized that the interior of the cabin was ice cold. Apart from the furniture, there was nothing else. It seemed like no one had lived there for a very long time. Just as Bernadette was using the eyes of mystery prying to carefully inspect every detail in the cabin, she suddenly had a premonition. She hurriedly made the invisible servant turn around. At some point in time, a person had appeared behind the invisible servant. He was wearing luxurious clothes from the Roselle era. His hair was completely white, and he looked old. He had a pair of light blue eyes that were extremely cold and blank. Edwards. This was the knight who had outlived the emperor, Vice Admiral Iceberg, Edwina's ancestor. Edwards stared at the invisible servant for a few seconds. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and said in a low voice, "Our Highness." Chapter 1302, The Scene in the Prophecy. Bernadette fell silent for 2 seconds before replying through the invisible servant. "Uncle Edwards, why are you here?" She used the way she addressed him when she was young to reduce the chances of an accident. Her voice reverberated in the surrounding air with the invisible servant as a conduit. It was dry, dull, and completely different from normal. Edwards's face was pale. It was as if he had just crawled out of the grave without any warmth. I don't know either. When I woke up, I discovered that I had returned to this island. This might be my destiny. A destiny of guarding His Majesty. He paused with every word he said, but he didn't give the impression that he was out of breath. It seemed like he hadn't spoken for a long time, so much so that his throat was rusty. He wasn't used to speaking. Without waiting for Bernadette's further inquiries, the knight, who was famous across the continent more than 100 years ago, added with a flat tone, His Majesty's mausoleum is nearby. I've been guarding this place, waiting for him to revive. But after so many years, the mausoleum has never changed. There haven't been any signs of a resurrection. Bernadette made the invisible servant look around and said, This log cabin is where you live? Edwards's exposed skin was slightly shriveled. It matched the aging spots he originally had. His voice was low and hoarse as he answered, That's right. Read more chapter on vipnovel.com. I used the surrounding trees to make materials to build this cabin. Bernadette's invisible servant looked in the direction where she had come from. Uncle William and the others aren't with you? Edwards's cold, wooden eyes moved. They have long been corrupted and are dead. Although they've come back to life, they're more like monsters. They aren't their former selves. Your Highness, you must be wary of them and avoid them. Do not trust anyone but Benjamin and me. Bernadette fell silent for a while before asking through the invisible servant, Where's my father's mausoleum? I want to take a look. Edwards's somewhat stiff neck moved. Okay. He then took a step towards the cabin and took out a rusted black axe. I'll take you there, Edward said as he looked at the invisible servant that normally couldn't be seen. During this process, his expression was stiff and almost unchanged. All right. Along the periphery of the forest, Bernadette responded using the invisible servant to make her hoarse voice echo in the surroundings. Edwards was almost 1.9 meters tall, and he looked rather thin. He carried his axe and walked behind the log cabin before saying in a flat tone, It's very close. Be careful along the way. Bernadette immediately controlled the invisible servant and made it follow the luxuriously dressed Edwards. Walking through the forest one after another, Bernadette suddenly made the invisible servant ask, Uncle Edwards, what were you worshipping in the empty space from before? Edwards didn't turn his head as he maintained the same pace. His Majesty, at least 2 kilometers behind him and the invisible servant, Bernadette immediately pricked up her brows. She took nearly 3 seconds to control her emotions. Through the invisible servant, she continued asking without any emotion, Uncle William and the others are worshipping him? Edwards paused, but he kept his back towards the invisible servant and the eyes of mystery prying. No, he slowed down as though he was thinking of an answer. I don't know what they worship. Bernadette's eyes narrowed slightly as though she could see some changes in the river of fate. She didn't ask any more questions as she made the invisible servant silently follow Edwards. Amidst the dark green, towering trees and the black, sharp shrubs, they headed for the island's mountain peak. In just 4 or 5 minutes, the trees up ahead disappeared. This wasn't a process that went from dense to sparse until there was nothing. Instead, the towering trees suddenly disappeared after an imaginary boundary line. Beyond the invisible line was a mountain that was hundreds of meters tall. It was covered by dark green trees that were almost black in color. From afar, it was almost as if it was one with the forest, virtually inseparable. However, the side of the mountain facing Edward and Bernadette was mostly without vegetation. Half of the mountain had been excavated. In the middle of the mountain, a pitch-black mausoleum stood there with a majestic appearance. Most of it was part of the mountain range. A small portion of it had signs of man-made constructions and polishing. It truly expounded on what it meant to be a mountain mausoleum. Thus, the mausoleum didn't look like the common pyramid. Instead, it looked more like a towering mountain. It wasn't exactly symmetrical, but it was definitely majestic. Perhaps the mausoleum itself had influenced its surroundings, or perhaps Edwards had cleaned the area. Its surface was void of weeds, nor was it covered with vines commonly seen in other mountains. This allowed Bernadette to see the various texts and symbols engraved on the mausoleum through the eyes of mystery prying. She saw the heavy 30-meter-tall stone door that seemed to be prepared for giants. Bernadette wasn't unfamiliar with those words and symbols. She didn't take much time to recognize them as either the civil code that was created by her father, the new social trends that he had established, or even some design drafts of some invention. Just as Bernadette was carefully examining it, Klein, who was above the gray fog, was completely certain that this was the last mausoleum left behind by Emperor Roselle. This was similar to the mausoleum he had seen in the Tudor ruins. It had the majesticness and distortion traits of the Black Emperor. After walking out of the primitive forest and passing through the invisible boundary, they arrived near the mausoleum. Edward stopped. He half turned his body and aimed his pale face and cold eyes at the invisible servant. He said without any change in his voice, "Don't go in. It will interrupt the resurrection." Bernadette frowned slightly and thought for 2 seconds before using the eyes of mystery, prying to lock onto the mausoleum. Then, her blue eyes that resembled the sea became extremely deep, like the surface of the sea before a storm. Under such circumstances, her eyes clearly lost focus as her vision turned blurry. She was prying into the secrets of the river of fate and making a prophecy for what would happen next. Klein tapped the long modeled table and increased the probability of her success. He then prepared himself to resist the corruption of the cosmos. Of course, the latter wasn't necessary, because Bernadette had a grade 0 sealed artifact that she could control. Bernadette raised her right hand the next second. Her skin instantly turned as white as snow. Her lips turned as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. An illusory, ancient mirror appeared in her hands. This was Snow White of her fairy tale magic. Bernadette had used it to enhance the success rate and accuracy of her prophecy. Silently, she saw a scene. The majestic and solemn dark mausoleum visibly shook as the tall, heavy stone door opened. Then, a huge black arm stretched out from the stone door. The style of this arm was close to that of the trees on the island. From its color and state, it looked more like a part of a shadow. However, it wasn't a thin layer, but was instead filled with flesh and blood. It looked extremely strange. It supported itself with its elbows and moved forward with great difficulty, as though it wanted to pull out bigger and more terrifying parts from within. Boom. The entire island began to shake. Boom. The transparent eyes of mystery prying suddenly shattered. Bernadette's eyes immediately closed, as if she had seen a blinding light or encountered some unbearable damage. Blood trickled down from the corners of her eyes as the color in her face drained significantly. On her body, a pair of illusory and holy wings spread out, descending upon her with its clean, white feathers to neutralize the invisible corruption. Indeed, she has the ability to resist. The Emperor sure left a huge inheritance for her. Haha, before I taught Ma'am Hermit a lesson, she liked to use the eye of mystery, prying to examine the people and objects around her. It definitely has something to do with how she was brought up. In short, it's all Roselle's fault. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he couldn't help but criticize the Emperor. Then, his mind raced as he analyzed the scene that Bernadette had prophesied. A terrifying creature crawls out from the mausoleum after the stone door is opened. This might be the resurrected Roselle, or perhaps a symbol of some kind of disaster. For example, a particular outer deity who had once corrupted this island, or the primordial moon who secretly corrupted Roselle. Yes, even if it's Roselle, he definitely wouldn't be taking on the form of a human. He's even closer to that of a mythical creature, a deity. Also, I can't be sure if the terrifying creature is rational or if it can communicate. There's another important problem. Was the stone door opened by Bernadette or someone else? Or did the terrifying creature in the mausoleum do it by itself? If it's the latter, things might develop to the stage of the prophecy, even if we don't do a thing. A prophecy is truly filled with ambiguity. Klein conjured a gold coin and flicked it, making a divination. The results of the dream divination showed that the mausoleum was both dangerous and safe. How do I interpret this? As Klein pondered, he focused his attention back on Bernadette. Bernadette took nearly a minute to recover and stopped appearing that weak. However, she was temporarily unable to interpret the direction of the prophecy from the scene she saw. She could only confirm that the problem was definitely very complicated. Due to the eyes of mystery prying shattering, there was no way for her to use it to see the various secrets. All she could do was use the invisible servant's perception to observe the situation around her. She realized that Edwards remained silent and motionless when she was unable to control the invisible servant, as though he hadn't noticed anything abnormal. After some thought, Bernadette said to Edwards through the invisible servant, "Do you still remember the years you spent in Limburg?" Edwards's indifferent blue eyes moved. "I remember. I think." At this point, he seemed to recall something. His expression twisted as though he was suffering some indescribable pain. In such a state, his eyes suddenly glowed with a strange light. I think I'm already dead." Chapter 1303, Coming to Life. Already dead. Edwards turned his head and looked at Bernadette's invisible servant with his light blue eyes. His gaze was no longer cold and blank. It emitted a strange glint that was filled with disbelief. It was only at this moment that he seemed to realize that he had long died and had come back to life. He was no different from William, Polly, and Grimm, who he claimed were individuals who they needed to keep up one's guard against. This transformation lasted for only 2 seconds before Edwards's face twisted. His already pale skin rapidly dimmed as it ruptured inch by inch. Beneath his skin, the red pieces of flesh began to rot at a discernible speed, dripping foul yellow liquid. With a swoosh, Edwards raised the black axe in his hand. Oof! His axe ruthlessly cleaved the top of his head, as though it was trying to stop the bad thoughts that surfaced in his mind. The axe was heavy and sharp. It tore through Edwards's skull all the way to his glabella. Drip, drip, drip. Drops of milky white cerebrospinal fluid dripped down from the axe's blade, sliding across Edwards's grimaced and torn face, as though he had poured some milk onto a bright red strawberry. Don't come near me," Edwards said in a low and hoarse voice to Bernadette's invisible servant after striking himself in the head. Before he could finish his sentence, his expression returned to its blank state. The look in his eyes gradually turned hollow as he turned around and walked towards the forest. That thin and shriveled body of his stooped a little, as though his back was hunched. Bernadette had probed him because of the doubts and concerns she had about entering the mausoleum. All she could do was indirectly determine the problem with Edwards's existence, and see if she could obtain more clues from his answer. She never expected this knight from Rosel's-era, who had been famous across the northern continent, would react in such an intense and strange manner. After 2 seconds of silence, Bernadette made the invisible servant say to Edwards's back, "Your descendants are doing pretty well. All of them are accomplished in a certain sense." Edwards, whose back was facing the mausoleum, stopped for a moment. Then, he continued forward, passing the invisible boundary and entering the forest. His target seemed to be in the direction of the cemetery with the stone pillar, the place where the deceased could obtain new life. At the same time, Bernadette looked up into the sky. The faint black colors that permeated the area had clearly faded, but there was an indescribable feeling. The entire primitive island underwent a subtle change that couldn't accurately be described. Suddenly, Bernadette, who was hiding at the edge of the invisible boundary, rubbed her back. She felt that it was heavy, as though there was something there. When her left palm touched her target, Bernadette realized that there was an extra strand of hair. At this moment, she was wearing an Intis-style blouse with a large lace flower around the collar, an indigo-patterned captain's uniform, a pair of beige trousers, knee-length boots, and a triangular hat with feathers on it. She was dressed like the leader of a pirate ship. She styled herself such that her long chestnut hair was tied into a bun, leaving the remaining strands in a way that would reach the middle of her back. But now, even though her hairstyle remained unchanged, her hair had grown longer and reached her waist. Then, Bernadette lowered her head and looked at her right palm. She saw the fingernails of her 5 fingers extending. Queen Mystic didn't show any signs of surprise or panic. She followed the instincts of a clairvoyant, and from all the experience she had accumulated over time. She took a few steps forward, and through an invisible boundary, she completely left the primitive forest and entered the empty area where the Black Emperor's mausoleum was. During this process, Bernadette even made the invisible servant return to the spirit world. 3 or 4 seconds later, she felt the earth shake. The mausoleum began to tremble visibly. Subconsciously, Bernadette turned to look at the primitive forest. Her gaze froze for a moment. The dark green trees were waving their branches and uprooting their roots. Then, like humans, they approached Bernadette. The entire primitive forest had come to life. Looking at the dense cluster of trees that seemed to blot out the sky surging at her, Bernadette had the feeling that doomsday was approaching. She felt as if the entire area would be blanketed by the forest. A gigantic red dragon with flames flowing across its skin rapidly flew into the sky. An 8-legged demonic wolf began to run madly between the trees. All the supernatural beings and mutated creatures on this island stirred as they rushed towards the mausoleum. Although she was a clairvoyant, Bernadette still didn't expect that her simple, indirect question would bring about such an anomaly. It was as though it was a key that had opened the door to the abyss. Above the gray fog, Klein saw a lot more. Together with his knowledge of mysticism, he had a certain guess. The situation of Edwards is different from William, Grimm, and Polly. It's like a loophole of the order on this primitive island, or rather, a shadow. When he realized that he was already dead, this loophole was discovered by the order, and it began to conduct repairs. And the repairs brought with it an enhancement of the order, causing the entire island to experience an anomaly. I can sense that the Black Emperor's powers are present here to a certain degree. It affected Edwards, causing him to maintain a portion of his will after obtaining new life. And where did the original order of this primitive island come from? As Klein's thoughts raced, he suddenly sensed that Bernadette was suffering certain anomalies. Thump, thump, thump. Bernadette could vaguely hear her own heartbeat. This heartbeat was rather chaotic, as though it was a combination of 2 sounds. 2. Bernadette's heart stirred as she calmly directed her attention back to herself. In the next second, she confirmed that there were 2 sources of her heartbeat. One came from her heart, the other from her abdomen. There seemed to be an additional heart in her abdomen, one that was rapidly expanding and contracting. Furthermore, this heart was developing bit by bit. Without needing to use her mystery-prying powers to look at her abdomen, Bernadette immediately sensed that there was a fetus in her womb. It had grown from the size of a grape to the size of a normal human palm. If it was left to grow, it didn't seem like it would take long before it matured. It would then tear open her mother's womb and drill out while covered in blood. Unknowingly, Bernadette had become pregnant. Her spiritual perception and the sealed artifact on her body had failed to detect it in advance or attempt to stop it. It was as though she was powerless to deal with such an influence. Earth Mother, Primordial Moon, Mother Tree of Desire. 3 divine names flashed through Bernadette's mind. According to what she knew, there weren't many mysteries that could cause such an anomaly. Most of them came from domains related to the Earth and the Moon pathway. Sequence 0 of the plantar pathway was Mother. The Primordial Moon could make a stone have reproductive powers, while the Mother Tree of Desire seemed to possess some high-sequence beyonder characteristics of the Moon pathway. Bernadette wasn't in a hurry to deal with the fetus in her stomach. Her gaze turned dark once again as she used her prophetic ability to see what her best choice was. This time, she only took 1 second to obtain the corresponding prophecy. Survival lies inside the mausoleum. Without any hesitation, Bernadette reached out her right hand and quickly drew out words filled with stellar radiance. These words, which were similar to the words on the blasphemy slate, quickly interwove into a strange symbol and opened a secret door that seemed to lead deep into the spirit world. Following that, the secret door opened and a strong gust of wind blew out, transforming into an entity that was half man, half air. His upper body was wrapped in white cloth. Sage frontlet. Bernadette's tone was calm as she ordered in a dignified voice. The man responded respectfully and removed an accessory from the white cloth wrapped around his body. The core of this accessory was a vertical eye embedded with diamonds. It shimmered with pure light, exuding an abnormal holiness. It was filled with intelligence, but it also appeared cold without any warmth. Bernadette then took the accessory and embedded it into the middle of her forehead. This was a grade 0 sealed artifact which Bernadette usually didn't carry with her, as the negative effects were too severe. However, at this moment, the sage frontlet had an ability that was extremely important to Bernadette. She was willing to bear the consequences of not being able to use evil magic and the gradual influence that the beyonder characteristic would have on her as it slowly fused with her. If she didn't remove the sage frontlet in a short period of time, it would be equivalent to having a sequence 2 potion splashed on her. When the time came, she could either end up lucky and succeed in advancing to become a sage, or lose control and become a monster. And without the supplementary ingredients and the corresponding ritual, the former's probability was nearly negligible. With the diamond vertical eye on her forehead, Bernadette's body began to turn incorporeal as she dissociated into a series of complicated knowledge. In that instant, she became a creature of pure information. The baby in her womb failed to obtain such a state as it fell to the ground. It was half the size of a normal baby. It already had facial features and limbs. Its skin was wrinkled, and it was dripping with sticky pus. As it left its mother's body, the undeveloped it began to regress and quickly melted in the air. The baby was clearly unwilling to give up. It tried its best to open its eyes, which were sealed by the sticky liquid. It opened its mouth wide open in a bid to make a final struggle. At this moment, Klein, who was above the gray fog, wrapped the edge of the long mottled table. He increased the probability of failure with respect to the baby struggling. Unable to maintain itself, the baby completely dissipated in front of the approaching black forest. At the same time, the flood of information that Bernadette had transformed into had entered the Black Emperor Mausoleum's interior through the heavy stone door as she reformed her original body. During this process, she seemed to see a black shadow. Chapter 1304, The Importance of Ideas. When she entered the Black Emperor's mausoleum, Bernadette vaguely saw a black shadow. However, after she extricated herself from being an embodiment of information and reassembled her body with the pure, messy knowledge, she didn't sense anything. It was as though what she had just experienced was just an illusion. Queen Mystic wasn't in a rush to venture deep into the mausoleum. She stayed in her spot and carefully observed her surroundings. Without using the powers of mystery prying, everything was clearly presented before her eyes. The interior of the Black Emperor Mausoleum was empty. Apart from the pitch-black walls and the high platform in the middle, there was nothing. On the high platform, there was a chair that looked like it was prepared for a giant. It was made of iron, and its surface was engraved with complicated and distorted patterns. At the top of the seat, there was a crown-shaped object. At this moment, there wasn't a single figure on the huge, heavy seat, as if it was waiting for its emperor to return. Just as Bernadette was about to take a step forward and approach the platform, she suddenly realized that her body was completely immobilized, as if she was being bound tightly by invisible shackles. Right on the heels of that, pairs of illusory and wholly white wings appeared behind her as though they were passively resisting something. In the next second, on the pairs of angel wings, white feathers dropped as they fluttered. They grew deformed, thin, and fluffy limbs. The gaps in the layers of feathers spread open one after another, as though they had become countless eyes. The deformed feathers immediately let out crisp laughter, causing a hollow chuckle to echo inside the mausoleum. All of them had come alive, turning into miniature, winged creatures. This reminded Bernadette of some fairy tales that her father had told her. There were always little pixies that weren't as big as a thumb in them. As this thought flashed through her mind, Bernadette felt her right eye itch. The eyelashes of that eye grew rapidly, turning into tiny arms that took root on her face, trying hard to pull her eyeball out. I see it. I see it. The veins in Bernadette's right eye protruded as they let out a childlike voice, as though they had gained sentience and consciousness of her body. Read more chapter on vipnovel.com. This was also a form of new life. Almost at the same time, Bernadette's left ear suddenly drooped down and covered her ears. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it, the ear shouted with a sharp voice. If she didn't use her spirituality, Bernadette would definitely imagine that she had a young maiden by her side, one that was covering her ears, stamping her feet, and screaming. Without cushioning anything, the sage frontlet in the middle of her forehead automatically left her body and floated into the air. The surface of the vertical eye embedded with diamonds instantly flashed with countless cold beams of light. It was as though numerous tiny eyes had grown out of it. Each eye reflected Bernadette. The sage frontlet had also obtained a certain living characteristic. Just as the Grade 0 sealed artifact was about to awaken and affect its target, a pale white, slender, illusory palm reached out and grabbed it. The sage frontlet's living characteristic rapidly dispersed, as though it had reached the end of its life. The ice-cold and pale hand that clearly belonged to a woman came from behind Bernadette. At some point in time, a figure with only an upper body appeared. This figure grew out of Bernadette's back. It was almost transparent and rather illusory. She was wearing the same clothing as Bernadette, and she was wearing the same feather triangular hat. Her blue eyes were like the projection of the ocean. It was like Bernadette herself, a part of her spirit that had drilled out of her body. However, there was a pale white face mask on Bernadette's half-body phantom. The mask only had holes where one's eyes were with no other gaps elsewhere. This made Bernadette's phantom appear extremely cold and noble, but it lacked the aura of a living being. This was the third item she possessed, and also her last Grade 0 sealed artifact. It was an item made after Emperor Roselle returned from the southern continent in his later years, called Pale Death. Its negative effect was to make the wearer slowly die until it became a corpse and become its slave. At this moment, Bernadette had used this point to restrain the abnormal life growing in her. Just as the half-body phantom appeared, her right eye quelled. Her eyelashes, which had turned thicker and longer into arms, began to fall off one by one. Her ears didn't make any noises either. They slowly opened and returned to normal. Without such a suppression, Bernadette's facial features, arms, and legs would have broken apart to seek freedom. After stabilizing her body, Bernadette tried to take a step forward. However, she was still unable to do anything. All she could do was control the half-bodied spirit body. After some thought, she made the spirit body behind her take out a ritual silver dagger from her pocket. Then, bending down, it drew a circle in the middle of her right boot. With a ripping sound, the leather boot quickly shortened by half. Then, Bernadette used her half-body spirit body to tear her pants near her left knee. She cut off a corner of her coat and blouse, removing one of the feathers on the side of her triangular hat. This attempt didn't seem to have anything to do with supernatural beings. It was just like a willful and rebellious girl who wanted to dress up in a different way from the normal sense of aesthetics. However, as Bernadette completed this series of actions, she carefully took a step forward. Her body could actually move, as she no longer felt restrained. The invisible suppression effect vanished instantly. The Black Emperor Mausoleum seemed to accept Bernadette in this form. Who would have thought that something an ordinary person could do was able to deal with such abnormalities? Furthermore, Bernadette suspected that the more she used her beyond her powers to resist whatever she was facing, the deeper the effects. This was because she had the feeling that she was facing an invisible deity. Only by pleasing the other party's sense of aesthetics could she be pardoned. Otherwise, she could only rely on the authority of a sequence 0 to circle around it. In addition, the lucky thing was that Bernadette wasn't once a knowledgeable mysticologist, but she also had a deep understanding of the Black Emperor pathway. She knew what the authorities this domain consisted of. She knew that it represented the shadow of order, a distortion of order. That was why Bernadette twisted the normal order around her using her dressing, thus obtaining the recognition and acceptance of the invisible deity. Yes, in the matter regarding mysticism, knowledge and ideas are more useful than abilities at times. In that situation just now, any resistance would have been viewed as a provocation towards the internal order of the mausoleum, triggering unpredictable and terrifying changes. Once one figures out the crux of the problem, the negative effects will be easily resolved. Klein nodded above the gray fog and learned quite a lot from Queen Mystic. Although he was already a sequence higher than her, to the point of being a king of angels inside Sapphire Castle and having experienced quite a number of major events, his growth had been too fast. He was still lacking when it came to the details and problems. Now was the perfect time to make up for the deficiency through observation. After taking a step, Bernadette began to follow her spiritual intuition and walk toward the huge, empty chair on the platform. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Suddenly, a breeze blew past her neck. This cold wind made Bernadette's body turn numb. At that moment, she felt a black shadow appear behind her. Silently, her long chestnut-colored hair parted, revealing a pair of eyes on her scalp. It was a pair of eyes, without any eyelashes. They were almost transparent, cold, and heartless. Eyes of mystery prying. The pair of eyes turned slightly and saw that the shadow-like curtain in the mysterious world showed clear signs of distortion. However, it didn't notice the shadow, nor did it find the source of the cold wind. Just as Bernadette attempted to close the eyes of mystery prior and lower the possibility of an accident, the cold and sinister breeze suddenly appeared in her mind. Her thoughts became active as she became increasingly out of control. She was unable to direct her thoughts in the required manner. This seemed to be a trend that couldn't be changed, one that led to chaos. Without any hesitation, Bernadette grabbed the few seconds of thought she was capable of. She let the half-body spirit on her back remove the pale white mask. Then, she put pale death on her face, while the half-body spirit retracted into her body and fused with her. From this second onwards, Bernadette's thoughts would gradually die along with her body. However, her thoughts could not help but stir and turn chaotic. Both of these conflicting conditions offset one another, forming a weak and delicate balance that helped Bernadette regain her ability to think. To Bernadette, compared to the beyonder effects of pale death itself, its negative effects were even more effective at this moment. Maintaining the balance, Bernadette took a few steps forward. During this process, she always felt that there were shadows hovering around her, but she couldn't find them no matter how hard she tried. After thinking for a few seconds, Bernadette's blue eyes darkened once again, losing focus. She tried prophesying the consequences of her choice. Soon, a corresponding scene appeared before her eyes. After putting on the sage frontlet again, she once again transformed into pure and complicated information streams, using it to circumvent the obstruction and head to the high platform in the middle. However, just as she approached, the flood of information suddenly disintegrated. It lost its order and formed several Bernadettes built on different tenets. There was a young girl in a layered dress, a tall young girl, a melancholic and confused girl, a woman with a twisted and pained expression, and a calm and determined queen. The prophetic vision instantly disappeared, and Bernadette's eyes instantly regained focus. At this moment, she saw the black shadow. It was standing right in front of her, no more than a fist away from her. That face formed from pure shadow completely occupied her vision. Chapter 1305. 1305 That Black Shadow. 1305 That Black Shadow. The moment Bernadette saw the black shadow, she instinctively clenched her right hand and conjured an ancient spear. From the tip of the spear to its handle, it was dyed with crimson red balls. It emitted a strong destructive aura, as though it could harm a true deity. Spear of Longinus. This spear had once appeared in an ancient era that couldn't be traced back, stained with the blood of a great existence. At this moment, it had descended into the Black Emperor's mausoleum through mystical reenactment. However, when Bernadette thrust it forward, she failed to achieve any effects because the tip of the spear was directed at her back. Despite wanting to attack the black shadow in front of her, the spear of Longinus had strangely thrust backward. The area had been affected by disorder, or suffered some form of distortion. Above the gray fog in the palace, Klein noticed the black shadow when it appeared in front of Bernadette. He didn't hesitate to raise the staff of the stars in his hand. He didn't wait this time. Unlike his prior observations of Queen Mystic's actions before, where he would consider if he would provide her with protection. This was because the level of danger of the black shadow sounded off alarms within him. He was an angel of the seer pathway after all. More importantly, Bernadette could sense the shadow's existence after entering the Black Emperor's mausoleum from time to time. As for Klein, he was unable to find clues through the true vision provided by Sapphire Castle. This undoubtedly meant danger and terror. When all the gems embedded in the black cane lit up, the sound of melodious bells resounded in the area where Bernadette and the black shadow were. Gone. The bell that came from an infinite distance exuded an indescribable emptiness. It made the interior of the Black Emperor's mausoleum visibly freeze, turning Bernadette's figure stiff as if she had been frozen. She couldn't do anything. However, the black shadow didn't sink into the vortex of time. As though situated in another world built with completely different fundamental rules, the shadow continued moving forward in between the contradictory of two rivers of fate, one filled with raging torrents and one that was almost completely still. This only made it appear to slow down, in no way affected by the illusory bell. This was the first time Klein had encountered such a situation after he gained the ability to replicate powers. Although the beyonder effects he had replicated with the Staff of the Stars were lacking compared to the original version, it would still be able to show a certain level of authority that wasn't easy to ignore regardless. However, the Black Shadow's slow movements gave him a second chance to try again. This time, he activated the Staff of the Stars' powers and moved Queen Mystic out of the Black Emperor's mausoleum. He wanted her to first conclude what she experienced before considering entering again. Gems flashed on the tip of the staff, and Bernadette, who was almost about to make contact with the Black Shadow, disappeared into thin air. In the next second, she appeared tens of meters away, appearing near the high platform in the mausoleum. The Staff of the Stars' teleportation was disrupted. The destination had been distorted, turning everything extremely chaotic. The experienced Bernadette didn't feel any fear or panic because she was stuck inside the Black Emperor mausoleum. She decisively raised her left hand and pressed the sage frontlet in the middle of her forehead as she used her fingers to stroke the pale death mask. The shimmering golden mask suddenly became soft and rapidly squirmed, as if it was about to form a face that didn't belong to Bernadette. The face had soft features and obvious characteristics of a southern continent native, but it exuded a bizarre and terrifying feeling. Anyone who witnessed it would believe that it would come alive once the face became clear enough, an entity that came from ancient times, the eternal darkness where the dead slumbered. By then, Bernadette's body, spirituality, and consciousness would all belong to this face. With the protrusion of this face, the stone walls and floor tiles in the Black Emperor mausoleum began to weather. It happened so fast that thousands of years appeared to be washed away in a short span of 2 seconds. They quickly became mottled, constantly dropping fragments or throwing up dust due to the wind. In between the cracks, thin white fur grew out. In just the blink of an eye, the fur grew into white feathers, and their surface seemed to be soaked in light yellow oil. The aura of the black figure gradually weakened, as though it was running towards death with huge strides. Its color faded away, its movements growing slower. Within the area where the pale white mask was, even the concept of death itself would weather away and dissipate. However, what was labeled as death wasn't the end point. When the stone wall and the floor tiles in the mausoleum were weathered to a certain extent, and when the black figure degraded to a certain stage, new stone blocks began to take form as ethereal auras quickly grew. During this process, the black figure stretched out his right hand. This palm that was formed from shadows suddenly grabbed Bernadette's neck from dozens of meters away. This wasn't fulfilled by extending the arm, but distorting the concept of distance for an instant. 45 meters became equivalent to 45 centimeters. The dark palm didn't exert too much strength, but it made Bernadette feel cold. Under such coldness, she realized that she couldn't use the 2 Grade 0 sealed artifacts of the Sage Frontlet and Pale Death. Typically, as long as she injected her spirituality into it and gave the corresponding thoughts, the sealed artifacts on her would react in the correct manner, creating different effects. But now, the silent process and rules had been disrupted and distorted. No amount of thoughts that Bernadette willed were able to stir the sealed artifacts. It felt like she was speaking to the air. Klein, who was above the gray fog, didn't waste any time after failing to teleport Queen Mystic away. A series of complicated symbols and magic labels quickly formed in his mind. He wanted to replicate a secret sorcerer's space concealment. He planned on separating Bernadette's location from the Black Emperor's mausoleum and concealing it to help Queen Mystic escape her current predicament. In fact, it might be more appropriate replicating the fairy tale magic, Peace Blossom source. But considering how Bernadette was formerly a mysticologist, Klein felt that it was better to use space concealment. Otherwise, it might expose some of the fool's secrets. As for where he had learned space concealment from, it naturally came from the recently advanced furs. Previously, in the name of the World Gehrman Sparrow, Klein had rented Lamino's travels. He had also requested Miss Magician to record the corresponding powers. Then, he released and recorded it while summoning the complete Lamino's travels from the fog of history again and again. It didn't take long for him to grasp the knowledge and technique, allowing him to replicate spatial concealment. As more gems lit up on the Staff of the Stars, the area around Bernadette darkened, as though it was covered by a curtain weaved by shadows. The curtain distorted as it concealed the space, isolating the black shadow and its palm outside. This helped Bernadette regain her freedom. In the next second, the black palm that had been forcefully separated reached forward again and touched the boundary of the concealed space. In an instant, a transparent vortex-like door appeared in the abnormal void. Or rather, the secret door that originally existed appeared autonomously and opened up in front of the black palm. All concealed space had a door, but the location of the door depended on the creator's thoughts. The palm formed by the shadows rapidly passed through the open door and entered the concealed space. It grabbed Bernadette's neck and once again disrupted the connection between Queen Mystic and her sealed artifact, distorting the corresponding order. At the same time, the black figure raised its head and looked at the top of the mausoleum. It seemed to be studying Sapphira Castle and Klein through layers of space and fog. Klein's eyelids twitched instinctively. He sensed that the shadow had a certain understanding of where he was and felt that it was distorting something. Klein's expression unknowingly turned abnormally heavy. The different gems on the staff of the stars lit up at the same time. He wanted to attempt to steal the corresponding beyonder powers of the other party. Only by doing so would he have the chance to restrict the black shadow. And in order to increase the success rate of stealing his target's powers, Klein turned his left palm and tapped the edge of the long modeled table. However, his theft failed. He didn't even get anything. His target had long since escaped the lock-on, despite just standing there. Klein's gaze froze. Then, he saw the black figure flash and enter the concealed space, closing the distance between it and Bernadette. It distorted my true vision, causing the situation I saw to be from 1 or even 2 seconds ago. A thought flashed through Klein's mind as he made a preliminary judgment on the previous failure. He then decided to summon Will Septon's historical projection to get him to reboot the area. At that moment, Bernadette, who was unable to use her sealed artifact, grew white, illusory swan feathers on her back. This was her fairy tale magic's ugly duckling. It could make Bernadette reveal an incomplete mythical creature form while maintaining her clarity of mind. She could use it twice a day, with each use lasting 15 seconds. At this moment, her thoughts went wild again. They started to boil and become more chaotic. This caused her ugly duckling magic to be cut off before it could even show its effects. Almost at the same time, she saw the black shadow stick to her body. It was sticky like a viscous, corrosive liquid that seeped into her body. Bernadette's eyes darkened as she suddenly sensed something. She grabbed the final moment of lucidity and opened her mouth slightly, speaking in a fluent Chinese accent. Home. The black shadow's infiltration paused for a moment. Its upper body slowly rose as it looked at Bernadette. Chapter 1306, Seal. The black figure froze as it released its grip on Bernadette's neck. It was as though it was staring at Queen Mystic with its non-existent eyes. A dry, hoarse voice echoed in the concealed space. Home. This voice was filled with hesitation and confusion, as though it was seeking confirmation. It was as if it had come from another world. The corrosion that Bernadette encountered vanished. Her connection with the sealed artifact was instantly restored. Pale death once again ate at her vitality little by little. This helped her resist the chaos in her thoughts, maintaining her basic clarity and rationality. Just as she was about to say something, the black figure suddenly stretched out its palm. But this time, it didn't strangle Bernadette's neck, but instead, it pushed her hard. Following this push was the collapse of the concealed space. It was a voice filled with pain as though it was resisting something. Leave. As the voice echoed, the black figure vanished. In an instant, it appeared on the huge, black, high-backed chair in the middle of the platform. 2 cracks appeared on its face, as though 2 asymmetrical eyes had grown out. However, the eyes didn't have any pupils. It was blood-colored. Right on the heels of that, another crack appeared beneath the 2 eyes. They too were filled with a pure, blood-red light. This allowed the black figure to finally open its mouth. It faced Bernadette as obvious sounds of pain resounded around it, as though it was resisting something. Leave this place. After being pushed out more than 10 meters away, Bernadette easily found her footing. However, she didn't follow the voice's order by leaving the Black Emperor's mausoleum. She stood there, staring blankly at the central platform. As she looked at the black figure, her expression revealed an unspeakable sadness. She could sense and now confirm that the black figure was her father, the man who called himself Caesar, Roselle Gustave. In the next second, more cracks appeared on the black figure's body. They ruptured from top to bottom, blooming blood-red flowers in different parts of his body. This made Roselle look like he was left with a shadow that wrapped around a blood-red object that emitted pure light. When Klein saw this scene above the gray fog, he naturally thought of the crimson moon high in the sky. At that moment, Roselle seemed to have transformed into a shadow. He wanted to block the crimson moon, but openings ruptured from his body, allowing more and more moonlight to shine into the real world. When these openings were connected together, the black shadow would completely split apart and give birth to a brand new crimson moon. When that happened, something extremely terrifying would definitely happen. At that moment, Roselle's black figure turned much more illusory, as though it had become an illusion. This made him look like he had been isolated in another world. There was an invisible barrier between him and the real world. Then, Roselle raised his right arm with great difficulty and pinched his forehead. The frequency at which blood-red cracks appeared on his body instantly decreased to a nadir. However, The eyes that had already appeared blinked repeatedly. However, this didn't bring any negative effects on the surroundings. It was as though it was just a simple change of order. The new growth of blood-red cracks was constantly being distorted to its original state of only having gradual activity. After completing this, Roselle raised his head and looked at Bernadette, who was dozens of meters away. He said with a hoarse voice, "You really have become an important figure in the mysterious world. You managed to come here alone. Come over, let me see how my little princess has grown." Bernadette's eyes reddened as she took a step forward. Roselle laughed again. "Back when I made sketchbooks, textbooks, and invented all kinds of small games for you, you were just a tiny midget. Now, you're able to save your poor old father. I remember that. You liked the clothes I designed for you when you were young. Unfortunately, you can't wear layered dresses after you're an adult." The Emperor rambled on, as if he had arrived in his twilight years and was someone who enjoyed reminiscing about the beautiful past. Bernadette walked faster and faster. Above the gray fog, Klein frowned indiscernibly. Suddenly, Emperor Roselle lowered his head and said with great force, "Stop." His voice carried an indescribable pain. Bernadette was stunned for a moment before she slowed down and stopped. She looked at the dark figure, and her eyes gradually revealed an indescribable sadness. Roselle raised his head again and coughed lightly. "Didn't you really want to ask why the Black Emperor's mausoleum has to be engraved with the order one implemented in the style that one ushered? In fact, this wasn't necessary. I just wanted to let anyone who sees it remember my greatness." Before he could finish his sentence, the Emperor gripped the armrest by his side tightly. He suppressed his voice and said in extreme pain, "Don't come near me. I've been corrupted." The sadness in Bernadette's eyes deepened. Her guess had finally been confirmed. At that moment, the red cracks on Roselle's face began to turn chaotic. They closed and opened, randomly with no signs of having a unified will. The Emperor took the opportunity and straightened his body. He looked at Bernadette and shouted with great difficulty, "Seal me. Seal." Queen Mystic Bernadette repeated the words silently. Her blue eyes quickly turned moist as a faint mist enveloped them. Even though she had lived for many years and was no longer the little girl she had been in the past, she was still unable to contain her emotions. However, she didn't ask for the reason, nor did she hesitate. With just a slight struggle, she firmly raised her right hand and pressed it on the pale white metal mask. She calmly made a decision, just like how she had faced all the major events that happened on the element Dawn over the years. On the surface of pale death, the metal instantly turned soft as it reformed into a new face with two black eyes. In the deep black parts of the eye, white lines appeared, forming an extremely complicated and mysterious three-dimensional symbol. It was like a long feathered bird or a coiled feathered serpent. The symbol absorbed the surrounding light and quickly turned corporeal. Then, it separated from Bernadette's eyes and extended its body before flying towards Roselle Gustave on the iron-black chair. Along the way, the strange symbol caused the surroundings to become increasingly dim. The floor tiles and stone walls suffered another round of weathering as if the deity in charge of death had passed the final judgment. The falling rubble and flying dust followed the corporeal symbol and came to Roselle's side. Then, they coiled around him, enveloping the illusory black figure that seemed to exist in another world. During this process, Roselle failed to control himself several times. He attempted to leave the iron-black chair, but he ended sitting back down. He didn't resist the seal that Bernadette had exerted on him. As the symbol fused with his figure, he immediately had a connection with pale death. He saw the illusory deity that lorded over the countless undead and the swollen body of a water ghost loitering in a dark river. Roselle's aura immediately vanished as the cracked red openings closed one after another. What awaited the Emperor was a quiet and peaceful sleep. As for the symbol, it was sealed within Roselle's body, constantly influencing him until pale death stopped responding. In the blink of an eye, several blood-red cracks appeared on Roselle's body again. After his aura declined to a nadir, it gradually began to glow as he fought back against the corporeal symbol. Klein, who was above the gray fog, sighed when he saw this. He clenched his fist and pressed it against his mouth. The curtain he draped around himself suddenly rose up, and the entire Sapphira castle boiled over in an obvious manner. Silently, the aura of new life that Roselle had just obtained began to dissipate. After vanishing to a certain point, it gained new life once again. Then, it was affected by the pale death and continued to fade away. Using the power of the attendant of mysteries beyond her characteristic and Sapphira Castle, Klein directly grafted new life and death and skipped the process in between. The corruption that Roselle suffered was no longer able to recover to the extent needed to break through the pale seal. Following that, Klein extended his right hand and used the power of Sapphira Castle to draw out the mysterious symbol behind the fool's high-back chair. The mysterious symbol made up of the pupilless eye and the contorted lines. The symbol absorbed the aura of Sapphira Castle and quickly turned corporeal. With a wave of Klein's wrist, it entered the prayer light representing Bernadette and landed on Roselle's black figure, fusing into his body. Every time the grafting vanished, this symbol that was directly related to the Fool and Sapphira Castle would draw upon new powers and complete the grafting process once more. As he constantly passed away and gained new life, Roselle's face, which seemed to be a pure shadow, obtained facial features. Then, he looked to the top of the mausoleum, as though he was looking into an infinite height. He then retracted his gaze and looked at Bernadette. He said with an abnormally weak voice, "This seal is good. I can sleep in peace." With that said, he frowned slightly as his tone changed. "Who taught you how to dress like this?" Bernadette felt a little lost as she listened. It was as if she had returned to her teenage years. At that time, when she had dressed up to the nines for a ball held by other nobles, Roselle would use a similar expression and a similar tone to pepper her with a series of questions. The mist in her eyes became obvious, and she could no longer control herself. She lowered her voice and shouted, "Daddy." Roselle's facial features immediately turned gentle before tensing up again. He sternly said, "Leave, and never return." Bernadette opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but her vision went black as though she could see the shadow of order. In the next second, she found herself back at the edge of the primitive island. Bernadette stared blankly at the mountain peak in the middle of the primitive island for a few seconds before slowly turning around and walking towards the sea. This time, she didn't stubbornly insist on walking straight without looking back. Every few steps she took, she would stop and turn back to take a look. Soon, she returned to the dawn and entered the captain's cabin. She opened the room that was specially used to hold her collection. At a glance, Bernadette saw books, stacks of textbooks, clothes, and skirts. She saw the chess game that few people in the world knew, and the neat pile of wooden block toys. She leaned against the wooden door, slowly curled up, and sat on the floor. She raised her head to look at the dark sky outside the captain's cabin and pinched her lips with her right thumb and index finger. She whistled a melodious tune. It was a gentle, sweet, and sad melody that could calm people down. As the melody echoed, water beads fell from Bernadette's face and dripped onto the floor. After an unknown period of time, the captain's cabin was filled with a suppressed whimper. "Daddy." Chapter 1307. 1307 Meeting. 1307 Meeting in the middle of the primitive island, in the Black Emperor Mausoleum. After sending away Bernadette, Roselle didn't immediately fall into a deep sleep. He slowly raised his head and looked up once again into the infinite distance. Above the gray fog, Klein sighed silently. He put down the staff of the stars and grabbed a paper figurine before shaking it. With a smacking sound, the paper figurine rapidly thickened and expanded before flying into the translucent vortex formed from illusory, mysterious symbols beside the fool's chair. Although Bernadette had already moved to the edge of the primitive island, and Klein could no longer see the situation inside the Black Emperor Mausoleum through the prayer light. However, he could use the symbol of the Fool that had merged with Roselle's figure to maintain a connection with the Emperor up to a certain extent. After the paper figurine passed through the slowly spinning vortex, it descended into the dim mausoleum, which had an unknown light source. It then turned into a human in front of the central platform. This human's black hair and brown eyes were somewhat similar to Gehrman Sparrow's, but he didn't have clear-cut features. The lines weren't deep enough, and his bearing wasn't cold enough. There were also certain differences in his facial features. His chin and stomach had a small amount of fat induced by an indulgent society. It was Klein's original appearance as Zhou Mingrui, the Zhou Mingrui who had been hanging inside Sapphira Castle for thousands of years beside Roselle Huang Tao Gustav. Roselle wasn't surprised by his appearance. With one hand on the armrest, he leaned forward slightly and said, "You're here." "I'm here." Klein nodded indiscernibly. "You shouldn't be here." Roselle sighed. "I'm already here." Klein very naturally participated in completing the meme populated by a popular Chinese novel by Gu Long. Having completely confirmed the origins of the fellow in front of him, Roselle returned to his normal sitting posture, chuckling as he said, "I originally planned on asking where you're from to see there's any need for regional discrimination. But after some thought, there's no need for that. We're all anachronistic, miserable wretches without a home." Without waiting for Klein's reply, the Emperor's voice sank as he asked, "You know the truth about the apocalypse?" "Yes." Klein nodded slightly. Roselle continued asking, "You know that this is Earth?" "Yes," Klein answered frankly. When Roselle heard that, he laughed self-deprecatingly. "You actually learned about it so early. I only dared to confirm it after I went to the moon and saw the true appearance of this planet from high above." At this point, the Emperor sighed and said, "The moon is bizarre. I clearly felt terror, but I didn't even consider the possibility of being corrupted. Then, I became more and more extreme. However, I did occasionally gain a certain level of clarity from the views of people around me, but I didn't dare to write it in the diary in that state. I was afraid of exposing secrets and losing my final chance. I eventually decided to use all the groundwork I did previously to switch to the Black Emperor pathway. Apart from the impending apocalypse with sequence zeros being the only ones capable of protecting the people they wish to protect, they can hide them in other planets in the vast universe and use the corresponding authorities to rebuild a set of order for humans to survive in desolate lands. I also saw the hope of escaping my corruption by using the Black Emperor's ability to resurrect. As long as I became a sequence zero Black Emperor and was truly killed after turning half crazy, I'd have the chance of resurrecting in the mausoleum or in the astral world. When that happened, what would return to me would be a pure uniqueness and 3 sequence 1 beyonder characteristics. I wouldn't be tainted at all, nor will I contain an uncontrollable madness. Speaking of which, I made use of the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery to a certain extent back then. But the horror of the great old ones far exceeded my imagination. Accompanying my revival was a new life of corruption. Perhaps only great old ones can resist great old ones. I could only terminate the revival process and live such an ignoble existence in my final mausoleum to prevent the great old one from using my body to be born in the real world. That would have brought about a devastating disaster. Klein had long guessed Emperor Rozel's condition based on what he knew and what had just happened. He wasn't surprised at all as he calmly replied, "The one who corrupted you is called the Mother Goddess of Depravity. She has bewitched many believers as the embodiment of the primordial moon." The facial features that appeared faintly on Rozel's face immediately changed. He fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "I know the primordial moon, but I didn't know that her true honorific name is the Mother Goddess of Depravity. Now that I think about it, my discovery of Mr. Door's cry for help might not have been a coincidence." Upon hearing this, Klein was alarmed. He instantly recalled the situations happening off-island. He had some sort of premonition about what Emperor Rozel was about to say. Rozel laughed and sighed. "The biggest problem in the first half of my life was that I was too confident. I always had the feeling that I could reload a save file and redo things. I didn't pay enough attention to the details. Back then, Grimm was corrupted by the strange powers on this island. He returned here after dying and regained new life. Isn't this the influence of the primordial moon? After I finished all sorts of investigations and did the corresponding purifications, I felt that I was fine. But in fact, fate might have undergone a tiny change at that moment. This resulted in me encountering Mr. Door later and was slowly guided to the moon by him. You can't blame Mr. Door. His condition might be worse than mine. Does the Emperor mean that he has been targeted by the Mother Goddess of Depravity the moment he discovered this primitive island?" Klein sighed. At that time, who would have thought that the problem would be so serious? Before Sequence 2, understanding the cosmos and the great old ones led to terrifying corruption. And without understanding it, one wouldn't be able to accurately determine how serious the problem or what kind of patchwork was needed subsequently when faced with certain situations. This made Rozel treat this primitive island as his secret base, thus not informing existences that had the right to understand the outer deities, great old ones, and cosmos. That's right. Rozel seemed to be very gratified that he had committed a mistake that almost anyone would make. He then said, "In that ancient and secretive organization, there was almost no mention of the great old ones or outer deities." At that moment, Rozel paused for a moment before saying, "You should have read my diary. You should know what the ancient and hidden organization represents." Klein nodded. "I know which organization it is referring to. I never expected that you wouldn't dare mention the name of his organization after having the level of a sequence 0. I have a nagging feeling that he isn't simple. He might have an understanding of the outer deities that far exceeds our imagination, so it's better to be more careful. After all, I'm not a complete sequence 0 true god." After Rozel said this simple sentence, his brows suddenly furrowed. "How much of my diary did you read?" If the atmosphere wasn't that heavy and sorrowful, Klein would definitely find it irresistible to reply with "The taste of a demoness ain't bad," as a way to tease his fellow earthling. Finally, he replied calmly, "Plenty." After saying the word, he casually added, "I even found a few cards of blasphemy." "Which ones?" Rozel blurted out. Klein controlled the paper figurine's expression from above the gray fog and said in a flat tone, "Black Emperor, Tyrant, Red Priest, and the Fool." "Phew." Rozel exhaled as the faint crease on his brows eased. "Thankfully, it's not the demoness, the moon, and the mother card. You had to mention it yourself." Klein didn't respond as he looked at the Emperor without a change in expression. After Rozel said that, he realized something and hurriedly coughed. "Well, we've all watched live streams, so you should know very well how normal it is to cross-dress." As he spoke, he coughed again and sighed. "Which pathway are you from?" "Seer," Klein replied succinctly. Rozel immediately fell silent. After a few seconds, he said, "Unfortunately, If everything is fine and dandy, you should be responsible for pulling out a large-screen television and a game console from the historical void. We can chat while playing. That's a romantic dream of us men. Unfortunately, there's no electricity. I have to rely on you to invent it. Klein didn't voice out his thoughts. He maintained his tone and said, I hope such a day will come. Then, he pulled the topic back on track. I'm very curious why the card of blasphemy you created can't even be found by deities. Such a level of anti-divination and anti-prophecy is amazing. Roselle immediately chuckled. It's because knowledge can bring power, and power can also bestow knowledge. This is the authority of a knowledge emperor. After I infused the potion formula of the 22 pathways with power, they naturally produced the convergence powers between beyonder characteristics. They also gained anti-divination and anti-prophecy effects to a certain extent. And then, as he spoke, Roselle suddenly paused, as though he had sensed something amiss. After 1 or 2 seconds, he said in an ethereal voice, the creation of the card of blasphemy was a year before I held the Black Emperor ritual. Back then, I had already suffered the corruption of the primordial moon, and I didn't have the corresponding realization most of the time. Why can the 22 cards not be found by deities? Upon hearing this question above the gray fog, Klein's heart tightened as he felt his scalp tingle again. Without waiting for his response from the paper figurine, Roselle's voice suddenly raised, bringing with it an indescribable fear. Don't gather the 22 cards. Be careful of the mother card. These 2 sentences echoed in the deep interior of the Black Emperor Mausoleum for a long time. 1. Something common in China. Instead of being racist, they look down on people from poorer regions. Chapter 1308, Goodbye. Above the gray fog, Klein's pupils instantly widened as he subconsciously looked down at the long modeled table in front of him. There were 4 cards of blasphemy with different patterns on the back. At that moment, he felt a little scared and relieved. He felt as though he had been wandering about on the edge of the abyss while blindfolded, but he never fell. If he had done his best to gather all the card of blasphemy, or had obtained the mother card, with the way how he liked to put the different cards in his body to obtain the corresponding levels and special characteristics, he might have already been corrupted by the mother goddess of depravity, or be pregnant with something. However, I'm not Roselle. Even if I have the mother card, I probably wouldn't have done so. Furthermore, in order to prevent the deities from finding it, cards of blasphemy are extremely difficult to gather. It's almost impossible to gather all of them. From the looks of it, this is a casual arrangement made by the mother goddess of depravity. If anyone were to unfortunately obtain the mother card, they would become one of the latent dangers in this world. Klein retracted his gaze and continued using his stand-in paper figurine substitutes to look at Roselle Gustav, who was sitting on the black iron seat. At that moment, Roselle raised his body slightly. His voice was sometimes low and sometimes high-pitched. Everything has godhood in them. The oldest one is still alive in everyone's bodies. Klein frowned slightly. He didn't know if the one speaking was Roselle or the crimson moon in his body. Not only did he have a certain level of understanding regarding such secrets, he had also personally experienced it before. Thus, he wasn't that horrified or panicked. He only recalled the teachings of the Aurora Order he had seen in the past. They promoted the belief that the Creator was omnipresent and existed in every living being's body. Therefore, all living beings had godhood. Once godhood reached a certain concentration, they could become an angel. And the current Orthodox deities are nothing more than slightly stronger angels. To ordinary people, as long as one was able to grasp that the essence of life was a spiritual travel, and tempered one's mind, strengthen one's spirit, and find their own godhood, as well as fuse with more godhoods, one would be able to escape their mortal coils and become an angel. Back then, I felt that a cult like the Aurora Order had a complete set of mysticism and religious canon, just like the Orthodox Churches, but now, I can interpret the truth underlying these words. From a certain point of view, it's true. The only problem is that after fusing with more godhoods, they might no longer be themselves. The true Creator actually placed the deepest secrets of this world into his teachings. Isn't he afraid that a believer might suddenly have an epiphany and learn of the underground corruption, eventually becoming a vessel for the oldest one's revival? This hangman really is a little crazy. He doesn't have much rationality most of the time. Klein mumbled inwardly as he waited for Roselle to say more. 2 to 3 seconds later, Roselle, who had been in a cycle of slumber and the obtaining of new life, sat back on his iron-black throne. He panted and didn't say a word. Klein then controlled the paper figurine to say, "Which of the words that you have just said should be trusted, and which one should I be wary of?" Roselle chortled. "Consider the answer yourself." Isn't that how you seers like to speak?" He didn't wait for Klein's reply as he continued. "When I created the pale death mask, I sensed something. The death of the fourth epoch might not have completely perished. He might have left a hidden trump card for being revived. It might involve the river of eternal darkness." Death will definitely not die so easily. With that said, Roselle looked at Klein, who stood at the foot of the platform. Indeed, only by choosing the seer, apprentice, or marauder pathway can a transmigrator enter Sapphire Castle. By the time I figured out this factor, it was already way too late. I don't know if you want to become a great old one or not, nor do I know if this requires a ritual. I can only tell you that this is definitely more dangerous than becoming a deity. Countless times more dangerous. Perhaps the existence who stored us and threw us back into the real world is waiting for you there. The only suggestion I can give you is to communicate with the genie of the magic wishing lamp before you make any attempts. Genie? Using the grudge between him and the celestial worthy to obtain certain assistance? Klein nodded slightly and said, okay. After hearing his answer, Roselle sighed and said with a smile, if you really can become a great old one, you can consider saving me. Only a great old one can resist a great old one. At this point, he fell silent for a moment before he slowed down his speech. If you can't completely free me from the corruption of the primordial moon after becoming a great old one, then remember to wipe my existence off the face of the world. Destroy this mausoleum, support the creation of a new Black Emperor, and prevent me from ever being revived. The light inside the mausoleum seemed to dim a little. Klein fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, I won't forget that. Roselle fell silent. After a few seconds, he laughed self-deprecatingly. Of course, before that, you should try to save me a few more times. Such a sense of humor didn't make Klein smile. Instead, it made his heart sink even more, making him unable to speak. Roselle didn't continue the topic as he recalled. My wife passed away a long time ago. The mistresses I once had definitely had their own endings. Towards them, I feel very sorry. I've never truly loved them. I only coveted their looks and the pleasure they gave me. I don't have any illegitimate children. Towards such matters, a Beyonder is quite aware of that. As for the time before I became a Beyonder, I believe those ladies definitely coveted my looks and body to enjoy such pleasures. They won't leave any trouble for themselves. My eldest son, Seal, should be dead for years. I don't know how many descendants he left behind. My second son, Bornova, would definitely be an angel now if nothing unexpected happens. I have complicated feelings for him. On the one hand, I'm very detached, disappointed, and resentful, but on the other hand, I would occasionally secretly care about him. I remember how adorable he was when he was just born. You've already met my eldest daughter, Bernadette. Isn't she beautiful? She was pretty from a young age, obedient, and smart. She knew how to be filial to her old father, protect her younger brother, and dote on her mother. Sometimes, she acted especially righteous and appeared a little silly. There were several times when I secretly cheated while playing chess or games with her, but she didn't realize it. Such a temper made it difficult for her to accept what I did later. Of course, now, I can just push the blame onto the primordial moon. It's all because of her corruption. I'm rather grateful for her on this point. I don't know what right I have to make a request. After all, I've never helped you before, nor do I have much of a relationship with you. It's just that we're from the same era and same place. The ties as a fellow earthling. Upon hearing that, Klein said in a deep voice, your diary gave me plenty of help. It allowed me to grasp a lot of high-level knowledge when I was weak, allowing me to avoid many dangers and know how to direct my efforts in a targeted manner. Also, those cards of blasphemy have shown their use at different stages. Can you not mention the diary? Roselle coughed lightly and said, however, in the later stages, I was indeed consciously leaving a message to the next transmigrator. The only thing I couldn't be sure of is which language you know. The Emperor slowly exhaled before saying, my request is to help me look after Bernadette. When she needs help, provide her some help. Although she is about to become an important figure in the mysterious world, I still can't feel at ease as a father. Without any hesitation, Klein got the paper figurine to answer directly. I'll take care of her for you. Man, why does this sound a little awkward? Roselle's tone instantly turned odd. By the way, I haven't asked for your name. As for me, you should know very well that I'm Huang Tao. Zhou Mingrui, Klein answered frankly. Are you married? Do you have children? How old are you? Roselle raised 3 questions in one go. Emperor, why are you acting like a gossipy middle-aged woman from next door? Klein shook his head and gave a simple answer. No, Roselle immediately fell silent. After a moment, he said, you and I are of the same generation. Bernadette should call you Uncle Zhou. Yes. As he spoke, Roselle's tone suddenly became filled with pity. After coming to this era, I treated everything as a game in the beginning. I was having a great time playing, but I would occasionally recall my home, remembering the past where I cultivated most of my personality and hobbies. The longer I lived, the higher the frequency I felt this feeling. It's like the fallen leaves will always want to return to the roots of a tree. However, at the very least, I have a daughter, a wife, and 2 sons. There are still many things in this world that I'm worried about, and some sense of belonging to a certain extent. As for you, I can feel your loneliness. the loneliness that comes from deep within your bones. Upon saying that, Roselle suddenly sighed. If only we were still living in that era. I'll go to work punctually every day and work overtime from time to time. Whenever I'm free, I'll visit my daughter's extracurricular lessons, pick her up, bring her home stuff my wife constantly reminds me about. Every weekend, we'll either head out for some fun or head to my parents' place to accompany them. When one day I'm exhausted from life, I'll use an excuse that you as my friend are treating me. As men, we can sit by the street and eat some skewers, drink some alcohol, brag, curse our superiors, reminisce about the days of our youth, and urge you to quickly find a girlfriend. When I wake up the next day, I'll be able to have the zeal to continue facing life again. Klein listened quietly without interrupting the Emperor's prattle. Roselle's voice gradually lowered as he smiled. Goodbye, my friend. I hope we can really meet again one day. His figure quickly turned illusory, as though he had disappeared from the world, leaving only a faint shadow hovering over the iron-black throne. Roselle Gustave had returned to his eternal slumber. Chapter 1309, 1309 Additional Lessons. 1309 Additional Lessons. After circling the primitive island 3 times, the dawn finally made its way off into the distance, which was perennially covered in storms. Bernadette slowly retracted her gaze and fixed it on the sage frontlet that remained suspended in the air. As a clairvoyant, she clearly saw the opportunity to advance. She knew that she had completed the corresponding ritual, preventing a disaster that involved a higher order of power. However, the price she paid was to personally seal her father, the father she had missed and sought for more than 100 years. How ironic. Bernadette looked at the vertical eye embedded with diamonds and sighed softly. After leaving Intis, she had 2 big wishes. First, she wanted to investigate the truth behind the matter and see if she had misunderstood her father. Second, she wanted to follow her father's footsteps and see if there was a possibility of reviving him. Bernadette had already fulfilled her first wish. The truth was that she had indeed misunderstood her father. This curtailed her pain and conflicted feelings. Her hatred for her father had completely dissipated, but it also added to her guilt. With this kind of guilt and yearning all this time, she tried her best to fulfill her second wish, but the outcome wasn't pleasant. If there hadn't been any hope from the beginning, she might not have had such a huge reaction. However, she had clearly seen the light and seen her father, but she had no choice but to personally place him into a state of slumber. After a moment of silence, Bernadette's slightly unfocused eyes became clear again. She no longer hesitated and no longer blamed herself. She no longer had all kinds of negative emotions. She firmly raised her right hand and drew out ancient words that shimmered with a stellar radiance in the void. She summoned the spirit world creature who was half man, half wind, and she retrieved the sage supplementary ingredients from it. As for the rest, as there was no need for them to be specially preserved, they were in the collection room of the dawn. Not long after, Bernadette used pale death to shatter the sage frontlet. She concocted the potion that could allow her to advance to sequence 2. Looking at the bubbling sage potion with each bubble containing a transparent eye, Bernadette firmly raised her right hand and brought the glass bottle to her mouth. She knew that what she needed at this moment wasn't sorrow, nor corny emotions, but determination and the will to forge forward. This was because if she wanted to help her father, Emperor Roselle, escape the corruption and completely revive, she needed a higher sequence and greater strength. Because of this, she was willing to bury the pain in the deepest part of her heart and not let it affect her mental state. It was only when there was no one around at night that she could retrieve it and savor it alone. With the sage potion entering her mouth, Bernadette's body turned illusory at a discernible pace. She broke down into thick and complicated knowledge, changing into an existence that was a flux of information. The entire dawn, as well as the surrounding winds, storms, lightning, seawater, and waves, all lost their sense of reality. It was as though they had been restored to the most fundamental blocks of information. For most of Sequence 3 Beyonders of the Mystery Prior Pathway, such a state was extremely dangerous. If one's willpower wasn't strong enough, their luck wasn't good enough, and they weren't prepared enough, the knowledge that they had transformed into would be infiltrated by all kinds of information within seconds. They would be washed away, assimilated, and thus quickly lose consciousness. They wouldn't be able to reassemble their bodies, turning into a very strange and difficult monster to deal with in mysticism. A knowledge demon. This was also known as an information creature. Bernadette had relied on the sage frontlet and had previously transformed into a flux of information on several occasions. Although it was limited to 2 to 3 seconds and didn't last too long, it was still considered experience. At that moment, she tried her best to maintain her consciousness and establish a connection with the information produced in the spirit world by preventing a high-level disaster. The information had a clear imprint belonging to her, and it involved a very high level of power. It was exceptionally solid and couldn't be dispersed by other information for short periods of time. It helped her to stabilize her consciousness and slowly gather the dissipating flux of information around her body. During this process, Klein, who was above the gray fog, tapped the edge of the long, mottled table with the help of the prayer light. He used a miracle invoker's ability of changing the probability of certain developments and actions to a certain extent, and he bestowed Bernadette with a certain amount of good luck. Time ticked by. There were several times when Bernadette wavered on the border of losing consciousness, but in the end, she managed to tide through it. She gathered all the information that belonged to her and began to reconstruct her body. At that moment, she gradually felt the concerned Admiral of Stars Katlia had for her. She felt the members of the Element Dawn and her crew making their daily prayers. This stabilized her condition better, allowing her to resist the ancient will that was slowly developing in her body. At this moment, a series of secret information came from nowhere. Taking the opportunity while Bernadette was reforming her body, it attempted to fuse with her. This was interference from the hidden sage. As an embodiment of this world's knowledge and information, as a quasi-sequence zero existence of the mystery prior pathway, the hidden sage had a certain influence on beyonders of a lower sequencer than him. Without giving Bernadette the chance to use the pale white mask, the curtain, draped over Klein, gently rose. Space-time distorted around Bernadette, completely isolating her from the outside world. Even information couldn't be interchanged. Grabbing this sudden moment of peace, Bernadette completely reassembled her body and used her own anchors to balance out the terrifying will that was surfacing in her body. At that moment, she had truly become a she. A Sequence 2 angel of the mystery prior pathway, an important figure in the mysterious world that could be addressed as a secret existence. Right on the heels of that, she saw the distorted space around her return to normal. She saw a series of hidden information surging towards her. She stretched out her right hand and grabbed the information with ease, extracting the useful information contained within. Just as Bernadette was about to return to reality from the spirit world, an orange light suddenly bloomed in front of her eyes. The light instantly condensed into a fat elder with a short white beard. The elder smiled and said, "Ma'am, I'm Orange Light Hilarion." Orange Light. Bernadette was puzzled. She didn't understand why Orange Light Hilarion had suddenly appeared in front of her. They hadn't interacted much before. As the leader of the Element Dawn and a former mysticologist, she wasn't unfamiliar with the 7 lights of the spirit world. She even knew how to pray to 7 lights, as well as the ritual needed to receive the corresponding advice. She knew that the 7 lustrous lights were a symbol of the spirit world, and they contained endless knowledge of different domains. They were definitely at the angel level. Orange Light Hilarion added with a smile. "A great existence wants me to inform you of the knowledge regarding the great old ones, the outer deities, and the cosmos, so that you have a relatively accurate grasp of the state of this world and the corresponding corruption." "Which existence is it?" Bernadette asked, puzzled and cautious. She had vaguely guessed the answer, but she still found it quite unbelievable. After all, the 7 lights in the spirit world were also important figures in the mysterious world. Even if a Sequence 0 true God wouldn't find it easy to get them to do their bidding. Orange Light Hilarion chuckled and replied, "The greater ruler above the spirit world. The great ruler above the spirit world." Bernadette repeated the honorific name, and her thoughts raced. Hilarion glanced at her and smiled. "He also has another title, Mr. Fool." Somewhere out at sea, the future which was cruising on a safe sea route, Katlia suddenly jolted awake from her dream as her forehead was covered in cold sweat. In the dream just now, she saw the queen lying on the ground drenched in blood. Her chest was torn open, and a baby-like monster crawled out of it. As a mysticologist who had advanced with a drop of the snake of fate's blood, Katlia believed that her dream wasn't without any reason. It was definitely a premonition. It was obvious that the dream she had wasn't pleasant. While feeling uneasy, Katlia sat up and put on her cloak. She attempted to pray to Mr. Fool, hoping that this mighty existence would give her some hints or to protect the queen. Soon, a scene appeared before her eyes. Queen Mystic Bernadette walked out of the spirit world and returned to dawn, allowing the ship to gradually distance itself from the nameless island. Katlia immediately heaved a sigh of relief and sincerely thanked Mr. Fool. After finishing her prayer, she opened the window of the captain's cabin in joy, causing starlight to condense into a long bridge that reached the deck. She put on her heavy glasses and walked along the resplendent bridge of starlight to the deck, where she proceeded to stroll leisurely in the quiet night. When she arrived at the bow of the ship, Katlia saw Frank Lee tinkering with bottles. "What are you doing?" Katlia subconsciously frowned. Frank looked up and said with a bright smile, "My ideas encountered a setback, so I can't proceed any further for now. I asked Nina to get me some soil from the bottom of the sea to study the microbes in it." With that said, Frank said with a look of anticipation, "When I have my next vacation, I'd like to go to the depths of the North Sea or the poles where it's a world of ice and snow. There might be many ancient microorganisms buried beneath the thick layer of ice there, from the fourth epoch, the third epoch, or even the second and first epoch. This will bring me plenty. You won't have any vacations for the time being, Catlia said inwardly. Klein conjured a box and placed the 4 cards of blasphemy inside. After sealing them, he immediately returned to the real world and headed for the nearest Evernight cathedral. He planned on informing the Evernight goddess in the form of a prayer of the hidden dangers of the card of blasphemy, reminding her to pay attention to such problems. He didn't want the Earth Mother, Lilith, to obtain the Mother card or the Moon card. Chapter 1310 Envoy. The prayer hall in the Evernight Cathedral was as dark as before. Only the holes on the walls allowed some light to seep in, like stars in the night. Klein sat in a corner that wasn't eye-catching. He took off his tall hat and began praying like a pious member of the congregation. He simply mentioned how Roselle had revived in his last mausoleum and focused on the corruption of the primordial moon. He deliberately emphasized that, in order to prevent the crimson moon within him from being born in the real world, Roselle had chosen to terminate the process of having his Black Emperor uniqueness and 3 sequence 1 characteristics returned to him. At the end of the prayer, Klein pointed out the hidden dangers of the cards of blasphemy, and he expressed his concerns about the whereabouts of the Mother card and the Moon card. In fact, Roselle only mentioned the need to be careful of the Mother card and didn't mention the Moon. However, Klein knew that the 2 pathways of Earth and Moon belonged to the Mother goddess of depravity. Therefore, to be cautious, he specially added the Moon card. This was also the main reason he was worried about Earth Mother Lilith. Compared to most of the 22 pathways, the high-sequence Beyonders of the Planter and Moon pathway had a huge advantage. That was that they didn't need to worry about the primordial one from awakening in their bodies. They didn't need to worry about dissociation from approaching the world underground. This was because the Beyonder characteristics they possessed didn't directly come from the primordial one, which led to no corresponding mental imprint. However, if they were to directly go underground and enter the Chaos Sea, no matter who it was, they would encounter corruption. It was just that the extent would be different. This advantage was very likely due to the fact that the sanguine ancestor Lilith was more special than the other ancient gods. After all, she didn't need to divert a large part of her energy to resist the will of the primordial one awakening within her. And back then, the invisible barrier protecting this world was still sufficiently sturdy, separating the Mother Goddess of Depravity and the other great old ones from Earth, making it difficult for them to exert too much of an influence on the situation inside. But with the passage of time, this advantage gradually became a problem. As the underground corruption became weaker and weaker, the invisible barrier also became weaker and cracks began appearing. Under such circumstances, Earth Mother Lilith's situation became worse. This was because she was facing the intrusion of the Mother Goddess of Depravity that was ever increasing in potency and terror. In this aspect, the original creator, the oldest one, who was dead, was definitely inferior to the living Mother Goddess of Depravity. Considering how outer deities who had transcended sequences had an influence on Beyonders from their own pathway, Klein felt that he couldn't afford negligence on such matters. After he finished his prayer, he waited for nearly 5 minutes. After confirming that there was no response, he stood up, put on his wandering magician's tall hat, and walked out of the cathedral that belonged to the Evernight. To him, this was mainly a disclosure obligation. As for what the Evernight goddess planned to do with it, or if she would remind him of certain matters, it was beyond his control. In short, Klein could only temporarily believe that the Evernight goddess knew the relative importance of matters. Backlund, at the Harvest Church south of the bridge. The top-hatted Emlyn White got off his carriage and looked at the sun covered by the clouds and mist. On the way to the entrance of the cathedral, he gently rotated the ring on his left hand, as if to flaunt his identity. The ring was semi-translucent in color, as though it was made from light red amber. There was a blood-red gem embedded on its tip, a reward Emlyn had received a long time ago, Lilith's ring. After becoming a demigod, Emlyn could suppress the effect of bloodthirst from the ring to a certain extent. Every day, he only needed to drink 3 bottles of human blood to be immune to the corresponding negative effects. Therefore, in order to showcase his special identity as the ancestors blessed, he began wearing this ring permanently. After entering the Harvest Church, Emlyn automatically removed his top hat. At this moment, Cosme, Ernst, and the other sanguine in Backlund, who were waiting for Bishop Utravsky, stood up one after another. Looking down at the aisle, they greeted softly, "Good morning, my lord." Emlyn looked ahead and nodded indiscernibly. "Is Mistral still not here yet?" "Count Mistral set up a chapel at home," Ernst simply explained. Emlyn didn't comment on this. He walked forward and casually said, "He will still have to come when Mass is held." He looked around before saying, "Where's Bishop Utravsky?" "The bishop is waiting for you behind. The church's envoy has arrived." Ernst controlled his facial expression as he answered Emlyn's question politely. The church's envoy. Emlyn rotated the light red ring on his left hand and walked to the back of the cathedral. Soon, he saw Father Yutravsky and the slightly curly black-haired envoy the church with a tall nose and deep eyes. This is the Archbishop, His Grace Loretto. Father Yutravsky introduced the envoy to Emlyn. He stood by the window, blocking most of the light. Good morning, Your Grace. Emlyn replied with the etiquette of the Church of Earth. Loretto smiled and spoke in rather awkward Loanese. There's no need to address me as Your Grace. Although you aren't an archbishop, you have the status of an archbishop. From today onwards, you will be a hierophant, a high-ranking deacon of the church. You will be in charge of the sanguine matters in Backlund. Without giving Emlyn any time to digest this information, Loretto continued. I came to Backlund under the Holy See's orders. I'll tell you everything that needs to be taken note of within the church. Please speak. Emlyn suppressed his glee and said politely. Loretto's expression immediately turned serious. First of all, the most important point is that, be it the clergymen of the church or the believers of the Earth Mother, as long as you claim that you have obtained a revelation, they are individuals who have been enticed by demons, with no exceptions. If anyone reports something like this to you, or if you have obtained a revelation personally, please inform Bishop Yutravsky as soon as possible and report it to the church. Father Yutravsky didn't mention this before. This request sounds very strange, as though there's some suspicion. Emlyn frowned as he looked at Father Yutravsky, who was standing by the window. The bishop never said anything about taking note of such matters. Before he finished his sentence, Emlyn suddenly realized that he came off as criticizing Bishop Yutravsky, but he couldn't find any better explanation in his haste. Almost at the same time, he understood what was odd about what Archbishop Loretto had said. This was telling everyone that the Earth Mother you sensed isn't the real Earth Mother. This is saying that a large number of the revelations us sanguine received from the ancestor are fake. It's from demons or evil gods. The look in Emlyn's eyes sank as he tried to maintain his composure. At this moment, Loretto didn't mind and smiled. Bishop Yutravsky didn't tell you because he didn't know either. Father didn't know. In that instant, Emlyn actually felt a little sympathetic towards Bishop Yutravsky. He felt that as a Phasacian, a hierophant who had changed faith in his later years, he had been ostracized by the other members of the Church of Earth. Sensing the change in his gaze, Loretto added, that's because he's a blessed. He doesn't need to care about the temptation of demons and evil gods. Bishop Yutravsky nodded and said calmly, the revelations of Earth Mother are in her Holy Bible, in those lines of teaching. Anything other than that is heresy. Emlyn was somewhat puzzled, but he couldn't think of any question. He grunted and said to Loretto, then what is the second point that needs paying attention? Loretto made his expression turn serious. If you receive a revelation, don't blindly believe it. Please immediately seek confirmation from Bishop Yutravsky. Why? Emlyn was puzzled. This was basically telling him that the only response he would receive was either from evil gods or demons. Loretto deliberated over his words and explained in detail. In this world, there are many evil existences. They will pretend to be deities and bewitch the clergyman in an act of enticing believers. That's because the two main pathways of the Church of Earth Mother are related to life. Therefore, the effects they receive are more severe than the other churches. From time to time, there are people who will take the wrong path and attempt forbidden life experiments, thus slowly degenerating. In order to prevent such a development, we reorganized the church a long time ago under the guidance of the Mother's will to establish the system of a favored and blessed. Favored and blessed. Emlyn's understanding of the Church of Earth was limited to the Holy Bible and part of the Scriptures. He was momentarily at a loss. He had never taken the initiative to ask Father Yutravsky about the Church of Earth Mother. Loretto glanced at Emlyn and nodded slightly. The favored are clergymen who have won the Mother's favor and are from the two pathways of Earth and Moon. The blessed refers to people who have obtained the Mother's blessing and are from other pathways. The latter is less affected by the demons and evil gods. It can help us verify the authenticity of the revelations. Under such circumstances, even if it's a decree issued by the Holy See, there has to be at least a second-in-command favored. Otherwise, it can be regarded as null and void. As he spoke, Loretto took out a document and unfolded it in front of Emlyn. Apart from what the Archbishop had just said, it included the details of him accepting the mission and appointment as an envoy. At the end of the document, there were a few names. The first was from the Holy See of the Church of Earth, Matriarch Roland, and the rest were all names that Emlyn didn't know. He barely recognized the last one to be Father Yutravsky. Father Yutravsky's handwriting is really ugly. As Emlyn mumbled to himself, he began to have a strong sense of doubt regarding the blessed and favored system. Why were the blessed less enticed by evil gods or demons? Why were they able to verify a revelation, but the favored couldn't? As his thoughts raced, Emlyn suddenly noticed a detail. The blessed aren't from the two pathways of earth and moon. Therefore, the problem didn't lie in the favored, but the two pathways themselves? Emlyn vaguely felt that his guess was the truth. Chapter 13:11, New Mission. Emlyn vaguely sensed that there might be some abnormalities in the two beyonder pathways of earth and moon, but he didn't ask Archbishop Loretto about it directly. He doesn't seem like he would answer. It's better to wait for the next tarot gathering to ask the world, the hanged man, and the others. Emlyn nodded indiscernibly, indicating that he already knew the difference between a favored and a blessed, as he muttered to himself. He didn't consider seeking Mr. Fool's answer, because he felt that there was no need since the corresponding problem wasn't too important. After all, the sanguines dukes, marquises, and counts were still alive and well, and there hadn't been any particularly negative news regarding the Church of Earth Mother. At the same time, his previous guess also made Emlyn connect these to the influence the primordial moon, an existence which was perhaps an evil god or a high-level devil in disguise, had on the moon pathway. He had once caused many sanguine who had prayed to him to lose control, turning into monsters that only knew how to mate and reproduce. Emlyn suspected that this was one of the evil existences that sent the fake visions and revelations. With no more questions from him, Loretto put away the document in his hand and thought for a moment before saying, "This is the problem that requires special attention. In addition, I hope that you can set up 3 to 5 Beyonder teams in Backland. They should mainly be members of the Sanguine." Emlyn was always law-abiding. The only crime he did was steal blood at the hospital. He subconsciously raised his question, "Does the Church of Evernight and the Church of Storms have any objections?" Loretto said with a benevolent smile. This was a request from them. As most of the forces of the Church of Steam have withdrawn, there is a lack of official Beyonders in Lone. Although the Church of Evernight and the Church of Storms have also recruited a group of machinery hive mind members who don't wish to leave Lone, and the lower-ranking clergymen, they are ultimately just a minority. Furthermore, they still need to handle the Purge and Faceac and the independent colonies overseas. Therefore, they hope that they can provide some help. This is quite beneficial for our proselytizing in Lone. However, you have to remember that, here, we have to restrain ourselves. We can't freely proselytize. Just be on the same level as the remnant Church of Steam. Of course, our believers won't be able to catch up to the Church of Steam for a long period of time. This requires a generation, 2 generations, or even 3 generations of effort. Yes, maintaining the present scale and having a certain degree of development is enough. It's too troublesome to proselytize. Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief and calmly replied, "Okay." In the Sonia Sea, City of Generosity, Biome, Alger wore a bishop's robe embroidered with symbols of lightning and waves. He wore a metal storm's sacred emblem and stood at the peak of the coastal mountain range, looking out at the other side of the forest. There were very few trees there. The surrounding hills and short mountains had been flattened, revealing a hidden harbor. It was a private harbor that belonged to the resistance. It was definitely not comparable to Biome's port, but it was of medium size, enough to sustain many people's lives. A city with an unconstrained and crude style had been built near the harbor. The city wasn't huge, probably only 1/5 the size of Biome or smaller. In the center were 2 towers. One was a spire, the other steeple. They were all strangely silver, reflecting blinding light under the sun. Surrounding the twin towers were many paved roads made of cement. They led to buildings that were mainly made of stone or were connected to open squares and training grounds. The green trees lining the sides of the street exuded a feeling of grandeur. Alger knew that the city didn't only consist of residents from the City of Silver, but also people from Moon City. Many of the latter were extremely deformed. They were temporarily unwilling to interact with Biome, as well as the residents of the other cities on the island. They only purchased their necessities through the people of the City of Silver. It was said that they planned on building a city that belonged to them deep in the forest and would only leave a path to the new City of Silver. These are all believers of Mr. Fool. I'll have to slowly integrate them into the entirety of the Rorstad archipelago. For now, I'll temporarily not disturb the deformed and allow the residents of the City of Silver to bring normal-looking Moon City residents to Biome. Alger seriously considered his subsequent actions. After settling down the residents of the City of Silver and Moon City, he had actually completed the mission that Mr. Fool had given him. However, he believed that he was still far from being able to exchange for Sea God's identity, authority, and status. Therefore, he did his best to deal with the problems left behind by the Great Migration. To be frank, Alger was most worried that Mr. Fool didn't give him anything to do. If that happened, he didn't know how long it would take for him to make enough contributions. Accompanying the new City of Silver's establishment and the immense vibrancy it exuded, he acutely sensed danger. There was more than one sequence for demigod in the City of Silver and Moon City, and they were Mr. Fool's loyal believers. Perhaps, Mr. Fool would one day bestow the identity, status, authority, and power of Sea God to one of them. There are 2 Grade 0 sealed artifacts in the City of Silver, a Sequence 3 Saint, 3 Sequence 4 Saints, and nearly 10 Grade 1 sealed artifacts, as well as a few demigod beyonder characteristics that can temporarily be used as Grade 1 sealed artifacts. There are 3 demigods in Moon City, 5 Grade 1 sealed artifacts, and a large number of potion formulas. Alger only made a slight calculation before realizing that the 2 factions that came under Mr. Fool were a little terrifying. All of them combined was equivalent to a quarter of the Church of Storms. According to what Alger knew, the number of Grade 0 sealed artifacts each church had numbered between 5 to 8. There were fewer than 4 grounded angels active at present. In this aspect, they were indeed much stronger than the combined Moon City and City of Silver. However, the Orthodox churches had no advantage in numbers when it came to Grade 1 sealed artifacts and saints, especially the latter. Due to an all-out war, with the brass increasing the number of saints by nurturing them, the Church of Storms only had around 20 saints. The Church of the Sea God doesn't have a demigod yet, but it won't be long before a new sea god will appear. As for the angels under Mr. Fool, there's the World, the Death Council, and the Angel of the Fate Pathway. There are the saints from our tarot club. The more Alger thought about it, the more alarmed he became. He realized that he was a little slow in this aspect. Perhaps it was because he couldn't extricate himself to take an objective look at things, and although he had always been amazed by such matters, he finally came to a clear realization today. Unknowingly, Mr. Fool's faction had already developed to a level that was comparable to an Orthodox church. Even if there was a certain gap, it was only due to the lack of accumulation that needed to span across years. And it hadn't even been 3 years since Alger joined the tarot club. If I hadn't experienced all these changes myself, I definitely wouldn't have believed it. Alger sighed inwardly as he fervently wished to do something for Mr. Fool so that he could quickly accumulate the contributions needed to transform into Sea God. When that happened, he could truly cast his gaze towards the Book of Calamity and attempt to complete the request of the Elven Queen, Kohinum. Retracting his gaze, Alger glanced at Biome at the foot of the mountain. He saw that this city, which hadn't suffered any serious damage in the war, had once again lit up. It could also be called the most prosperous city in the Sonia Sea. At that moment, the priests, bishops, and believers of the Church of the Lord of Storms were cooperating with the new government civil servants and the Church of Sea God to build schools and hospitals to the children in the slums and the natives with no financial capacity that would provide education, medical treatment, and assistance. As Alger watched the people walking along the streets like ants and the colorful buildings that were different from the vast majority of Lone, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly before he wiped away his smile. He narrowed his eyes, unsure what he was experiencing or enjoying. At that moment, a grayish-white fog suddenly appeared in front of him. Following that, he saw the ancient palace and blurry figure in the middle of the fog. He heard Mr. Fool's words, a mission, monitor a man named Verdu Garcia. Along with the revelation, plenty of miscellaneous information rained down and drilled into Alger's mind, allowing him to know the exact situation of Verdu Garcia. He was a member of the Abraham family that had concealed his identity. He had recently left Desi County and had come to the Rorstad archipelago. Alger was thrilled. He bowed his head respectfully in response. By your will. Klein knew that Verdu Garcia Abraham had left the northern continent and was heading to the Rorstad archipelago, as Dorian Gray had mentioned this when he prayed. He knew very well that the person named Verdu yearned to save Mr. Dor so that the King of Angels could return to the real world. The reason why Klein had gotten Miss Magician to inform the Abraham family of one of the rituals that helped Mr. Dor escape was because the trust between the two parties was insufficient. If he were to hide it or lie by saying that an angel needed to be hunted for the ritual, the Abraham family would definitely suspect first and make her continue contacting Mr. Dor and try to confirm it through other means. Once they discovered anything, Klein would lose control of the Abraham family, preventing him from nipping the problem in the bud. If it had been a few years ago, Klein wouldn't have been too worried about such problems. However, as the apocalypse approached, the infiltration of the outer deities would only increase. It was possible that a member of the Abraham family would come into contact with a corresponding item or believer and obtain the correct ritual. Therefore, Klein believed that the ritual that was extremely difficult to complete could be used to effectively gain the trust of the Abrahams, allowing them to deepen their faith in Mr. Fool and become more devout. Then, he could monitor the extreme ones among the devout and grasp their trajectories, and interfere with them in time. Chapter 1312, 1312 Fully Automatic Wishing Machine. 1312 Fully Automatic Wishing Machine Mid-Seashore, Limon City. Jasmine wrapped a scarf around her face and exited the apartment. She had heard that the annual Limon Carnival had begun, so she wanted to visit it at the municipal square. Because of the war last year, the carnival hadn't been held. This had greatly disappointed Jasmine. After that, she suffered the greatest trauma in her life. From then on, She hid at home and didn't dare to go out. Perhaps it was because she had been confined at home for too long, one that was very cramped. Jasmine had been eager to go on the streets recently. She wanted to walk around just like she did in the past. As she turned her gaze, she saw her reflection in the large glass window by the side of the street. Her figure was pitch black without any other color. Her long dress reached her ankles, and the veil of her hat covered half of her face. From the bottom of her eyes to her neck, there was a scarf wrapped several times around her neck. Both of her hands were wearing a pair of knitted gloves. This was completely different from the cheerful and lively Jasmine in her memories. In the previous war, a cannonball had destroyed her original home and resulted in a fire. She suffered burns to the face, causing her body to be covered in wounds. If not for the fact that she was lucky enough, Jasmine would have died from the serious injuries. But even so, she felt like her life had ended from that very moment. Her nose had been burned away, leaving only 2 black holes. There were many traces left behind by the fire on her face, neck, and hands. If she were to walk in the dark, she would pass off for a devil perfectly. Jasmine clearly remembered one thing. On the first night of moving to this apartment, she had washed up in the public bathroom before sleeping. Just as she walked out of the door, she saw a youth walk over. The youth had also seen her. Under the crimson moonlight, the youth revealed an expression of extreme horror, as if he would jump up at any moment. He turned around and ran away. Finally, he controlled himself and took a few steps to the side, not daring to look at Jasmine's face again. This pierced through Jasmine's fragile heart. From that day onwards, she never left the house again. Even if she had to wash up, she would wait until it was late at night. In this aspect, she was very grateful to her parents because they didn't say a word. They did their best to maintain their lives, relying on their original savings and the work they later found to barely support the family. They didn't need Jasmine to work outside for a salary. After walking a distance, Jasmine saw the main venue of the carnival, Lemon City Municipal Square. There was a sea of heads and all kinds of reveling emotions. The enthusiastic atmosphere made Jasmine subconsciously stop in her tracks. She didn't dare approach, afraid that someone would notice that she was dressed strangely, afraid that she might accidentally drop her scarf. After hesitating for a few seconds, she finally stopped. She found a clean spot by the street and sat down. She stared intently at the municipal square. After an unknown period of time, Jasmine sensed someone beside her. It was a young man in a long black robe and a tall hat. He was like a magician from a circus. The municipal square is over there. Jasmine wanted to remind him, but after she quivered her lips a few times, she didn't part them. She didn't dare to speak to anyone. However, the young man took the initiative to walk over. He took off his hat and bowed slightly. "Miss, do you know what this machine is for?" "Machine?" Jasmine subconsciously looked up and dazedly followed the young man's gaze. Under the street lamp, a small wardrobe-like machine was sitting there at some point in time. Its surface was a brass color with a few transparent glass, gears, and bearings embedded in it. The components were exposed, looking very crude. Jasmine retracted her gaze and shook her head, indicating that she didn't know what the machine was. At the same time, this also expressed her intention to reject conversing. "It's called a fully automatic wishing machine," the young man introduced with a smile. "It's my invention. It can automatically fulfill the wish of someone who operates it. By the way, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Merlin Hermes, a wandering magician. Fully automatic wishing machine." Jasmine realized that she could understand every single word but failed to understand the combined name. "You can give it a try?" As the first user to experience it, it's free. Klein, who had taken on the identity of Merlin Hermes, said with a smile. Jasmine shook her head, refusing the conversation. Klein didn't give up. He looked at her and said, "For example, you can make a wish to be restored with your original looks." These words were like a sharp arrow that shot into Jasmine's heart. She stood up in shock and retreated hastily in an attempt to leave. She suspected that he had already seen her current appearance. "If you don't give it a try, how do you know that your wish won't come true?" "It's free," Klein said unhurriedly as he looked past her into the background. Jasmine gradually slowed down and finally stopped. If she could be restored with her original looks, even if she had to pay a huge sum of money, she would still be willing to do so. However, she knew that the wish in her heart couldn't be granted by money. "I don't have to pay anything. It's a free try. What if it comes true?" Jasmine's thoughts were in an upheaval, and she slowly turned around as if she was being enticed by a devil. "Really?" she asked in a hoarse voice. Klein pointed at the machine. "I can retreat 10 meters, and all you need to do is to turn the wrench on the machine. You don't have to remove your hat and scarf." The last sentence moved Jasmine into action as she quickly nodded and said, "Okay." Not long after Merlin retreated a certain distance, Jasmine moved closer to the machine, gingerly grasping the wrench on the door. She was actually very worried that this was part of a prank that involved pulling the wrench, such as being splashed by water. This was something that would happen every year during the carnival. She and her friends had often played such pranks on others, but compared to a wish that could be fulfilled, she felt that it was an acceptable risk. Even if it was proven that having her wish granted was impossible, it could still be treated as her experience at the carnival. Remember to make your wish before you turn it, Klein reminded her from not too far away. Jasmine collected her thoughts and silently voiced her wish. I want to return to my former self before the burns. With that, she turned the wrench nervously and expectantly. In the next second, the door to the fully automatic wishing machine opened. A normal wooden cane reached out and tapped Jasmine's forehead. What Jasmine didn't notice was a golden ring embedded with rubies that had appeared on her hand. When the wooden cane retracted back into the fully automatic wishing machine, the golden ring with the rubies disappeared as well. As the gears turned, Jasmine saw the machine's door slowly close. That's it, she thought blankly. She didn't experience the feeling of having her wish fulfilled, nor was she being pranked. Everything seemed so strange. Congratulations. Your wish has been granted. Klein walked back and clapped gently like a witness to a magical event. My wish has been granted. How is this possible? Just as this thought flashed through her mind, she suddenly felt something beneath her scarf. The spot where there were only 2 black holes left had been propped up. Jasmine slowly raised her hand and touched her face, clearly sensing the presence of her nose. And the quality of her breathing proved this point. She suddenly turned around, her back facing Merlin Hermes. She walked to a shop by the side of the street and cast her gaze at the glass window. Then, she removed the scarf, covering her face. Eyes that weren't big, a nose that wasn't too well defined, and her lips that weren't too full. The freckled face of a girl was reflected on the window. Jasmine subconsciously raised her hand and covered her mouth. Her eyes glistened. After a few seconds, she raised her arm and wiped her face with her sleeve. She turned to look at Merlin Hermes and said, "Are you a god?" "I'm just a magician who likes to create miracles." Klein smiled as he pointed at the machine beside him. "The thing you should thank the most is that, the fully automatic wishing machine." Fully automatic. Jasmine's emotions stirred as she subconsciously repeated. Klein nodded and said, "Yes, a fully automatic wishing machine that can operate without any external help. You can understand it as a gas meter. As long as you throw in a coin, you can get a wish granted like how you obtain gas. The specific steps are very simple. Throw 1 penny in and make your wish before turning the wrench. Remember, only 3 wishes can be fulfilled." While explaining, Klein inwardly mocked himself. If I were to unfortunately die one day and become a sealed artifact, I hope it's something similar to the fully automatic wishing machine. After leaving the capital of Mid-Seashire, Constant City, Klein changed the method of granting other people's wishes to prevent himself from being too bored. One had to learn to seek joy in mundane work. How miraculous! Jasmine couldn't find the words to describe how she felt inside. Her exhilarated emotions calmed down a little. Will this fully automatic wishing machine stay here forever? Jasmine asked hesitantly. Klein smiled and said, "No, it could stay here for 3 days, or maybe not that long. Perhaps it would disappear when the sun rises. But it won't disappear forever. Perhaps one day, you will see it at the corner of the street again." Jasmine's mind was in a mess, and she was unable to sort out her thoughts. All she could do was bow to the machine and say seriously, "Thank you, Mr. Fully Automatic Wishing Machine." Then, she bowed at Klein. "Thank you, Mr. Hermes." As soon as she said that, Jasmine recalled the words Merlin Hermes had just said. Filled with anticipation, surprise, and embarrassment, she asked, 3 wishes can be granted?" "Yes, but it won't be free in the future. You will need to pay a penny," Klein replied, unfazed by the question. Chapter 1313, 1313 The Third Wish. 1313 The Third Wish. Jasmine was excited, but she was still worried. What kind of price has to be paid? From her point of view, a prior free attempt didn't mean that the subsequent wishes were without a price. Klein adjusted his tall hat and smiled. "The penny you paid is the price. The corresponding change that you have to bear after achieving your wish is also the price." Jasmine nodded without completely understanding him. Without any hesitation, she reached into her pocket and attempted to take out a few copper pennies for her wish. However, her pocket was empty except for a handkerchief. Having stayed home all this while, she hadn't had any contact with money. She had relied on walking to go from home to the municipal square instead of taking a trackless public carriage. Can I go home first?" Jasmine asked, both vexed and embarrassed. "Of course, this is your freedom, but I can't guarantee that the fully automatic wishing machine will always be waiting for you here," Klein said with the tone of a magician. "Sometimes, it's very willful." Jasmine tersely answered, thanked him, and turned around, jogging in the opposite direction of the municipal square. The more she ran, the more relaxed her body became. She found herself in her formerly healthy state before she was burnt, transforming back into a teenage girl in her prime. To her, this was a scene that would only appear in a dream. Of course, as an ordinary person, She gradually felt exhausted after running for a while. She had no choice but to slow down and begin walking slowly. The cool night breeze blew, revealing resplendent stars peeking through the clouds high up in the sky. The trees by the side of the street swayed gently and scattered the swaying shadows on the ground. All of this was so quiet and beautiful. Jasmine only felt her body and mind relax, and all her worries disappeared. This was the first time she was in such a good mood ever since she was injured. Unknowingly, a smile appeared on her face. After walking for about 5 minutes, she suddenly heard someone shout her name. Jasmine. Jasmine turned her head and saw a familiar face. It was her former neighbor, Mrs. Hamill. Good evening, Mrs. Hamill. I haven't seen you in a long time. Are you going to the carnival? Jasmine, who wasn't wearing a scarf, said with a heartfelt smile. Mrs. Hamill was a woman with a head of white hair. She carefully sized up Jasmine and said, I haven't seen you since you moved away. I heard that you were injured in the previous blast. Yes, but I've recovered. Jasmine nodded heavily. She then asked, How is Jolie now? Jolie was Mrs. Hamill's eldest daughter and was her former playmate. Mrs. Hamill's expression instantly wore a shade of gloom. The Phasacians did unspeakable things to her, and she ended up dying. Jasmine was taken aback, thinking back to her experience while feeling sad. A Phasacian soldier had rushed into her house in an attempt to do unspeakable things to her, but he only gave her a kick and left when he saw her disfigured face. Poor Jolie. Jasmine sincerely tapped her chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion, outlining the stars. It was only after she heard what had happened to her friend that she realized that she might have been relatively lucky. After bidding farewell to Mrs. Hamill, Jasmine walked back to her apartment. When she got home, she felt much better and her mood was back to normal. She started to look forward to the expression her parents would have when they saw her appearance restored. They probably wouldn't keep the pain deep in their hearts and pretend that nothing has happened. They would definitely cry with joy and hug me. Jasmine took the key that was hanging around her neck like a necklace, and as she thought about it, she opened the door. The room was dark. None of the candles or the gas wall lamps were lit. On the bed outside, light and heavy snoring could be heard from her parents, forming a contrast with the bustling municipal square. They're asleep. Yes, they've been working hard. Jasmine gently closed the door and walked to her parents' bed. With the crimson moonlight shining in through the window, she cast her gaze over. Daddy has a lot of white hair, and his wrinkles have deepened. Mommy keeps frowning when she sleeps. Her face is flaking. It's dry and coarse. Only then did Jasmine realize that she hadn't seriously looked at her parents' faces for a long time. She didn't know that they had aged so much. Before the war, her father was an accountant with a pretty good income. They could afford to rent a terrace house and allow his wife to not work so as to focus on taking care of the family. But now, he could only work at textile factories and do all kinds of strenuous labor. Jasmine's mother had no choice but to leave her family and become a textile worker. Daddy's health is getting worse and worse. He's always coughing, but he has passed the recent Civil Servant Unified examination. When the interview results are announced, he will have a decent job. Mommy keeps complaining that her arm is getting worse. Jasmine looked at her parents intently and didn't wake them up. She had already thought of her second wish. Softening her footsteps, Jasmine entered the room inside and poured out the last few pennies from her piggy bank that she had previously almost emptied. Then, she left the apartment and boarded a trackless public carriage. She was afraid that the fully automatic wishing machine would be gone if she delayed any further. At that moment, there were a lot of passengers on the public carriage. Most of them were heading to participate in the carnival. Jasmine looked around and saw that there were no seats, so she had no choice but to support herself as she stood on the aisle, squeezing with plenty of people. 10 minutes later, she reached her stop and turned into that street. When the brass-colored machine embedded with a few pieces of glass appeared before her eyes, Jasmine silently heaved a sigh of relief and quickly approached. During this process, she surveyed her surroundings and didn't find the magician by the name of Merlin Hermes. It really is fully automatic. There's no need for him to be by my side. Jasmine muttered in puzzlement. She didn't waste any time. She took out a penny and placed it inside the fully automatic wishing machine. I wish for my parents to be healthy again. I hope that my family will become rich. Jasmine softly voiced her wish. She closed her eyes and waited for the miracle to happen. In the next second, she heard the clanging sound as though a coin had rolled out from the fully automatic wishing machine. Jasmine opened her eyes in shock and looked ahead, only to see that the penny she had just put into the machine had landed on a small tray around the coin slot. This wish can't be fulfilled. A wish can't contain too much content. My wish was actually 2 wishes. With the experience of being cured of her burns, Jasmine didn't suspect that there was something wrong with the fully automatic wishing machine. She thought seriously and stuffed the penny into the coin slot. Then, she lowered her head and made a wish softly. I hope my parents are healthy again. This time, she heard a soft knock sound out from the fully automatic wishing machine. Tack. Seeing that the copper coin remained inside the machine, Jasmine knew that her wish had been fulfilled. She couldn't wait to go home and check on her parents' situation. Suppressing her excitement, she inserted another penny. She had originally planned on making her family wealthy, but remembering that her father was basically going to become a civil servant in Limon City, and that her family income was guaranteed, she couldn't help but have other thoughts about it. When she was 10 years old, she already knew that she wasn't good-looking. It wasn't that people around her would despise her and say that she wasn't good-looking, but amongst her playmates, there were two rather beautiful girls. This allowed them to be accorded with greater treatment and experience the kindness of the world. Such a comparison only served to make Jasmine inevitably dream of becoming prettier as she grew older. But reality proved that dreams could only be dreams. However, this time, her dream could turn into reality, because she had a miraculous, fully automatic wishing machine in front of her. If I can make myself beautiful, I can find a good husband, and I can improve my family situation. Jasmine seemed to have heard the devil whispering in her ear. She closed her eyes uncontrollably and made a wish. I wish to become extremely, extremely, extremely beautiful. She used extremely thrice to accentuate the beauty she wanted. Just as she finished speaking, the door to the fully automatic wishing machine opened once again. A silver-white mask was pushed out and covered her face. Jasmine quickly opened her eyes and happened to see the mask disappear. At the same time, she felt something connect to her. She turned around in anticipation and once again walked to the shop by the side of the street. Using the light from the gas lamps and the glass on the window, she saw her current appearance. For a moment, Jasmine couldn't describe the exact changes in her facial features and outline. All she knew was that at this moment, even she was mesmerized by her beauty. Her nose had become sharper and her lips had become fuller. Her eyes became bigger and limpid. Her skin was as tender as milk pudding. She only had slight similarities to her previous self. Is this a miracle? Jasmine couldn't help but let out a heartfelt sigh of amazement. She looked at herself, intoxicated. It took her great effort to finally retract her gaze before bowing at the fully automatic wishing machine. Following that, she walked towards the public carriage stop. On the way, eyes kept turning to look at her. Bang! A man, who was too focused on her, slammed into a gas lamp post. Jasmine pursed her lips into a smile. Without a word, she boarded the trackless public carriage. There were still many people on board, and all the seats were taken. Just as Jasmine was trying her best to find a spot, several men lifted their buttocks and straightened their bodies. They looked at her and smiled. "Miss, you can sit here." Jasmine was momentarily stunned. She hadn't expected to receive so much kindness. She didn't decline and sat down. She smiled at the man who had given up his seat. "Thank you." The man's expression became extremely animated as he said humbly, "This is what a gentleman should do." Jasmine still retained the habits from when she was previously cooped up at home, so she didn't say anything else. She quietly sat there until she reached the stop near her apartment. Then, she got off the carriage. After a few steps, she suddenly felt that someone was looking at her. She quickly turned her head to look. It was a drunkard. He was staring at Jasmine with an indescribably disgusting look. Jasmine jumped in fright and briskly walked to her apartment. However, the men she met along the way revealed similar looks, as though they could turn into beasts at any moment. At that moment, Jasmine felt as though she was walking in the wilderness. Chapter 13-14. Miracles are only for a moment. Previously, Jasmine enjoyed the gazes from the men, but now, all that was left was anxiety and horror. She hastened her footsteps again as though she was being chased by phasations. Finally, before the men could get close to her, she rushed into the apartment and got rid of them. Phew! The girl patted her chest and secretly decided to stay out less at night. Only then did she realize that extraordinary beauty had its disadvantages. After calming down, Jasmine went up the dimly lit stairs to the third floor and returned home. She used the key she carried with her to open the door. She carefully approached her parents' bed and used the moonlight to examine their faces. Compared to when she left the house not too long ago, her parents' faces were rather ruddy. Their white hair and wrinkles had lessened significantly, and their snoring was almost non-existent. Their health has really been restored. Jasmine couldn't help but smile, clearly relieved. Sensing the commotion, her mother's eyelids twitched as she slowly opened her eyes. Jasmine held her breath and restrained her smile, preparing to give her mother a surprise. Her mother sat up and looked over, her expression suddenly becoming extremely terrified. "Who are you?" asked the woman with a shrill voice as she shoved her husband forcefully. "Who am I?" Jasmine was stunned by the question and didn't know how to answer the simple question. At that moment, her father woke up as well. He looked at the beautiful girl in front of him with suspicion and vigilance. "Get out. Otherwise, I'll call the police." Jasmine's mother left the bed and picked up a candle stand beside her, using it as a weapon. "We don't welcome burglars." Jasmine's father rather politely issued an order for Jasmine to leave. He knew that he had to do his best not to pressure the burglar. Otherwise, it easily led to extreme responses from the other party. If not for his wife and daughter, he wasn't too afraid of fighting the burglar. But now, his entire family was at stake. Jasmine finally snapped out of her daze and hurriedly said, "Daddy, Mommy, I am." Before she could finish her sentence, her mother started to shove her repeatedly as she was pushed out of the room by her father. No one cared about what she said. Under such circumstances, no one cared. Thud. The door to her apartment closed before her very eyes. It left her feeling lost and helpless. She wanted to knock on the door and use the key she carried with her to prove her identity. But at that moment, she heard her mother shout to a patrolling police officer downstairs, "There's a burglar! A burglar! Burglar! Daddy and Mommy don't recognize me anymore. Will they think that I've murdered myself? Will the police believe the fully automatic wishing machine?" Jasmine's heart tightened, and she subconsciously decided to leave the apartment first to avoid the police. She would then find her father and mother to explain to them carefully at dawn and use their common memories to convince them. Tap, tap, tap. She bowed her head and, under the watchful gazes of her neighbors, walked down the stairs and rushed out of the building. She ran all the way to a nearby alley and avoided the approaching police officer from the main street. Gasping for air, Jasmine stopped in her tracks. Tears uncontrollably rolled down her face and fell to the ground. Suddenly, a hand reached over and covered her mouth, dragging her to a secluded corner of the alley. "How much?" "I'll pay however much it costs." A voice filled with drunkenness rang in Jasmine's ears. It was as if he had mistaken her for a prostitute and could no longer resist her allure. Jasmine tried her best to struggle, alarmed, afraid, and desperate. Just as she was about to break down, the drunkard released his hand. "Miss, are you all right?" A hoarse male voice sounded. Jasmine dashed away from the drunkard before turning around to see a police officer in a black and white checkered uniform. He. As Jasmine spoke, she began to cry. The policeman looked at her sympathetically and said, "We will take legal action on him. However, miss, you'll need to return to the police station with me to record your statement." Jasmine was in a state of extreme panic and extreme helplessness. She subconsciously nodded. Not long after, she sat in the police station's testimony room nearby. Facing her was the same police officer and his colleague. The policeman deliberated over his words and asked, "So you're telling me he didn't ask you if you were a prostitute, and you didn't do anything that might come off as soliciting customers?" He was worried that his words would hurt the beautiful girl in front of him. Jasmine held a coffee cup and lowered her head to take a sip. "Yes, I just reached the alley." "All right, let's end it here. Miss Jasmine, can you tell us where your house is? We will get someone to send you back." Another policeman tried to get in her good books. Recalling his parents' reaction and the disgusting gazes, Jasmine couldn't help but shudder. She said in tears, "I had a quarrel with my parents and can't return home for the time being. Perhaps you can take me to the nearest hotel." At this point, she remembered that she was only left with a few pence. There was no way she could stay in a good hotel, and the cheap motels were practically dangerous to her. The first policeman was taken aback. "Okay." On the way to the nearest hotel, the policeman hesitated several times before finally saying, If you plan on becoming a street girl, you can come to me. There's no need for you to go through that much effort." Upon hearing this, Jasmine felt on the brink of mental collapse. It was just different from when she first saw her face after the fire. This made her feel extremely insecure, and she remained silent. Fortunately, the police officer didn't force her and sent her to the entrance of the nearest hotel. "There's no need to go in with me. I'll go by myself." Jasmine rejected the policeman's suggestion of sending her to her room. After the police officer left, she quickly walked out of the hotel without completing the check-in procedures. She wanted to go to the municipal square, to the place where the fully automatic wishing machine was to cancel her previous wish. Such beauty was terrifying. After taking a few steps, Jasmine removed the scarf around her shoulders and wrapped it around her face in layers, just like how she left her home that very night. Back then, there were still burn scars on her face. Her missing nose and damaged lips made her look like a devil. When she arrived at the municipal square on a trackless carriage, she entered the street once again and saw the brass, fully automatic wishing machine. Jasmine's heart immediately calmed down. She quickened her pace and arrived in front of the machine. Then, she was at a loss. She didn't know how to cancel her last wish. Your first wish was a free trial, and it wasn't counted in the 3 wishes. So you have one more wish. Jasmine suddenly heard Mr. Merlin Hermes' voice. She turned her head and saw that across the street, under the dim yellow light of the street lamp, the magician wearing a tall hat was looking calmly at her. Good. Jasmine hurriedly took out a copper penny and inserted it into the fully automatic wishing machine. "I hope my previous wish is cancelled," she said with her eyes closed as she gripped the wrench and spun it. Tack! She heard the dull thud once again. When she opened her eyes, she rushed to a nearby shop. She stopped in front of the glass window and removed the scarf wrapped around her face. She saw herself again. She was no longer a pretty girl. Jasmine instantly relaxed and instinctively turned her head to look at the fully automatic wishing machine, but found that it had disappeared along with Mr. Merlin Hermes. Praise the lady. Thank you, Mr. Hermes. Jasmine sincerely tapped her chest 4 times in a clockwise manner. She used her last copper penny to head home on a trackless public carriage. Along the way, no one gave up their seats to her. When her figure vanished from the street, Klein appeared again, holding a silver mirror with ancient patterns. Great master, why didn't you add the line that excessive greed will only turn something good into something bad, or wishes always have a price? This will make the whole matter seem even more philosophical. It will be elevated into a fable. On the surface of the mirror, silver words appeared. Klein smiled and said, the biggest problem was that I couldn't use normal methods to satisfy her extremely beautiful wish. I can only adjust her looks to a certain extent. Therefore, I had no choice but to use one of the effects of a sealed artifact that originated from a demoness to graft it onto her. That resulted in her stunning beauty and terrifying charm. This made the surrounding men unable to resist her. The sealed artifact belonged to Zhou, a relic of demoness Charmaine. Due to a problem with Zhou's storage abilities, Charmaine's Beyonder characteristic fused with the box containing it, becoming a sealed artifact with shockingly negative effects. This caused Zhou's younger brother to look at the box strangely. In order to resolve this problem, Zhou made a wish for Mr. Fool to seal the item for her. After saying that casually, Klein looked at the magic mirror. Rhodes, are you consoling me? No. The main problem was that she's too greedy. If she only wanted to become beautiful and didn't add so many extremities to the wish, then the result would have been pretty good. On the surface of the mirror, silver words quickly appeared. Indeed, that will be within the extent that can be achieved by Lai. Klein nodded and said to Rhodes, Lai's adjustments can indeed be permanent, but it's a structure that is ultimately different from the original muscles, skin, and bone structure. After more than a decade, when she's gradually showing signs of age, the adjustments and the differences will slowly magnify, making her face appear rather strange and stiff. That can only be fixed periodically by becoming a faceless. Having said that, Klein smiled and shook his head. A lie is ultimately a lie. Then, he walked towards the other end of the street and continued. Besides, even if she really becomes beautiful, it's still uncertain whether she will lead a better life in the future. It's true that beauty allows her to obtain a lot of resources and allow her to marry a prince. However, her personal upbringing, character, and knowledge are unlikely to support such a lifestyle. Yes, I can't rule out the possibility that she's good at studying, being capable of using all kinds of experience to fully enrich herself and ultimately direct herself to possibly having a good life. However, that's a whole other story. Haha. Miracles are only for a moment, but fate is often a long-lasting event. In the conversation with the Rhodes, Klein gradually vanished from the end of the street. His understanding of Miracle Invoker had deepened again. After returning to her family apartment, Jasmine didn't attempt to open the door. She used a lot of courage to knock on the door. The door opened, and her mother appeared in front of her. Oh, you're finally back. Her mother first heaved a sigh of relief, then asked in an abnormally horrified manner, why your face? Jasmine forced a smile and said, I've been cured by a mister who's good at creating miracles. Mr. Fully Automatic Wishing Machine. Just as her parents suspected that their daughter had been influenced by demons, a few policemen in black and white checkered uniforms walked up the stairs and came over. Leading the policeman was a lady. She had light blue eyes and a smile that quietened others. Miss Jasmine, we have some questions for you, the lady said politely. Chapter 1315. 1315 Summary Repor. 1315 Summary Repor. Jasmine felt that she should have been afraid, but she found it difficult to have much strong emotions facing the female police officer in front of her. She felt like her body and mind had unknowingly settled down after crying for a long time. She looked at her parents who had a complicated expression and asked hesitantly, Okay, what questions do you have? The female policeman with the rank of superintendent pointed at the door and said, Let's talk inside. She didn't get Jasmine's parents to leave. She only ordered the 2 police officers with her to guard by the door. After closing the door, she pulled a crude round stool over and sat down without standing on ceremony, looking very relaxed. This immediately made Jasmine and her parents less tense. You may call me Ma'am Gray. The officer introduced herself and pointed at another chair in the bed. Have a seat. When everyone in the room found their seats, she smiled at Jasmine and said, I received a report saying that there were some incomprehensible things happening around you. For example, a male's desire for committing sexual assault had far exceeded normal standards. This doesn't mean that there are no bad people or criminals among them, but the ratio is too high, so high that it's strange. At this point, she swept her gaze across Jasmine's face. From what I know, you were seriously injured during the fire and was permanently disfigured. But now, I can't tell any of that. What do you have to say about this? Jasmine's heart tensed up again. She didn't dare hide anything and said in a panic. I went out tonight to the municipal square to attend the carnival. While I was passing by a particular street, I encountered a wandering magician who called himself Merlin Hermes. He said that he had invented a machine called the fully automatic wishing machine. All I had to do was insert a penny, softly state my wish, and turn the wrench, then my wish would be granted. He said that I was the first user, so I could experience it for free once. Then, I was restored to my original state, having all my injuries healed. Officer, that's what happened. You must believe me. With that, she glanced at Mrs. Gray and her assistant before looking at her parents, trying to get their approval. However, her parents clearly said, "How is this possible? How can there be a machine that can automatically grant the wishes of others? How can there be something as good as granting a wish cost only a penny? Besides, the first user experienced it for free." Gray and her assistant didn't show any obvious expressions, making Jasmine unsure if they believed her or not. Continue. Seeing her pause, Gray nodded encouragingly. Jasmine hurriedly mentioned how she returned home to get some coins before recounting in full how she wished for her parents to regain their health and how she wanted to become beautiful. Finally, she said, I was indeed very beautiful. Even I couldn't move my eyes away. This made me experience a lot of kindness, but later on, the surrounding men started to frighten me. In addition, Daddy and Mommy didn't recognize me and chased me out of the house. I was scared, very scared. I returned to the machine and made a third wish. Yes, that Mr. Merlin Hermes said that the first wish was free and wasn't part of the 3 wishes. In short, I returned to my original appearance and met you. Upon hearing these words, Jasmine's parents instantly thought of the beautiful burglar from before. Then, they realized that their bodies were indeed much healthier than before. Their vision had recovered, and their arms had sufficient strength. Everything seemed different. They began to believe Jasmine's description, but they felt even more terrified. It was as if they had encountered a demon, exactly the same as those stories in folklore. Gray nodded gently. I've seen many matters that are beyond your imagination, but this is the first time I've heard of something like a fully automatic wishing machine. Compared to a wishing lamp or wishing pool in folklore, this is too modern. After a pause, her expression turned serious. As an experienced law enforcer, I'll give you 3 suggestions. First, don't believe in such things again from now on. Under most circumstances, the easy granting of wishes brings about a huge disaster. There's nothing wrong with describing it as the temptation of demons. Jasmine nodded heavily, indicating that she wouldn't dare to do it again. That final experience still left her feeling afraid. Secondly, go to the cathedral as soon as possible and repent to the bishop. Get him to purify you. Gray looked around and said, Your entire family must go. Seeing that Jasmine and her parents were about to say that they already had this in mind, Gray turned to Jasmine. My department still lacks some staff. You can consider joining us. This way, I can monitor your situation at any time and deal with any abnormalities in time. As for the salary, trust me, it's about the same as a civil servant. The salary is about the same as a civil servant's. I can be protected. There's something that nice? Jasmine asked in disbelief. What department is it? Gray smiled and said, I'll give you an address. Come to my office tomorrow, and I'll fill you in on the details. All right. Jasmine was in a state of panic and unease. She would grab a life-saving straw the moment it appeared. A week later, Jasmine officially joined the Nighthawks in Limon City and became a civilian staff member. Captain, the telegraph device has broken down, she said carefully as she knocked on Gray's door. Gray put down the documents in her hand and rubbed her temples. Report this to the police station and let them handle it. Seriously, I could have gotten the help of the machinery hive mind in the past. It was done in a quick and effective way. Now, sigh. By the time Jasmine left, Gray picked up the documents and began to read them carefully. This was a piece of information that the Nighthawks had gathered regarding the fully automatic wishing machine. After Jasmine, this happened more than once. After flipping through the documents, Gray spread out a piece of paper, picked up a fountain pen, and began writing the official document for the Constant Archbishop and the Holy Cathedral. There have been many supernatural incidents in the city in the past week. It involves a special machine called the fully automatic wishing machine. According to the intel, it was created by a wandering magician who calls himself Merlin Hermes, but we haven't ruled out other possibilities. At least, I think that Merlin might be an illusion created by this machine, so as to lure people into making wishes. This machine is of a brass color embedded with opaque glass. Its surface has gears, bearings, rivets, metal pipes, and other components exposed on its surface. It seems to be a product of modern industrialization. Case 1. A young girl who was disfigured by a fire had met the fully automatic wishing machine at the municipal square. Her first wish was to revert back to her original appearance, and it was granted normally. Her second wish was to restore her parents' health, which was also granted normally. Her third wish was to become extremely, extremely, extremely beautiful. Then, she no longer looked like herself, and she had an irresistible charm to the men around her. She claimed that she was the first user of fully automatic wishing machine, which allowed her to have one free wish. With that, she canceled her third wish. Case 2. A retired soldier who participated in the war to defend Le Momen was left with serious mental damage. He met the fully automatic wishing machine by the river. His first wish was to restore his mental state to a state before the war, and it was granted normally. His second wish was to become a little more handsome, so as to reach the standards of the male models on magazine covers. He also had it granted normally. His third wish was to obtain £100,000 and become a tycoon. Then, he caught the fancy of the owner of the Le Momen United Steel Company who wished to marry him, a lady with a wealth of nearly £200,000. This retired soldier didn't wish to accept her with her having a weight of more than 200 pounds and her shorter than average height. Furthermore, she's a violent middle-aged woman. He prepared to leave Le Momen and head south. If there comes a day when he doesn't want to work hard anymore, he can easily obtain the rights to a wealth of £100,000. In a sense, his wish was granted, but he's unwilling to accept it. Case 3. Case 4. Case 5. A public school teacher met the fully automatic wishing machine near a storm cathedral. Her first wish was to make herself look better and not be ostracized by her students because of her looks or be spurned by her colleagues. This was granted normally. Her second wish was to obtain a better position, which was also granted. As her teaching standards were high enough and she was no longer restricted by her looks, she quickly became the most popular teacher among the students and began taking on the duties as vice principal. Her third wish was to have a husband with impeccable looks, family background, personality, and ability. Finally, she got a doll who could speak, move, and have a certain level of intelligence. It had living characteristics and looked rather handsome. It was carved by the best master and could have any personality one wanted. It was very capable in every aspect. Other than not being human, it really had no flaws. Case 6. Summarizing these cases, we have obtained some preliminary guesses. The fully automatic wishing machine can appear anywhere in Le Momen. It's extremely random, and there's temporarily no discovered pattern for it. Most of the wishes that are made can be fulfilled normally. However, a small portion will be distorted, and the latter is basically concentrated on the third wish. Of course, it's also possible that the person will let themselves loose by the time they make the third wish and thus make excessive demands. The wishes it granted were mostly related to appearance, but it covered a wide scope. It was almost omnipotent. The frequency of its appearances is also irregular. This is a classic example of a mystical item that needs to be sealed. Furthermore, it clearly exceeds the grade of a Grade 2 sealed artifact. I hope the Archbishop and high-ranking deacons will personally deal with it, or give an effective sealing method. On the steam locomotive out of Le Momen, Klein observed his digestion of the Miracle Invoker Potion. Chapter 13:16, An Unknown City. If I keep accumulating it bit by bit, it won't be long before I can respond to Moon City's prayers and cure their deformity, thus creating quite a miracle. In addition, I've also concluded the acting principles of a miracle invoker. It's only a matter of time before I digest it if I follow them. I might even finish within the year. Klein retracted his gaze from outside the window, raised his left arm, and controlled the monster puppet on his hand to entertain a child across him. This made him look more like a wandering magician. If he was willing, he could even use life's cane or the grafting ability to imbue this sock puppet with living characteristics. While entertaining the child, Klein's thoughts scattered as he considered where the marionette city needed to be built for the advancement ritual. A marionette city needs sufficient interaction to develop a corresponding region in the spirit world. This means that it isn't enough to leave it in the forsaken land of the gods. Ignoring the fact that it's sealed there, there's no way of directly connecting it to the spirit world. All I can do is rely on the little specialness it has. Even if there's no problem with it, it's difficult to create any interactivity with a place that lacks intelligent life. If it's placed in the northern and southern continent or the sea colonies, I have to be careful. Before the ritual is about to succeed, I definitely can't expose the fact that it's a marionette city. Otherwise, it will be affected, damaged, or even attacked by Zeratul, Amon, and my other enemies. Yes, I have to give a sufficiently good reason for a marionette city to appear. Then, there won't be any abnormalities with the interaction between the traveling merchants and the surrounding humans. I have to make every marionette a living person. They have their past, present, and future. They follow their own trajectories of fate. This means that a marionette city is extremely complicated. I need to split out many worms of spirit to deal with it. This also has the risk of losing control by doing so. If they are husband and wife, they should act like husband and wife. When faced with something they are fond of, they should show joy. Perverts should be hated. This way, foreigners might hear embarrassing sounds while staying in the marionette city. I'm still just an innocent child. This is a large-scale reality show, or rather, a high-end version of playing house. It has to be able to deceive the audience. As Klein lampooned inwardly, he silently counted if he had enough marionettes. Previously, he had gone to the forsaken land of the gods several times and converted a large number of them. There were all kinds of monsters that might not have Beyonder characteristics. He also consciously controlled batches of rats, cockroaches, mosquitoes, and flies, hoping to make a more uncommon side of the city real enough. I'm barely able to support a small city, so just a few more visits to the forsaken land of the gods would do. Just as this thought flashed through Klein's mind, a scene suddenly appeared in front of him. At the top of the giant king's court, which was bathed in the light of dusk, the open door slowly and heavily closed. This was like a pair of invisible hands closing the entrance to the forsaken land of the gods. Klein's eyes darkened as he vaguely guessed that this scene meant that the true creator was about to seal off the forsaken land of the gods again. This was the prophetic power that came from his angel-level spiritual intuition and premonition for danger. It was about to happen a few minutes or a few seconds later. Did the true creator capture him on? Or has he already given up? He once again sealed off the forsaken land of the gods. Does he not want others to enter again? Isn't this too petty? Klein mumbled inwardly, feeling a little disappointed. Of course, he barely had enough marionettes. Even if he lacked them, he could make up for it at sea. Backlund, Empress Burrow. Audrey had just changed her clothes and sent away her maidservants. Just as she was about to leave, she saw Susie walk in. What's the matter? You should be out on your stroll at this time. As an experienced spectator, Audrey immediately sensed that something was amiss. During this period of time, she had been busy making use of the influence she had in a few foundations to help the workers, farmers, and injured veterans with their hardships. She had allowed them to wait for a new job opportunity or for their plantation's production in a new season. She had a lot less interaction with Susie than usual. At the same time, Audrey was secretly guiding the workers of lower socioeconomic status from the various unions in Backlund to gather their strength together. Her previous experiences made her understand that counting on the kindness of the upper class wasn't reliable or long-lasting. A single person appeared puny and powerless in the face of the government, nobles, and powerful merchants. Only by summoning the combined strength of a large number of civilians could a balance be formed. The Lone Kingdom had unions in different industries a long time ago, but the upper echelons of these associations were easily bribed. Instead, they became effective weapons against ordinary workers. Susie glanced at Audrey with a rather normal expression, but her mouth seemed to be out of control. It vibrated the air and let out a deep male voice. Miss Audrey, I'm the president of the Psychology Alchemists, Eric Drake. I wish to meet you and discuss with you about becoming a counselor of the Psychology Alchemists. I'm at the nearby park. Having said that, Susie heaved a long sigh of relief and regained her original voice. Audrey, there's a strange guy looking for you. I can't remember what he looks like. He directly placed the words he wanted to say into my mind island. Audrey's pupils dilated slightly before immediately returning to normal. She calmly nodded and said, Where is he at the park? As she spoke, Audrey secretly conjured a virtual persona and entered Susie's mind island through the sea of collective subconscious. She checked if it was still distorted by some external consciousness or knowledge. I don't remember. I was having my stroll, Susie said as she recalled. Then, she wagged her tail slightly and said, I don't think you should go. It's dangerous. After confirming that Susie didn't have any latent problems with her virtual persona, Audrey exhaled and said, It will be even more suspicious if I don't go. That way, danger will be unavoidable. It might even affect the rest of the people in the house. Besides, this is also an opportunity. Just as Mr. Hangman said, since the end of the world is coming, all the hard work and attempts that will not bring disaster are meaningful. Audrey added inwardly before saying, I will protect myself. Susie, did anything happen to you just now? Susie barked and said, No, Audrey, are you really going? Yes. Audrey gave a clear answer. Then can you bring me along? Just like before, I'm just a dog in their eyes. Susie mustered up her courage and said, No, there's no need. I'll be back very soon. Believe me, I'll be blessed by a deity. Audrey replied with a faint smile. After comforting Susie, she used her psychological invisibility and left the luxurious villa like she usually did. When she was far away, in a corner on the first floor, a servant who was cleaning suddenly bowed his head and softly said words that he had never learned before. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. In the ancient palace above the fog, the figure sitting in the fool's seat naturally looked at the newly formed prayer light and realized that the believer was extremely unfamiliar. It's identical to Miss Justice's home environment. I can suspect that it's a result of guidance created by a virtual persona's invasion of the Mind Island. Miss Justice used this method to avoid any surveillance and pray for blessings. The figure quickly came to a conclusion and transferred the corresponding situation to his true body. A few seconds later, Klein entered Sapphira Castle and allowed the worms of spirit to burrow into his body. Miss Justice is becoming more and more like a high-sequence spectator. Klein praised inwardly as he cast his gaze at the crimson star representing justice. In the park with a lake. As soon as Audrey entered, she saw a large carriage drive over. The carriage driver was an ordinary middle-aged man wearing an old hat and a dark-colored jacket. However, in Audrey's eyes, this carriage driver didn't exist because he didn't have a corresponding island of consciousness or mind. In other words, the carriage driver was just an illusion, a fake, and the controller of the carriage was the horse itself. A few seconds later, the large carriage stopped in front of Audrey. The door creaked open. "Please come in." A deep male voice came from inside. Audrey lifted the ends of her skirt slightly and boarded the carriage. She saw a man sitting on a black wheelchair. His pale yellow eyebrows were long, and his hair was neatly combed back. There were some wrinkles on his forehead, and his face was abnormally pale. "Mr. Derlau? Aren't you already dead?" Audrey recognized the man in front of her and expressed her surprise perfectly. To a spectator, death only represents the end of one's identity. In other theatrical plays, "I'm still alive," the elderly gentleman who was sitting in a black wheelchair replied with a smile. "Apart from the former royal family's medical consultant, the former chancellor of Backlund Medical School, I'm also king of the Black Throne Barrows Hopkins at sea. I'm the famous hermit, Eric Drake, etc. Then how should I address you?" Audrey asked politely as she watched the door close automatically from the corner of her eye. The old gentleman stroked the wheels on both sides of his wheelchair and said, "You can call me Mr. President, or you can continue calling me Mr. Derlau." He then pointed to the seat on the left side of the carriage. "Have a seat. Let's head somewhere first before discussing you becoming a counselor of the psychology alchemists." Audrey nodded slightly and calmly sat down. Without hiding anything, she cast her gaze out of the window and was surprised to find that in the blink of an eye, the park had turned into an unfamiliar city, one that was shrouded in darkness. The city was filled with extremely mysterious and beautiful buildings that gave off a dark feeling. There were gentlemen wearing top hats and trench coats, as well as women in complicated and dark dresses. As Audrey swept her gaze, she saw a gentleman with short black hair beside a carriage, revealing sharp canine fangs in his mouth. This was a werewolf. Chapter 13:17, Pride. "What is this place?" Audrey asked without much change in her expression, as though she was asking about the location of the ball tonight. Polly Derlau, who claimed to be the president of the psychology alchemists, cast his gaze out the window as well. He smiled and said, "This is the city in everyone's heart. It's present wherever there are people." Audrey nodded and thought, "In other words, you can enter this place from any corner of human society?" Derlau stroked his wheelchair and said, "That's right." He didn't explain further and instead pointed at the pedestrians outside the carriage. "Everything here has a corresponding psychological symbol. They are called bestial desire." Bestial desire. Audrey repeated the word silently. As she maintained her dignified posture, she cast her gaze even further. Among the pedestrians, there were werewolves, as well as walking upright bears. There were cats with lazy expressions, and there was a strange man with the face of a spotted spider, a huge mouse with red eyes, a python with its tongue sticking out, and a canine creature that studied every creature that passed it by with eyes filled with the desire to mate. They were either wearing a top hat and trench coat or an exquisite and complicated long dark dress, doing their best to imitate humans in every detail, but they were unable to truly resemble a human. The carriage traveled through the darkness of the night, traveling between pedestrians and all kinds of Gothic buildings. Soon, they arrived at a cathedral in the middle of the city. The cathedral was more than 80 meters tall, propped up thanks to the numerous black columns. Each pillar was embedded with a certain number of skulls. Some of them came from humans, while others came from different creatures. However, their empty eye sockets were tilted downwards, as though they were observing at every living creature that entered the cathedral. Just like most buildings here, every detail in the cathedral could be said to be exquisite, but they formed the elements that leaned towards nightmare, horror, terror, and mystery. After getting off the carriage, Audrey saw a grand but empty hall through the main door. In the depths of the hall stood a huge cross. Curled around the cross was a grayish-white dragon statue. Unlike ordinary cathedrals, there were no pews for believers to pray, nor were there places for candle stands. However, in front of the dragon statue, there was a small long table. On both sides of the long table were 5 seats, and the seats at both ends were empty. Polly Derlau wheeled himself to the end of the long table where the seat of honor was. Then, he pointed to his left. "Please take a seat." Audrey slowly followed behind him. She looked around and casually pulled out a chair before sitting down. She wasn't too close to the president of the psychology alchemists, nor was she too far away. She perfectly showed her vigilance and didn't show any signs of guilt. Paulie Durlau raised his hands and clasped them together before placing them on the surface of the long table. Miss Audrey, I have something to ask you. Please speak. Audrey turned her head slightly and responded with her green eyes. Durlau nodded slightly and said, I would like to know how you advanced to sequence for manipulator. Where did you get your potion formula and beyonder characteristic? Audrey replied frankly, it was from a deal. A client wished to receive the help of a spectator demigod and had paid the manipulator potion formula and beyonder characteristic as an advance. Durlau immediately laughed. That actually happened? These generous conditions resemble a father finding an excuse to give his daughter a present. Can you tell me exactly what kind of help you provided? Kill another demigod. In this matter, control of one's mind was rather crucial. Audrey simply explained. Her attitude was very calm, as if she was talking about the homework given to her by a teacher. Durlau's long and fluffy eyebrows twitched as he said, And you succeeded? The results are obvious enough. Audrey gave an answer rather tactfully. Durlau sized her up and realized that the noble girl on his left was a manipulator who could kill other demigods. Audrey read his thoughts and added, I was just one of the participants. Durlau nodded and said, Do you know where the client's manipulator potion formula and beyonder characteristic came from? He didn't tell me straight with regards to this question. Audrey gave an answer with a sentence she had long planned out. Can you tell me who he is? Durlau asked after some deliberation. Audrey had been guarding against the other party's virtual persona from infiltrating her mind island. However, she had yet to notice anything abnormal since the beginning. This made her suspect that the other party didn't need to infiltrate her mind. All he needed to do was observe the fluctuations of the surrounding sea of collective subconscious to understand her true thoughts. She didn't make any attempts to hide and calmly replied, This concerns an agreement between us. I believe honoring one's promise is a moral standard that the entire world approves of, and in mysticism, this comes into play at a deeper level. Having said that, Audrey took the initiative to say, If you can't really trust me because of my inability to mention this, I'm willing to accept this. I can only remain an ordinary member and use my contributions in exchange for the psychological research materials that are available to me. Durlau smiled when he heard that. Everyone has their own secrets. This is very normal. What I need to assess is whether your secret will affect the safety of the entire psychology alchemists. He looked deeply at Audrey and said, Then can you tell me how you got to know such a client? I remember that I once reported that, before joining the psychology alchemists, I'd already come into contact with some people in a mysticism circle and got to know a few beyonders. Audrey said a truth that couldn't be any truer. As for what the real logical order to the answer was, it was another matter. Furthermore, the matter regarding Vin Rambise's disappearance, which stemmed from the investigation of Furs and Zio, was something both parties had never talked about, but had definitely acknowledged. Durlau retracted his hands from the table and placed them by his chest. There's another thing I would like to ask. When was the last time you met Vin Rambis? Audrey frowned slightly and said, I remember that I've been asked before. After Vin Rambise's death, she didn't immediately cut off any contact with the psychology alchemists. She continued to maintain a certain connection with the upper echelons through Hilbert, Stephen, and Escalante. Only when the war reached Backlund did she realize that she couldn't contact the members of the psychology alchemist cell for various reasons. I need to confirm it in person, Durlau said calmly. Audrey nodded gently and said, The last time I met Vin Rambis was in Viscount Glaint's mansion. At that time, I hypnotized my two beyonder friends I knew, as per his instructions, and asked them why they were investigating Viscount Stratford and who the mastermind behind this was. At that time, Councilor Vin Rambis was nearby, ensuring that nothing went wrong with the hypnotism. After he received the answer, he quickly left. After that day, I never saw him again. As she answered, Audrey was still guarding against the invasion of her mind island. However, it was calm there, and nothing happened. This didn't make Audrey feel relaxed. Instead, she became even more wary. She didn't even dare to think about anything related to Mr. Fool and the World Gehrman Sparrow. She was only certain of one thing. As long as she was exposed to danger, Mr. Fool would definitely provide her with protection. It's identical to your previous answer. Durlau nodded slowly. He then looked into Audrey's green eyes and said frankly, I can't use mysticism methods to trace the origins of the beyonder characteristic in your body. This means that the person who provided it has an unimaginable existence behind him. Audrey nodded slightly but forcefully, expressing that she agreed with his assessment. I can't force you to not cooperate with other beyonders or make deals. It's unrealistic. I just hope that you can promise not to reveal anything about the psychology alchemists to anyone. At the very least, when you wish to entrust certain missions to others, you have to package them and hide the secrets, Durlau said calmly as he retracted his gaze. Audrey replied without hesitation. I promise not to tell any living creature that isn't qualified to know about matters regarding the psychology alchemists. She took the initiative to amplify the concept all the way to that of a living being to make up for any loopholes in her promise. As soon as she finished speaking, she felt her thoughts surface from her mind island. These thoughts intertwined, turning into an illusory net that seeped into Audrey's mind island, turning into her subconscious. As this restriction net came from Audrey's spirituality, she would be incapable of removing it even if she became an angel. She would lose the intention of talking about the psychology alchemists when she faced non-members of the psychology alchemists or people who didn't qualify to know about them. And she wouldn't realize this. He didn't invade my spiritual island. Just my words alone made the promise turn something substantial. While Audrey was alarmed, her expression didn't show. Of course, she didn't completely restrain herself, as being surprised by such means was an instinctive reaction from a manipulator. Based on this point, she suspected that either there was something wrong with this city that existed in the heart, or that Derlau, the psychology alchemist's president, wasn't just at the level of a saint. Seeing Audrey make her promise, Derlau pointed at the long table in satisfaction and said, "From now on, you are a counselor of the psychology alchemists. You can choose a persona mask as your codename." As he spoke, 7 grayish-white masks appeared on the long table. They were rather illusory and abnormally cold. 5 of them were placed in front of the corresponding seats, as though they already had a master. The remaining 2 persona masks are Wrath and Pride, Derlau introduced. They come from the Holy Bible of the Creator from the 3rd epoch. Audrey thought for a second before reaching out her hand to the mask that didn't contain any anger. "I choose Pride." Derlau looked at her and chuckled. That was the choice Vin Rambis made back then. Chapter 13:18, 7 Councilors. Audrey's right hand paused for a moment before returning to normal. She picked up the mask known as Pride. "A 50% chance isn't low," she replied to Polly Derlau simply. This was to say that picking the mask that Vin Rambis had worn before wasn't a surprising coincidence. With that said, Audrey wore the cold gray mask on her face. Almost instantly, she felt that she had an additional virtual persona that had appeared in her mind island. This didn't stem from the outside world, but rather a magnification of what she knew to the extremes. They received very little education. They have to make the right choice under my guidance. Not everyone has enough intelligence. On the contrary, most people are very stupid. Those workers are impulsive and irrational. They are easily enticed by tiny perks and have no foresight. Only with me thinking for them, guiding them, and making decisions for them can they be saved. They are worthy of pity, but they aren't worth communicating with. These thoughts echoed in Audrey's mind, almost making her believe that this was the truth. After all, this was partial feedback she had received from her previous observation and experience. It wasn't something that had been fabricated out of thin air. With a sweep of her gaze, Audrey saw herself from the smooth surface of the long table. On the cold gray mask, her eyes moved upwards, fixing it to her forehead, as though she could only see things high above without a care about anything else. It was funny, strange, and secretly horrifying. Audrey fell silent. A few seconds later, she said in a deep voice, "Is this Pride?" If it wasn't for the fact that she had long escaped her misconceptions through the exchange between Mr. World, Mr. Hangman, and Ma'am Hermit, she might have been truly affected by Pride's persona. As for what would happen after being affected, she couldn't tell. "You recovered much faster than I expected. It looks like you haven't lost yourself in the experience of manipulating others," Derlau said approvingly. Audrey replied thoughtfully. "Mr. Vin Rambis has always appeared a little proud." Derlau clasped his hands at his chest and said, "You could tell?" "Only occasionally. Some details," Audrey replied in 2 short sentences. Derlau sighed and shook his head with a smile. "This mask's influence on Vin Rambis was worse than I expected. Besides, he usually put on a very good disguise. Under this premise, I don't find it strange that he has gone missing. His arrogance will make it impossible for him to see the path beneath his feet. It will make him look down on beyonders who are weaker than him, and this will often bring great danger." Audrey resisted the urge to recall Vin Rambis's death and asked in deliberation, "These 7 personalities can amplify the corresponding knowledge and emotions to help us realize our own problems, so that we can deal with them directly. At the same time, they will also bring some negative effects and unknowingly change its wearer's personality." Derlau nodded slightly. "In the mind domain, it's very difficult to obtain external help that's pure and without danger. One has to have enough internal strength to avoid the corresponding negative effects. You have walked the right path for you to realize this." Audrey was just about to take the opportunity to discuss some questions about the mind domain when she suddenly saw a mask on the table disappear. She subconsciously turned her head and looked at the entrance of the cathedral. She saw a figure walk in through the door. This figure was wearing a 3-piece formal wear suit, and he had a half-top hat in his hand. He wore the mask that had disappeared earlier on. The mouth on the mask was open wide until it reached close to the ears. Its mouth remained open, as if it wanted to swallow everything that its eyes could see. This is one of the counselors of the psychology alchemists, Mr. Gluttony. Derlau did the introductions. Following that, the remaining counselors of the psychology alchemists arrived one after another. They were Mr. Lust, Ma'am Greed, Miss Sloth, and Mr. Envy. As a senior spectator, Audrey was the first to notice the difference in their masks. Greed was similar to a gluttony. His mouth reached his earlobes, but it wasn't open. Furthermore, his eyes were closed. Lust was similar to pride, but its eyes were different from ordinary people. They had sunk to the middle of their noses, as though they were looking at people from the bottom. Envy's eyes, ears, nose, and mouth were slightly slanted, and had a gloomy temperament. Sloth's eyes were tightly shut, and its mouth naturally drooped, giving off the feeling that the wearer was sleeping. Seeing all the counselors present, Derlau smiled and said, "Let's wait for another friend. He will be the 7th counselor. Heh, 8th, I forgot to count myself." Just as he said that, a figure entered the cathedral's main door. This figure wore a shirt, vest, a black trench coat, and a half-top hat. At a glance, he was a rather fashionable gentleman. However, after some observations, Audrey realized that there was a huge rabbit under the human clothes. Its eyes were bright red, and its fur was snow white. The rabbit walked inside, one step at a time, and stopped at the side of the long table. It happened to be beside Audrey. "Unfortunately, you only have one choice." Derlau smiled as he pointed at the wrath mask on the table. The rabbit let out a male human voice. "I've always been very gentle. It's a good opportunity for me to experience wrath." As it spoke, it picked up the persona mask and wore it on its face. The mask's eyes were wide and its mouth was wide open, as though an angry roar would shout out at any moment. After Mr. Wrath sat down beside Audrey, Derlau clapped his hands and said, "I formally introduce the 2 counselors who will be joining our council. This is Miss Pride. This is Mr. Wrath. They are both demigods and have deep attainments in the domain of the mind. In addition, Miss Pride will be in charge of the greater Backland area of the Lone Kingdom." Upon saying that, Derlau looked at Audrey and said, "You might not be aware, but we are rooted in the masses of psychologists, psychiatrists, and the corresponding aficionados. Our strength is mainly concentrated in large cities and not small cities and villages. Therefore, every counselor is responsible for a city and the surrounding area." Then, Derlau continued, "Mr. Wrath is in charge of the Lemberg capital, Azhara. Mr. Lust is in charge of the Intis capital, Trier. Ma'am Greed is in charge of the Fasak capital, St. Millum. Miss Sloth is in charge of the Fainapotter capital, Fainapotter city. Mr. Envy is in charge of the Intis Republic's Tilisai city. Mr. Gluttony is in charge of the Lone Kingdom's Constant city." After the introduction, Derlau added, "Our psychology alchemist's mission is exploration, discovery, and research. We do not care about affecting the scope, member numbers, resources, etc. Therefore, we do not have any counselors in the Fog Sea, the Berserk Sea, the Sonia Sea, and the Southern Continent. Of course, there will often be members who go out to the sea to explore the ruins of the Southern Continent in search of ancient history. Haha, I forgot that I'm the king of the Black Throne on the 5 seas. St. Millum, Constant, Tilisai. Nearly half of the counselors of the psychology alchemists are in the mid-seashore region." Audrey acutely sensed a problem. She came from a noble family and had received good education since she was young. She was no stranger to the geographical location of every city in the northern continent. She knew that Fasak's St. Millum, Lone's Constant, and Intis's Tilisai were big coastal cities of mid-seashore. Although they couldn't compare to the 3 major cities of Backlund, Trier, and Fainapotter city, each of them was quite large. Furthermore, there were many medium-sized cities around them. This made the mid-seashore coast become the most vibrant economic zone in the northern continent, an area with the biggest population. Under such circumstances, it wasn't too surprising that the focus of the psychology alchemists was placed on mid-seashore. Audrey generally didn't think that the psychology alchemists weren't too interested in expansion. After the counselors got to know each other, Derlau turned his head and said to Audrey, "Miss Pride, due to the war, Backlund's psychology alchemists suffered great losses. We have lost contact with many of the members. I will give you a specific list in the future. You will be in charge of confirming the whereabouts of the members and then organize them again. In this process, I suggest that you don't use your real image and name to finish the tasks. Create a virtual identity to complete them." Vin Rambus didn't do well in this aspect. "I think he's a little too proud." Audrey nodded slightly and agreed. Derlau retracted his gaze and said, "The second thing to discuss today is the whereabouts of the Mind Dragon in East Chester County of the Lone Kingdom. The dragon-worshipping customs of the Heartlark village haven't been weakened in the past 2 years. I suspect that the Mind Dragon is still influencing it in some way. Perhaps we can use it to find its whereabouts. Who is willing to handle this matter?" After raising the question, he recalled that the newly joined Miss Pride and Mr. Wrath didn't have enough knowledge of the corresponding situation. He simply explained the explorations the psychology alchemists had previously done as well as the problems that his entire archaeological team members encountered. Audrey had actually participated in some matters in the early stages. Now that she had a suitable reason to intervene, she couldn't help but feel her heart palpitate. It wasn't that she really wanted to hunt the mind dragon, but rather, she wanted to communicate with it and grasp more knowledge and secrets of the mind domain. However, she wasn't in a hurry to raise her hand. As a counselor participating in the council for the first time, she would rather miss an opportunity than be eager to showcase herself. This is Lone's matter. It's not suitable for us to interfere. Mr. Lust surveyed the area and said, unless Miss Pride and Mr. Gluttony don't have the time for it. Audrey waited for a few more seconds. Seeing that the Gluttony didn't say anything, she looked at Derlau and said, I will try to investigate, but I need more detailed information. Chapter 1319, Life-Preserving Incantation. Seeing that Audrey was willing to attempt the investigation mission, Derlau nodded and said, I'll give you the detailed information later, but I have to warn you that this matter is rather dangerous. You must not be careless. Upon saying that, Derlau paused for a moment and said, if you encounter an accident, and you can't solve it by relying on yourself, you can try to say a name. This will bring you salvation. What name? Audrey asked as she had a guess in mind. Derlau's expression immediately turned solemn. It comes from the Holy Bible of the Third Epic's creator. It involves the highest mystery of the mind domain, and it has a close relationship with something of the psychology alchemists. It's Adam. Adam. Audrey didn't find it surprising at all, but she showed her puzzlement on the surface, as though she didn't know what this name meant. Derlau didn't explain and instead said, as a counselor, you should be in charge of a Grade 1 sealed artifact. However, you and Wrath have just joined the ranks, so there must be an observation period first. Besides, the former committee member of the Backlund region, Vin Rambus, has lost a rather important sealed artifact. We are considering whether we should change the usage method of sealed artifacts and allow usage only via an application. In other words, all the sealed artifacts will be kept in this mind city. You usually won't hold on to them, and can only use them temporarily after an application for particular incidents. The woman in charge of Faceax Capital's St. Millum immediately shook her head. There is a very serious flaw in this method. That is that we are unable to deal with any sudden accidents. Be it enemies or monsters, once we encounter them, we will not have the time to apply and retrieve the sealed artifact. I believe that the current method is good enough. Everyone wields a Grade 1 sealed artifact to deal with accidents. When there's a need, we can apply for other items. Derlau laughed and said, this was indeed better in the past. But now, you don't have to worry. As long as you have the chance to resist an accident, then you can directly enter this mind city to avoid the enemy and obtain the item. If there's no chance, just as I said, reciting the name Adam will do. You said Adam twice. That entity is probably already watching. No, he might have been watching from the very beginning. Audrey's heart almost beat faster when she heard that. Then how do we enter without your invitation? Mr. Envy asked as he nodded. Derlau pointed at his face and said, from this council meeting forth, you can take your persona mask out of this city. No matter where you are, as long as there are at least 2 humans around you. Yes, other than you. You will be able to wear the corresponding persona mask and enter the city. And these 7 masks are illusory. They are closely connected to what you know, and there's no need to store them in a special way. With just a thought, you will be able to take them out of the sea of collective subconscious. At that moment, the man, who was wearing the gluttony mask and exuded a feeling that he was lost in indulgence, thought for a while and said, will bringing the persona mask out of the city affect our mental state and true personality? There will be some effects that need attention, but I believe that you are all experts in the mind domain. You have the ability to resolve problems in this aspect, Derlau said frankly. Audrey was a little worried that these 7 persona masks had something to do with Adam, but she didn't dare think about it in the mind city. She forced herself to rein in her thoughts and replied to what Derlau had said before. I can accept the 2 safekeeping methods of the Grade 1 sealed artifact. I'll patiently wait for the probationary period to end. Miss, you aren't proud. Miss Sloth, who looked like she was sleeping, commented with a smile. After discussing the Mind Dragon in East Chester County, the other 5 counselors began introducing things that were worth paying attention to in their respective areas as an exchange of information. During this process, Mr. Gluttony, who seemed to be capable of eating an entire cow at any moment and wore 10 rings, said, the Constant region hasn't been peaceful recently. There have been many miracles happening one after another. First, Constant City was rebuilt overnight. Second, Belton City's citizens collectively lost their memories of a certain period of time. Third, a powerful archmage who grants the wishes of others for pleasure has been wandering the eastern shore of the mid-seashore. He's called Merlin Hermes. Related to this, there's an item known as the fully automatic wishing machine. Other than that, I also noticed something strange. Many rats, cockroaches, and crows in Constant City have lost their souls, days after the city was miraculously restored. Why were you able to sense this problem? Mr. Lust looked up at Gluttony from the bottom. Gluttony gulped and said, I've been researching the mind problems of ordinary creatures recently. Rats, cockroaches, and crows are my experimental subjects. The counselors immediately started discussing the direction of this research before the meeting officially entered the third stage. Their academic exchange enriched Audrey's knowledge quite a bit. She listened very seriously and would occasionally share her thoughts and insights. All right, this conference will end here. After a while, Derlau clapped his hands. Audrey subconsciously wanted to stand up and lead the other counselors into bowing and bidding farewell. However, she quickly came to her senses and continued sitting there, being the penultimate person to stand up. Before leaving, she asked curiously, Mr. President, does this city have a name? Yes. Derlau laughed. The Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Audrey saw that the other counselors were walking towards the door and asked thoughtfully, there are many cathedrals here. They should represent a faith. I wonder which existence the residents here believe in. Derlau nodded and replied solemnly, the omnipotent and omniscient creator. Garden of Eden. The omnipotent and omniscient creator. If this wasn't created by Adam, I'll write my name backward. Above the gray fog, inside the ancient palace, Klein looked at the crimson star representing Miss Justice and silently muttered to himself. In addition, to recite Adam, when faced with danger as a response would indicate a problem without concealing anything. Ever since Miss Justice entered the Garden of Eden, the true vision provided by Sapphira Castle had been suppressed. Klein could only use Audrey's point of view to observe the surroundings, just like how Queen Mystic Bernadette's fixed viewpoint back on the primitive island. To a certain extent, this also showed the status of the Mind City, Garden of Eden. Klein gently tapped the edge of the long modeled table and conjured a pen and paper to write his thoughts. This wasn't something he couldn't analyze based on his own thinking. Instead, when facing an existence like Adam, he needed to repeatedly ponder and analyze the details. Thus, the words that formed on the paper helped him to read them back and forth so as to notice and make up any missing details. Basic premise. Adam has already advanced to sequence 0 using the full-scale war from before. By becoming a true god, he can be known as a visionary. Miss Justice happened to become a sequence 4 manipulator after Van Rambise's death. She may be able to convince others, but she can't convince Adam. What does Adam want? Setting up a sequence 4 saint doesn't match his identity as a visionary unless he has another ploy up his sleeves. His real target is the Mind Dragon, or is it me who's backing Miss Justice? Care and vigilance must be enhanced on this matter. We must not be careless. In the Garden of Eden, the cathedral that the psychology alchemist counselors were using is similar to Adam's corpse cathedral. However, it's only a little similar. The stone columns on its exterior are inlaid with several skulls. There is no corresponding layout inside, and the color is dark black and very gloomy. What does this mean? What does that grayish-white dragon coiling around the huge cross symbolize? The first step in resurrecting the creator has been successful? Adam is already a visionary. If his father or the original creator returns, he would be the first one to be unlucky. He is willing to sacrifice himself. This is the meaning of being zealous. That rabbit is suspected to be Hermes. However, as an angel of the spectator pathway, it doesn't make sense for him to not be able to remove Miss Messenger's transformation curse after so long, especially since he has a visionary who can provide help. Did Hermes do it on purpose? Yes, the president of the psychology alchemists, Derlau, mentioned that to the spectator, death only represented the end of one's identity. He can still participate in other theatrical plays and other aspects as another identity. By combining them together, does this mean that once the spectator pathway reaches sequence 3 or sequence 2, they can separate the identities they once held and make them become living people? And even if these identities were to die, it wouldn't lead to the deaths of their real bodies? It does look like the preamble to becoming a visionary. The rabbit that Hermes turned into after being cursed was separated as an identity, which later directly participated in the psychology alchemists? What does he want to do? Back then, when the Twilight Hermit Order communicated, he was sitting beside the Emperor. After Klein was done writing, he put down his fountain pen and carefully read the contents a few times, his heart clouded with mystery and puzzlement. In the end, he could only decide to continue observing and be vigilant. And at this moment, Audrey had already taken the carriage she used, exited the Garden of Eden, and returned to the park in Empress Borough with the man-made lake. She wasn't in a rush to pray to Mr. Fool, hoping that there would be a better way to seal the pride mask. She returned to her luxurious villa as though nothing had happened. Chapter 1320, Mind Mail. Chapter 1320 Mind Mail. Susie was sitting by the door, waiting for Audrey to return. At that moment, the golden retriever immediately went up to her as soon as she saw her approach. She even gave a rather talented showcase of her acting by barking and wagging her tail. She didn't ask on the spot. Instead, she kept accompanying Audrey back to her bedroom before asking in concern, "Is it over?" Audrey tersely acknowledged, indicating that there was no problem. "Is there anything I can help you with?" Susie pressed. "Not yet." Audrey shook her head slightly. Due to Susie's concern, she instinctively recalled her previous experience, but to her surprise, she realized that she couldn't recall the image and name of the psychology alchemist's president. To recall even the information that she had learned from the world German Sparrow, she had to focus quite a bit. To be frank, in front of beyonders below the demigod level, she could do similar feats as a manipulator. However, to influence a saint in the mind domain and make it impossible for them to sense it was almost impossible unless the other party was hypnotized, unconscious, or enslaved. That gentleman's level is probably higher than I expected. Audrey controlled her emotions and calmly made a certain judgment. She gave Susie a look and got the golden retriever to stand guard outside the door. In her mind, she outlined the character mask that represented pride. Just as she was thinking about this, she felt a slight fluctuation in the sea of collective subconscious around her. With just a thought, Audrey reached out her left hand and grabbed it. She took out an abnormally cold, illusory, grayish-white mask. As long as I seriously think about it, will this pride mask come to my side? Or should I say that it has already existed in my subconscious and has been following me? As Audrey carefully examined her mind island, she signaled with a thought that made the pride mask vanish. The ice-cold, illusory, grayish-white mask quickly turned transparent and melted into the surrounding sea of collective subconscious. Audrey still couldn't determine where this pride mask had gone. Why did it appear in such a timely manner each time? This made her increasingly wary. She decided to pray to Mr. Fool and make the wish of sealing the mask. Just as she was thinking of doing a few more experiments to obtain more knowledge from pride, she saw the sea of collective subconscious begin to resonate without using her manipulator beyond her powers. A beam of light came from afar as it grew larger and more obvious. Finally, it turned into an illusory letter. This letter stopped in front of Audrey's mind island as though it was searching for a path to complete the delivery. Audrey naturally wouldn't let any foreign object enter her mind world. She hurriedly reached out her left hand and touched the illusory letter. Seeing that her fingers were about to touch the surface of the letter, Audrey suddenly stopped. Her experience and intelligence told her at the same time, don't touch anything in the mysticism world rashly. This was especially so for the mind domain. Otherwise, it would easily lead to corruption and produce mental problems. With this in mind, Audrey produced a virtual persona and put on the black long-veiled glove, Hand of Horror. After making the necessary preparations, she reached out to grab the illusory letter and watched as it peeled away its outer layer and flipped over one page at a time. This was all the information related to the Mind Dragon in Eastchester County. To use the sea of collective subconscious to transmit information. The higher-ups of the spectator pathway are truly amazing. As a manipulator, Audrey had been trying her best to maintain her initial yearning towards the mysticism world. It was a pure and innocent pursuit of dreams and magic. This was one of the ways to prevent herself from losing herself in the manipulating experience of things and not be assimilated by the sea of collective subconscious. After flipping through all the information, Audrey let the illusory letter melt into the sea of collective subconscious. She was still in no hurry to pray to Mr. Fool. According to her previous arrangements, she went out to be busy over other things. At dusk, before the banquet at home began, she found some time to quickly make a prayer in her bedroom and make a wish. In the next second, Audrey saw the grayish-white pride appear from the sea of collective subconscious in front of her. The illusory feeling slowly vanished as a tiny amount of metallic luster flashed. For some reason, this persona mask had a certain substantial feel to it, as though it was bordering between illusory and realism. This meant that it was isolated from Audrey's mind island in a physical sense. Of course, it also lost the ability to return to the sea of collective subconscious. Audrey held pride and attempted to remove lie that had turned into an emerald necklace, overlapping the two together. Just as she had expected, the half-illusory, half-real pride embedded itself into lie, turning into a blob of patterns that roughly looked like a human face. In the future, I'll use this method to carry it with me. I won't allow the persona mask to have any contact with my mind or body until I need to use it. Audrey's mind raced as she sincerely thanked Mr. Fool. She then left for the banquet hall. Along the way, she met her father, Earl Hall. Good news. Earl Hall laughed. Audrey didn't hide her surprise. Alfred's coming back. This was her other brother. You actually guessed it? Earl Hall said in surprise. In the next half of the year, he will return to Backlund as a general. Half a year. Susie is already a dreamwalker. Audrey thought for a moment and asked, Father, when are we returning to Eastchester County? As the war had just ended and there were many things in the kingdom that needed to be done, The nobles didn't return to their respective fiefs during New Year's. They remained in Backlund all this time. It was already the end of February. Earl Hall nodded and said, "About April." In the ancient palace above the fog. "Mind mail? Be careful of viruses, don't click on them without thought." As Klein sighed, he threw the curtain that represented the attendant of mysteries beyond her characteristic back into the junk pile, allowing it to cover all the items there. He had just fulfilled Miss Justice's wish using the grafting ability he named. He connected the illusory concept of the persona mask to an ordinary metal mask, and he gave the worms of spirit, who were on duty at Sapphira Castle, in order to recharge the powers from time to time to prolong the grafting effect. From the description of Mr. Gluttony from the Psychology Alchemists, Zeradal seems to have found constant city. "I have to be even more careful." Klein tapped the edge of the long, mottled table with his finger, causing worms of spirit to appear from his body. His figure vanished from Sapphira Castle. Winter County, Amantha Mountain Range, Cathedral of Serenity. Leonard obtained a document from the Pope. This was the first thing he was responsible for after becoming a high-ranking deacon. After returning to his room, Leonard leisurely leaned back and placed his feet on the desk. Then, he opened the document in his hand and began reading. "A wandering magician, Merlin Hermes, grants the wishes of others for pleasure. The newly rebuilt Constant City. Fully automatic wishing machine. Sequence 4 of the Seer Pathway is Bizarro Sorcerer. Sequence 3 is Scholar of Yore. And Sequence 2 is Miracle Invoker." Leonard read until he suddenly fell silent. After a few seconds, he suppressed his voice and asked, "Old man, how many angels of the Seer Pathway are active across the land?" Palaz Zoros scoffed. "This is acting. There should only be one Miracle Invoker who still needs to act. You should know who I'm talking about." Leonard looked at the information in his hand again and mumbled, "He's having quite a good time." He had already decided that the main purpose of this mission was to act as a night watcher and digest his potion. He could also travel in passing. As for handling the matter, what mattered was to find a reasonable explanation. After flipping through the thick documents in boredom, Leonard retracted his feet and stood up. He was going to retrieve a Grade 1 sealed artifact that a high-ranking deacon like him could own. To other saints of the Church of Evernight, this was quite a headache. This was because the negative effects of sealed artifacts weren't easily endured. It was even more so when one needed to carry them for a long period of time. However, if one chose a holy artifact that was more compatible with him, there would be a problem of powers overlapping. As for Leonard, he didn't need to worry about this problem. As long as the sealed artifact he was interested in had a living characteristic, he could get Old Man's help. By parasitizing it with a worm of time, it significantly reduced the negative effects of the sealed artifact, making it as obedient as the word of the sea. Therefore, the main thing to choose is its powers. Leonard whistled and walked out of the room. Monday afternoon, in the ancient palace above the gray fog, dark red beams shot out, materializing into different figures. Derek hadn't needed to count his heartbeat for a long time. All he needed to do was take a look at the wall clock and calculate the time difference with Backlund to know how much longer before the tarot gathering happened. At that moment, he stood up with Miss Justice and the other members of the tarot club. He bowed to the end of the long bronze table and said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." After taking their seats and paying their respects, Emlyn glanced left and right and said, "I want to know if there's something special about the planter and the moon pathways compared to the other pathways." After raising the question, he didn't hide it and instead added frankly, "I recently learned that the internal system of the Church of Earth is different from other normal systems. It's split into two categories, favored and blessed." After Emlyn finished his simple description, Alger, Catlia, Leonard, and company looked at each other, unable to provide a reasonable explanation. Of course, every member present, including Derek, could tell that the internal system of the Church of Earth was abnormal. At this moment, they heard a soft sigh. This sigh seemed to come from an era more ancient than ancient. It came from Mr. Fool, who sat at the end of the long mottled table. Chapter 1321, The 6 Special Pathways. The Fool Klein slowly surveyed the area. He didn't provide an explanation to everyone as they had expected. Instead, he reined in his sigh and asked with a smile, "Where do you think the 22 Beyonder pathways originate from?" This was one of the 3 most important questions in mysticism, with no consensus for the answer. Every school of thought had its own theory. No one could convince anyone. Catlia deliberated for a moment before replying. "The essence of the world is knowledge, and the essence of knowledge is data. Humans are data, and the Beyonder characteristics of the 22 pathways are data. All things are a form of data, and this is how it was born." She had offered the Moses ascetic orders theory, but that was not her own point of view. The 7 churches believe that the Beyonder characteristic originated from the original creator. He transformed into all things, including the deities, humans, sea, land, and Beyonder characteristics, Leonard briefly explained. Of course, this is an explanation given to deacons and above. The official Beyonders below sequence 6 don't need to know so much. Then, he glanced at Emlyn and said, the life school of thought believes that the world is split into 3 levels. The material world, the world of the spirit, and the world of absolute rationality. Beyonder characteristics are the projections of certain things from the world of absolute rationality into the material world and world of the spirit. Therefore, characteristics can't be destroyed. It only reassembles. From the looks of it, the world of absolute rationality that the life school of thought promotes might be referring to the river of fate. The fool Klein thought of Septon, but he remained silent and didn't interrupt the conversation between the members of the Tarot Club. Emlyn returned a glance at the star and said, as one of the rulers of the second epoch, us sanguine believe that Beyonder characteristics do come from the original creator. Then, the various characteristics accumulated and produced the ancient gods. The ancient gods then created different races. This was the sanguine's explanation for the first epoch, and Emlyn already had some doubts about it. After all, he had encountered many secrets thanks to the Tarot Club. Alger nodded slightly. Although there are many explanations for the origins of a Beyonder characteristic, most of them point to the original creator. The Orthodox Churches, Aurora Order, and the City of Silver share such a belief. In other words, Beyonder characteristics originating from the original creator is quite the prevalent understanding. Audrey asked thoughtfully. The psychology alchemists mainly studied the mind world and the sea of collective subconscious. They lacked complete theories regarding the origins of the Beyonder characteristics. Roughly, Alger didn't conceal his views. At this moment, the fool Klein sighed and said, not all of them. He didn't proceed on to give a long story, but gave a rather vague answer. Not all of them. Mr. Fool means that Beyonder characteristics indeed originate from the original creator, but not all of them. A small number of them are special cases? Is this the reason for the specialness of the plantar and moon pathway? Alger instantly thought of a lot and grasped the essence of the problem. As it had nothing to do with her, Furs continued listening leisurely. At this moment, she asked curiously, Honorable Mr. Fool, your meaning seems to be that most Beyonder characteristics originated from the original creator, and the 2 pathways such as plantar and moon are an exception. Then where did they come from? The fool Klein said simply, the cosmos. Cosmos. Emlyn was alarmed when he heard that. He realized that the matter might be more serious than he had imagined. The Tarot Club had already shared the danger of the underground corruption and the cosmos. All of the members knew that these 2 concepts led to corruption simply from understanding it. When Audrey, Catlia, and company looked at each other, the fool Klein maintained his hint of a sigh and added, not just these 2. He and the 7 Lights had always maintained their contact, and had already confirmed that 6 of the Beyonders of the 22 Beyonder pathways belonged to outer deities. Honorable Mr. Fool, what other pathways come from the cosmos? Audrey habitually raised her hand and asked curiously and warily. The fool Klein replied succinctly, prisoner, criminal, lawyer, and arbiter. The first 2 came from the mother tree of desire, and the latter 2, along with the nation of disorder, came from the son of chaos. Chaos gave birth to order, and order came with its own shadow. Arbiter. Furs turned her head in surprise and glanced at Zio. She had just thought that this matter had nothing to do with her. She could only watch and not worry about it. Who knew that the trouble was right at her doorstep? Zio frowned slightly and looked at the end of the long bronze table. Honorable Mr. Fool, I usually don't sense any abnormalities, nor have I received any divine epiphanies. Other than those from you. The fool Klein smiled and said, the arbiter and lawyer are relatively better. According to his understanding, the influence the son of chaos had on both the arbiter and the lawyer pathway wasn't deep. It was incomparable to the mother goddess of depravity's influence on the moon and plantar pathways, and the mother tree of desire's influence on the criminal and prisoner pathways. This outer deity had gone silent, as though he had disappeared. Furs and Zio secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, they became more wary of the future. With Mr. Fool not explaining further, Emlyn composed himself and said, the uniqueness of the plantar and moon pathway comes from the cosmos. The divine epiphanies I sensed are likely a form of corruption. Alger looked at Mr. Fool at the end of the long, mottled table. Seeing that he had no intention of speaking, he nodded and said, probably so. This is a test for me. Emlyn sighed and said, I've already grasped the names of the high-sequence potions of the plantar and moon pathway. I'm somewhat puzzled about 2 of them. After becoming a sanguine earl and a high-ranking deacon of the Church of Earth, he obtained the corresponding clearance to access plenty of information that he had never been able to. Seeing the other members of the Tarot Club look over, the world Gehrman Sparrow raised his hand to pinch his chin. Emlyn thought and said, the moon pathway is as follows, Sequence 3, High Summoner, Sequence 2, Life Giver, Sequence 1, Beauty Goddess. The plantar pathway is as follows, Sequence 3, Pallbearer, Sequence 2, Desolate Matriarch, Sequence 1, Naturewalker. What I don't understand is that the names of the two potions, Beauty Goddess and Desolate Matriarch, have certain gender inclinations. What are your thoughts on this? For a moment, no one from the Tarot Club spoke. They looked at each other and thought of a possibility. A few seconds later, Audrey controlled her gaze and said in deliberation, I remember that Sequence 7 of the Assassin Pathway is called Witch. Assassins who consume this potion become witches. This is a test for me. Emlyn's lips moved slightly, unable to say a word. When he learned the name of the potions, he already had a certain premonition, but he wasn't willing to accept it. He hoped that he could obtain another explanation from the Tarot Club. Don't worry. You have a low chance of becoming an angel. Even if you can, you won't have the chance to be a beauty goddess. Klein mumbled inwardly, but he didn't say any words of comfort. Everyone fell silent. Leonard coughed and took the initiative to say, I'll share some matters. He spoke at a moderate pace regarding Merlin Hermes, the rebuilding of Constant City overnight, and the fully automatic wishing machine. As he spoke, he shot a glance at the world Klein. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he made the world Gehrman Sparrow look ahead. I'll be leaving the eastern coast of mid-seashore soon. These were all done by Mr. World? Can he already create such miracles? As expected of an angel, him. Audrey recalled the information the psychology alchemist's counselor, Mr. Gluttony, had shared. She was both surprised and impressed. She didn't use her spectator's powers to conceal her reaction. This was because everyone had expressed the same emotions, except for Mr. Starr, who clearly knew about it. Merlin Hermes, wandering magician. Furs noted the name deep down and secretly decided to distance herself from this name whenever she heard it in the future. This didn't mean that she was still afraid of Gehrman Sparrow, but she knew something. It definitely wasn't safe around Gehrman Sparrow. Something would always be happening in some way or another. Of course, an instinctive sense of fear was inevitable. It was just like how a seed of fear, sown when one was young, would remain even when one became an adult. Granting wishes for pleasure. Fully automatic wishing machine. Is this the world Gehrman Sparrow's acting? Alger and Katlia had similar thoughts simultaneously flashing through their minds. Then, they thought of something. Ever since some time ago, Mr. Fool had made everyone pray to him in the form of a wish before granting them. He is helping the world digest the potion, or is it that he and the world are from the same pathway? After he awoke, he also exhibits similar characteristics? Little Sun said before that Mr. Fool's actions were a miracle, allowing the city's residents to directly move from the forsaken land of the gods to outside Byam City. With the fact that the world Gehrman Sparrow is still acting, this shouldn't be something he can do. Alger nodded indiscernibly as he made a guess about the pathway Mr. Fool was in. About to leave the eastern coast of mid-seashore? Then my investigation will be even easier. I can just come up with a simple conclusion. At most, I can just directly report that Gehrman Sparrow has become a miracle invoker and is acting. Anyway, the people who should know are already aware. Leonard mumbled silently and didn't ask further. At this moment, the world Gehrman Sparrow looked around and asked, What do you know about the King of the Black Throne, Barrows Hopkins? Chapter 1322. Hold off on something unresolvable. Upon hearing the world Gehrman Sparrow's question, the other members of the Tarot Club had three reactions. Who is that? I seem to have heard of him. He's one of the four kings. Who is that? Why haven't I heard of him before? Oh, I forgot to ask about the psychology alchemists. I was planning on using a more tactful method to seek some suggestions. The first reaction came from Alger, Katlia, and Furs, who had lived at sea for a period of time. The second reaction came from Leonard, Emlyn, Zio, and Derek. The third reaction belonged to Audrey alone. Getting no answers, the world Gehrman Sparrow didn't ask further. His main goal was to use this as a reminder for Miss Justice to bring up the matter for discussion in a way that could bypass the promise she made. Of course, if Miss Justice were to seek help from Mr. Fool, Klein would also use grafting to temporarily connect the bindings formed from her subconscious to a paper figurine, providing her with a period of time that she could freely recount things. This was also a high-level application of paper figurine substitutes. With Klein's current level, he could easily do it within Sapphira Castle. If he were in the real world, he would have to rely on the worms of spirit above the gray fog to control the curtain and provide responses. At that moment, Audrey thought for a moment and said, Do you still remember that I once pursued the whereabouts of a mind dragon and went to a place where they had customs of worshipping dragons? Alger, Katlia, and company nodded. Only Leonard and Zio expressed their lack of knowledge of this matter. As this wasn't an important matter, Furs didn't mention it when she first briefed Zio of the general knowledge. After that, she was frightened by Angel of Imagination Adam, and rarely talked about the secrets shared by the Tarot Club in the real world. Audrey deliberated for a moment before continuing. It's been almost 2 years. A secret organization that doesn't trust me too much suddenly mentioned this matter and has entrusted me with further investigations. They said it's a form of observation. What motives do they have? She didn't think it was a coincidence. Emlyn recovered and laughed. This should be a test. To him, he was still very far from reaching Sequence 1 Beauty Goddess, and he had no intention of transferring to the planter pathway. Therefore, he didn't need to worry about the corresponding problems for a long period of time. There was no need to worry too much about it. Emlyn's ability to say the word test shows how much he has improved. Of course, this is also because the Sanguine has done too many similar things to him, having to trouble Mr. Hanged Man into telling him that this is a test. The fool Klein was very satisfied with Emlyn's answer. Of course, he didn't believe that the answer was correct. He only felt that Emlyn's ability to think up to this level was already pretty remarkable. Audrey said disapprovingly, I suspect that they already know that I'm problematic. They even know where my problem is and which faction is involved. There's no need to test me further. After leaving the Garden of Eden, she had been thinking a lot. She remembered that Mr. World had once said that the Twilight Hermit Order wanted a war that would sweep the entire world. Based on the current situation, this goal has been achieved in the past year. In other words, the Twilight Hermit Order or Angel of Imagination Adam must have used this opportunity to gain quite a number of benefits and experience the corresponding growth. And before that, Mr. Fool informed them that Adam was ever closer to the level of a deity. Combining all this information, Audrey had a preliminary judgment that Angel of Imagination Adam had a high chance of already reaching the divine throne and becoming a Sequence 0 visionary. Even if he wasn't there yet, he wasn't too far. If such a deity who wielded the mind domain cast his gaze over, Audrey didn't believe that her secret could be hidden. At present, she could only console herself that the leader of the Twilight Hermit Order, the mastermind behind the psychology alchemists, wouldn't place too much importance on a Sequence 4 manipulator. On the one hand, she had made all sorts of preparations to deal with the possible accidents. Perhaps that organization is trying to figure how many members we have in the Tarot Club and what their identities are, Emlyn replied with a smile as he continued on his train of thought. Audrey thought for a moment and nodded. That possibility can't be ruled out. As she said this, she shot a glance at the end of the long, modeled table and realized that Mr. Fool was only listening to her leisurely without giving her the correct answer. This made her feel a lot more at ease. At the same time, she silently decided that she had to be more careful. She had to be able to resolve problems herself, having already reached Sequence 4. In any Orthodox church or secret organization, Sequence 4 was the strongest person in control of an area. At this moment, Alger, who had heard their conversation, proposed a brand new possibility. If that secret organization really doesn't trust you, then it might be an excuse for them to do an observation. Their main goal is to cooperate with us, the Tarot Club, and Mr. Fool. He didn't know why Miss Justice didn't mention the psychology alchemists directly. All he could do was carefully go along with her. This is equivalent to me becoming an ambassador of the Tarot Club to the psychology alchemists? Audrey nodded slightly and said, that's also possible. Then what should I do next? Alger thought for a moment and said, stall for time. Good idea. Furs and Emlyn both expressed their agreement. After Alger gave the overall strategy, he added in detail, try to stall for time and find excuses not to go until the final moment. When you arrive there, start investigating from the periphery and use caution as an excuse to slow down your investigation. If you really can't delay any further, you can deliberately make mistakes in certain matters and create some commotion so that the Mind Dragon can detect it early and eliminate any traces. If that secret organization really has any additional motives, the longer you delay, the more they won't be able to sit still. If they get impatient, they will expose the problem. Katlia nodded. This is the most suitable response for now. I understand. Thank you, everyone. Audrey also felt that Mr. Hanged Man's suggestions suited her thoughts. However, she didn't delay a certain matter. She immediately turned her head and looked at the end of the long, modeled table. She bowed and said, Honorable Mr. Fool, has Angel of Imagination Adam advanced to Sequence 0? Not bad. To be able to be aware of this point. The Fool Klein leaned back in his chair and chuckled. Only with the apocalypse approaching did he finally take that step. The level of the Garden of Eden had virtually confirmed that Adam was definitely a visionary. Angel of Imagination Adam has become a god. This news immediately reverberated in Derek and company's minds, leaving their minds in upheavals for a long time. Indeed, Audrey pursed her lips and expressed her gratitude before asking, what kind of payment do I need to make for this answer? The Fool Klein surveyed the area and said with a smile, there's no need. It's a reminder. After this topic ended, because most of the Tarot Club members were still immersed in the impact of Adam becoming a true god, no one spoke for a moment. After a few seconds, Derek looked around and probed. The city of Silver has already plowed the surrounding fields and planted wheat and other crops, but the harvest will still take some time. I wish to know what we can do to earn gold pounds and purchase resources. After the initial aid, the Church of the Sea God and the government of the Rorstad Archipelago stopped providing free aid. After all, their financial strength was rather limited. In this situation, the City of Silver and Moon City each sold a batch of Beyonder characteristics and monster hides in exchange for a large amount of funds that could be used to purchase various resources. However, with the entrance to the Forsaken Land of the Gods closed, they were unable to replenish Beyonder characteristics and monster hides. It was also impossible for the City of Silver and Moon City to give up their military strength either, selling large amounts of combat resources and wasting the opportunity of nurturing their descendants. Therefore, once all the gold pounds, gold, and jewelry were used up, they would undoubtedly fall into a predicament. For this reason, the six-member council had been troubled over how to earn gold pounds from the outside world and how to establish a stable financial system. This was a little beyond their capabilities. The Beyonder characteristics that the City of Silver and Moon City had previously sold were mainly purchased by the Church of the Sea God and the Rorstad Archipelago government. They were used to establish official Beyonder factions under them. After all, the number of Beyonders needed to cause damage, and the number of Beyonders needed to stabilize an area was on completely different levels. In addition, the entire Rorstad Archipelago only had Sea God Calvetua and the demigod cardinal of the Church of the Lord of Storms. This was slightly insufficient for a new government, especially since the Church of Storms and the Church of Sea God weren't allies. After hearing Little Sun's plea for help, the other members of the Tarot Club began to seriously consider what the City of Silver and Moon City residents could do. Audrey thought for a moment and asked, "What are you best at?" "Combat," Derek replied without any hesitation. Alger nodded slightly when he heard that. Although the World War has ended, law and order hasn't been restored in the colonies of the southern continent. It's still very chaotic there, and small-scale wars occur from time to time. You can try to form 2 to 3 mercenary teams and be hired by any faction. Private military contractors. Klein gave an even more modern name to the suggestion. This is a good idea. Derek's eyes lit up when he heard that. Alger asked again, "Combat is a survival instinct. Other than this, do you still have anything you want to do?" Derek replied in embarrassment. Many people wish to be chefs and brewers, as well as hope to work at candy factories. Chapter 1323, Development Plan. After hearing the City of Silver citizens' wishes, a thought suddenly surfaced in Klein's mind. Why is everything related to food? Alger thought for a moment and said to Derek, "You can make people with such thoughts join the industry association and buy them. Seek out suitable teachers through the association and directly invite people with specialties in such fields to teach in the new City of Silver and provide generous salaries. Of course, the prerequisite is that you have to get the residents to grasp the language of the Rorstad Archipelago as soon as possible. On this basis, Loanese, Ancient Fasak, and Dudanese have to be taught too." After the hanged man finished speaking, the hermit Katlia gave her suggestion. Other than organizing the mercenary teams, you can also try to apply for civil jobs in the various cities of the Rorstad Archipelago to handle supernatural matters. Although the Rorstad Archipelago government and the Church of the Sea God had obtained a batch of Beyonder characteristics and the corresponding potion formulas from the City of Silver and Moon City, they were unable to nurture enough Beyonders in a short period of time. Sequence 9 was relatively still alright. The chances of someone being selected for their good mental strength and physique to lose control from consuming the potion were actually very small. If one were to further advance, acting might not necessarily be successful, and it also required time. Under such circumstances, as long as the residents of the City of Silver became members of the official faction, they wouldn't be worried about losing their jobs in the future. Of course, the Rorstad Archipelago's government would definitely control the number of applicants. The City of Silver wouldn't be able to completely resolve everyone's employment problems using this route. Klein agreed with Ma'am Hermit's suggestion. Furthermore, he believed that there was a need for him to give a revelation to Danitz, allowing the Rorstad Archipelago government and the Church of Sea God to increase the number of official Beyonders to a certain range. This wasn't to help the City of Silver's residents and the majority of the deformed people in Moon City find jobs, but to deal with the impending apocalypse, the deeper corruption of the outer deities, and the gradually increasing frequency of supernatural incidents. At that moment, Katlia glanced at Miss Justice and continued speaking to Derek. "You should now have a large amount of liquid funds. You can try to invest in the mines, spice plantations, farms, and purchase fertile land and forests with rich produce. They're all very cheap now. Yes, although the Church of the Lord of Storms can still influence the archipelago, and although the new government promises to protect the local businesses, there are still a large number of people from Lone, Fasak, and Intis who lack confidence. They wish to cash out and return to their countries as soon as possible. That oracle named Danitz recently bought a spice plantation." Derek recalled what he had heard before and immediately felt enlightened. Katlia's suggestion gave others inspiration. Audrey immediately added, "When negotiating, it's best if you invite some professional lawyers. If not, you'll be fooled easily." Well, if you think there's a need, you can bring along a psyche analyst from the city. Also, you have a medium-sized port that can develop the corresponding economy. While the official Beyonders of the Rorsted Archipelago's government and the Church of the Sea God are lacking in generation knowledge, you can set paid classes designed for outsiders in the new city of Silver's savant schools. Well, remove the knowledge that will easily clash with the Orthodox Church. The railway connecting the new city of Silver and other cities must be built as soon as possible. Derek was taken aback when he heard that. He hurriedly raised his hand and said, "Sorry, I need to memorize what was just said. I forgot that he has no foundation in economics." Audrey reflected on herself, closed her mouth, and smiled as she signaled for little son to seek help from Mr. Fool. After Derek conjured a pen and paper and wrote down the previous suggestions, Audrey, Emlyn, the star Leonard, and the other members of the Tarot Club offered their ideas one after another. They also rebutted the suggestions that weren't mature or pragmatic enough. This intense scene lasted for nearly half an hour before ending. Derek looked at the adequately thick pieces of paper in front of him and couldn't help but smile. He seemed to have seen the beautiful future of the city of Silver. Sitting at the end of the long, mottled table, the fool Klein sighed for some baffling reason as his heart felt a lot heavier. If one didn't consider how the apocalypse was about a decade away, the discussion would have been pleasing regarding the promising future that awaited the city of Silver. However, the arrival of the apocalypse wouldn't change because of the will of humans. Even saints and angels couldn't do it. Looking away from the paper in front of him, Derek deliberated and said, "We have already built the temple and cathedral meant for Mr. Fool. We wish to proselytize to various cities in the archipelago. What do we need to pay attention to?" Alger frowned slightly and said, "Have you written a holy Bible? Have you designed the order of Mass and prayer details?" "Yes." Derek nodded heavily. That was based on his knowledge of the miracles Mr. Fool had shown, combined with the religious scriptures left behind by the Creator. Furthermore, the city of Silver had also prayed to the Fool seeking his thoughts on the matter. His attitude was a tacit agreement. Has the internal system of the church been set up? Alger continued asking. Derek subconsciously looked at Mr. Fool, who was shrouded in layers of grayish-white fog, and turned around. Currently, it's following the internal system of the other churches. The chief of our 6-member council will hold the role of archbishop, and a number of enthusiastic citizens have been appointed as bishops and priests. The city of Silver didn't set up an organization to deal with Beyonder matters within the church, since most of them were Beyonders, and there were already the corresponding organizations in place previously. Alger saw that Mr. Fool didn't object nor agree. He controlled his desire to teach and nodded slightly. "You can try that out first." He paused for a moment before saying, "However, there are 2 things to take note of. First, don't badmouth the other churches, lest there be conflict. Second, it's to respect the current oracle. In the absence of a leader appointed by Mr. Fool, the oracle is the representative of a deity. Third, don't engage in religious harassment during proselytizing. Besides, I have serious doubts about the eloquence of the bishops and priests of the city of Silver. I'll need to get Danitz to find professionals to train them." The fool Klein, who was listening quietly, muttered inwardly. He didn't express his opinion on the Holy Bible written by the city of Silver because it was a little awkward, but if he objected to certain descriptions, it would also damage the fool's image. With this in mind, Klein couldn't help but lampoon. Perhaps one day, when Willa Septon reads the Holy Bible of the Church of the Fool, he would blurt out in surprise, "When did I become an angel under the Fool?" Then, Leonard's grandpa, the awakened Mr. Azek, and Miss Messenger, who has been trying hard to recover, will add, "What? Me too." After the conversation regarding the city of Silver and Moon City came to an end, Catlia looked around in anticipation and said, "Which of you has a sequence 3 Beyonder characteristic of the mystery prior pathway?" She had already digested the mysticologist potion for quite some time, but she had only obtained the potion formula from the Moses ascetic order. She was still far from obtaining the Beyonder characteristic or the main ingredients. Although she was one of the 10 key members of the Moses ascetic order, the corresponding resources became more valuable the higher the sequence. Even an ancient organization wouldn't squander them freely. Furthermore, Catlia came from the dawn and was less affected by the hidden sage, so she wasn't that trusted in the Moses ascetic order. To Catlia, who had already digested the potion a long time ago using the snake of fate's blood to advance to a mysticologist, sequence 3 should have been a relatively easier stage. However, she was bottlenecked by the ingredients. It might not even be possible for her to obtain one for years or even more than a decade. Hence, she had no choice but to seek help at the Tarot Club. Derek recalled the demigod characteristics that the city of Silver had and slowly shook his head. At that moment, the world Gehrman Sparrow said with a hoarse chuckle, "I suggest you ask Queen Mystic directly." Bernadette had already become a sequence 2 angel. If she had an additional clairvoyant Beyonder characteristic in her, she could attempt to separate it. Of course, Klein couldn't be certain that the sage potion that Queen Mystic consumed contained the previous Sequence 3 and Sequence 4 characteristics. Asked the Queen. Katlia got some clues from the world's answer and suspected that something had happened to the Queen. Okay. She controlled the urge to ask. Klein continued controlling the world and said to Ma'am Hermit, I have a long-term mission. Help me collect information regarding the hidden sage's sudden coming back to life. You can raise the corresponding remuneration now, or you can wait until there's a need in the future. Klein was still puzzled over this matter. Although it could be described as a uniqueness suddenly coming to life, it should have happened a long time ago if it was possible. Katlia thought for a moment and said, that wouldn't be an issue. After another round of exchanges, the tarot gathering ended and the members returned to the real world. In the captain's cabin of the future, Katlia nudged the heavy glasses on her nose bridge and thought about how to write the letter to the Queen. During this process, she strolled to the window and saw Frank Lee promoting the alcohol-free volcano beer brewed by sea microorganisms to the crew. He really has the drive. Just as Katlia sighed, she suddenly frowned. At the Tarot Club just now, Mr. Fool mentioned that the planter and the moon are two rather special pathways. They come from the cosmos, and they are prone to corruption. The divine epiphanies they receive are questionable. Frank is a beyonder of the planter pathway. Besides, he once complained that the Church of Earth Mother didn't understand the true will of the Merciful Mother. Katlia's eyes that were blocked by the heavy lens narrowed slightly. Chapter 1324, Handling. After staring at the deck below, Katlia left the captain's cabin and walked to the cabin's entrance. She waited until Frank Lee carried a bucket of alcohol-free beer over. Captain, do you want a cup? Frank raised the large bucket of beer with one hand. Katlia shook her head firmly and asked in a seemingly casual manner, Is this the will of the benevolent mother? No, Frank said rather seriously. I just feel that drinking liquor that has been altered by a modified sedative isn't good for the body. I hope that they'll be able to accept this drink that has no alcohol inside, other than the smell of alcohol. Of course, this is only a preliminary result, and it doesn't involve liquor. After all, it can't use distillation to enhance its taste. Katlia was momentarily at a loss for words as she nudged the heavy glasses on her nose bridge. After 2 seconds of silence, she said, Do you hear the benevolent mother's voice or divine epiphanies? No, Frank didn't think much of it as he shook his head. Phew. Katlia secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At that moment, Frank casually added, The benevolent mother's will is in the ears of the wheat, in the milk of cows, in the growth of mushrooms, and in every corner of nature. One can feel it without the need to experience the divine epiphany. Katlia's gaze immediately shot towards Frank's eyes. She didn't find any signs of madness, only pureness. Without another word, she nodded slightly and walked forward. She crossed Frank Lee and arrived on the deck. After taking in the sea's vista for a few minutes, Katlia returned to the captain's cabin. She unfolded a letter and wrote, I wonder what's your take regarding Frank's actions? He claims that he doesn't obtain any divine epiphanies and believes that the benevolent mother's will is hidden in every nook and cranny of nature. This was a letter to Garamond Sparrow. Katlia believed that just by adding such a question, he would be able to understand what she was implying. After folding the letter, she took out a gold coin and began to summon the terrifying messenger. Ma'am Hermit wrote me a letter immediately after the tarot gathering ended. It shouldn't be related to the hidden sage. It can't be that fast. Klein was on a cruise ship, traveling on the Tussock River. Wearing a black robe, he took the letter from Miss Messenger's mouth and opened it. He finished reading all the content with a glance. This. Klein frowned slightly. Perhaps it was because Frank had shown enough danger and madness in his usual behavior that he had actually neglected the possibility of this druid being affected by the mother goddess of depravity. Frank had once been placed on trial by the Church of Earth Mother for a forbidden experiment, and then he was placed on a wanted list. If Earth Mother hadn't been corrupted, and the Church of Earth's operations were rather normal, then it means that they believe that Frank is problematic. However, if there's concrete evidence, Frank, who went to the court, probably wouldn't have lived. Klein's mind raced as he attempted to find clues based on his understanding of Frank. There's no problem with the relevant actions. The prayer posture and his usual prayer gestures are different. It's just like how when the Beyonders of the Church of Evernight pray, they won't draw 4 stars on their chests at times. At most, they'll just go through the final motions. Apart from this small problem, there's something wrong with Frank in every aspect. He's like a child raised by the mother goddess of depravity. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein had 2 contradictory guesses. Either Frank's corruption was very hidden, making it impossible for the Church of Earth Mother's tribunal to be certain, or he wasn't affected by the mother goddess of depravity at all. It was purely because he had a mental problem that made him look like a blessed of an evil god. Regardless of which guess it was, Klein believed that the subsequent development wouldn't be good. He remembered very clearly that Frank's mushroom experiment had a breakthrough because he had been given an assistant who believed in the primordial moon. And the primordial moon was one of the manifestations of the mother goddess of depravity. That also meant that from that moment forth, regardless of whether Frank had any problems in the past, he could very well have entered the eyes of the mother goddess of depravity. This wasn't a good thing. Of course, I can't eliminate the possibility that Frank is excessively crazy, causing the mother goddess of depravity to just look away. Klein mumbled in amusement, hoping to make the best out of it. This was nearly impossible. The horror and strength of a foreign god wasn't something a demigod could understand. Klein even suspected that if it wasn't for the overly intense response that would destroy the anchors of the deities, allowing them to attack each other in a frenzy, resulting in the Beyonder characteristics to gather and awaken the oldest one, the outer deities might have already destroyed the sun and destroyed the ecosystem of the world. They weren't able to do anything to the oldest one's barrier, but they were free to do anything to the star outside the barrier. Sometimes, Klein wondered if the astronomically observed sun was real or not. Perhaps it was just the eternal blazing sun that hung himself there. So far, there shouldn't be any major problems with the mushrooms that Frank invented. I've already dealt with them above the gray fog. Furthermore, the residents of the city of Silver and Moon City didn't show any abnormalities. Yes, after they left the forsaken land of the gods, they abandoned farming mushrooms because they lacked monster corpses and had sufficient food. The more Klein thought about it, the more fearful he felt towards it. If it wasn't for the fact that the mother goddess of depravity's powers that could penetrate the original barrier was still extremely limited, Klein suspected that the cards of blasphemy and mushrooms would have left him corrupted. Sapphira Castle would have unknowingly changed owners. These were things that had been placed above the gray fog for a long time and didn't undergo any special sealing. Compared to the flamboyant mother tree of desire, the usually low-key mother goddess of depravity was far more terrifying. Mr. Door and the Emperor were silently corrupted by her. As expected of an existence that stands atop the outer deities despite losing 2 Beyonder pathways and a Sapphira, Klein sighed inwardly. He took out a pen and paper and prepared to write a reply to Catlia. At that moment, he realized that Miss Messenger had been waiting by his side the entire time without returning to the spirit world. The 8 eyes of the 4 heads stared at him unblinkingly. What do you think of Frank? Klein hesitated before asking. I mean, other than his nickname. The 4 heads in Rionette Tinker's hand spoke one after another. He only appears like an adopted son of an outer deity. In other words, Frank wasn't affected by the mother goddess of depravity previously. He was simply crazy. Klein heaved a long sigh of relief. He then asked, what about now? As Frank Lee summoned Rionette Tinker every time he wrote a letter to Gehrman Sparrow, Klein believed that Miss Messenger, who had a very high status, had a relatively clear and accurate grasp of the state of the Mushroom King. I don't know either, Rionette Tinker's 4 heads answered one after another. Following that, she added, his body, temporarily, hasn't been corrupted. Does that mean that you can't tell if his psyche is affected? That's right. Other than his low level, Frank's usual actions resemble more of an evil god than me. Klein lampooned as he took out a gold coin and flicked it. With this medium, he quickly entered a dream divination state. At the same time, he was prepared to activate Sapphira Castle to cut off the outer deities from watching. Scenes flashed past as Klein saw several futures. Yes, the greatest threat right now is that primordial moon believer. I have to separate him from Frank, or things will become extremely troublesome and dangerous. If Frank doesn't come into contact with anything related to the mother goddess of depravity in the future and doesn't advance to a demigod, there shouldn't be any problems. If only one of these 2 conditions is satisfied, the chance of an accident happening will increase greatly. If both are satisfied at the same time, I can't see the developments at all. Klein snapped awake as he interpreted the results of the divination. Perhaps because Frank's level was too low and he wasn't too affected by it, Klein's divination happened smoothly without encountering any danger. Phew. He silently exhaled and caught the gold coin. Then, he realized that Miss Messenger's 8 red eyes were focused on the gold coin in his palm. Klein twitched his eyebrows, expressing his doubts. It has Sapphira Castle's aura. Rionette Tinker's 4 blonde, red-eyed heads shook up and down. This is one of the 5 gold coins I often use for divination. It has already been tainted by the aura of Sapphira Castle. This way, it can be considered a mystical item to a certain extent. However, the effect will be drained over time. Klein carefully looked at the gold coin in his hand and made a rough judgment based on his spiritual intuition. This gold coin could increase the accuracy of divination and enhance a user's ability to resist any interference. To Klein, this was a pleasant surprise. He decided to use the actual gold coin rather than its historical projection. Retrieving the gold coin, Klein wrote a reply to Ma'am Hermit and handed it to her through Rionette Tinker. After giving Gehrman Sparrow's messenger another gold coin, Katlia unfolded the letter and quickly scanned it. After reading it, she felt her shoulders weigh down a little. Without any delay, Katlia took out another piece of paper and wrote, "Your Majesty, I dreamed of you finding that primitive island and successfully returning. The situation of that descendant of the Emperor is getting worse. If he continues staying on the future, I suspect he'll go crazy. If you don't mind, I want to send him over to you. What we need to take note of is that, although he claims to no longer believe in the primordial moon, no one has ever confirmed that. My greatest worry now is that it's difficult to obtain the main ingredient of a clairvoyant. If you have returned, I wish to find a time to return the magic wishing lamp to you." Chapter 1325. More than half a year later. City of Generosity, Byam, in a rented apartment lit up with gas lamps. Verdú Abraham, who was wearing a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, held a thick stack of information. He was reading seriously under the dim light, drawing a symbol and recording what he deemed useful information from time to time. He left Lone and came to the Rorstad archipelago mainly to avoid being watched by Dorian and his other family members, and focus on studying mysticism. He wanted to find an effective way to save ancestor Bethel Abraham, or rather, reduce the difficulty of the known ritual. However, he hadn't made any headway after half a year. It was as though he had no other choice other than hunting a bizarro sorcerer, a parasite, and a secret sorcerer. This made Verdú rather depressed, but he was clear about how dangerous a Grade 0 sealed artifact was. Even if he was willing to sacrifice himself, he was unable to truly control it. He was unable to guarantee the final outcome. And the most important thing was that he couldn't find any bizarro sorcerers or parasites. They were all saints that were hard to track, with styles that were known for being strange and bizarre. Phew. Verdú put down the stack of documents in his hand and muttered silently, "Don't tell me I can only place my hopes on the fool like Dorian and the others?" Upon thinking of the fool, Verdú couldn't help but frown. This was because there were more and more half-giants promoting the fool's faith in Byam City, so much so that even he, who rarely went out, heard of it. This made him suspect if he had arrived near the headquarters of the Church of the Fool. If it wasn't for the mysterious knowledge that was spread in secret in the Rorstad archipelago was far beyond Verdú's expectations. Many of them were things that the Abraham family didn't know of, and were extremely useful. He would have left Byam last month and headed for the southern continent. "I can't stay here any longer. I need to buy ship tickets to East Balam as soon as possible." Just as Verdú made a decision, he began to waver. "Dorian and the fool probably wouldn't expect me to hide in the area that's under their headquarters jurisdiction. Emperor Roselle once said that the most dangerous place is the safest place." After some hesitation, Verdú put down the documents and switched off the lights. With the moonlight from the window, he walked towards the bedroom. At the corner of the balcony in his room, a figure suddenly jumped out of the darkness and jumped over the railings. The figure was like a feather, light and weightless. It landed from a height 10 meters above the ground, without making a single sound. Right on the heels of that, the figure moved through the shadows to the vicinity of the Church of the Sea God and went up the bell tower. Then, he took out a pen and paper and wrote the report on tonight's surveillance before stuffing it into a crack. After the figure left, a howling wind suddenly sounded above the bell tower about 15 minutes later. The report was pulled out from the crack by an invisible hand. As it swept through the wind, it rose and fell into the distance like a bat spreading its wings in the dark night. Not long after, the report plummeted like it had been bound to a rock, landing on a hand that extended out in a hidden corner of the garden. This hand belonged to the Cardinal of the Church of Storms, Alger Wilson. He then unfolded the report and began to read it in the darkness. He was completely unaffected by the lack of light. Even in the dark sea, Alger could see everything around him clearly. Verdú is becoming more resolute in his intention of leaving Byam. Alger nodded indiscernibly as he came to a conclusion. Over the past half a year, he had been monitoring this member of the Abraham family according to Mr. Fool's instructions, but he hadn't noticed anything abnormal about him. After Verdú left the Rorstad archipelago, his mission would be completed. However, Alger didn't wish for it to end just like that. He believed that he hadn't made enough contributions. All he did was simply monitor a Sequence 7 Beyonder without any special characteristics. The Hermit had already obtained a Sequence 3 Beyonder characteristic from Queen Mystic, and had gathered the corresponding supplementary ingredients and was busy preparing the ritual. This made Alger deeply stressed. Of course, he had also done many things according to Mr. Fool's intentions, but even he felt that there was a huge difference from doing those tasks, with the identity, status, and strength of Sea God. For a moment, Alger wanted to use all sorts of methods to force Verdú Abraham to expose himself, but in the end, he gave up on the idea. This was because he couldn't be sure of Mr. Fool's attitude towards the target. Previously, when the City of Silver and Moon City sold Beyonder characteristics and potion formulas, Alger had purchased some from the Tarot Club. He had used it to secretly nurture a team of Beyonders who were loyal to him. This was how he had people monitoring Verdun. Currently, this less than 10-member team was mostly at Sequence 9, while only a small number of them had been promoted to Sequence 8. As for where Alger had obtained the money for purchasing Beyonder characteristics and potion formulas, the answer was very simple. As a cardinal of the church diocese, Alger could easily save a sum of money for himself. And during that period of time, the minerals, farms, spice plantations, and factories in the Rorstad archipelago were sold at below intrinsic value. As long as one had the funds to buy them, they could earn a lot after a short period of time. More importantly, the Church of Storm's headquarters was quite interested in the Beyonder characteristics and potion formulas sold by the City of Silver and Moon City. They provided a large sum of money for their purchase. The go-between was without a doubt the cardinal of the Rorstad diocese, Alger Wilson. It was understandable that some losses were inevitable during such situations. Reining in his thoughts, Alger decided to sell some mysticism knowledge in Byam's Beyonder circles through his shadow guards. He wanted to bait Verdun Abraham and keep him in the vicinity for as long as possible. The main reason is that the City of Silver's preaching has frightened that gentleman. Alger shook his head and muttered inwardly. He then destroyed the report in his hand and walked back into the cathedral. The sky had just lit up, and a young man walked out of the hotel, leisurely enjoying the scenery of Byam's morning. He had just bought the Tina beverage that was packaged with the fruit shell when he suddenly felt a huge shadow appear beside him. The youth turned his head and looked up bit by bit only to find a 2.5-meter-tall half-giant walking over. "Excuse me, sir. Do you have a moment to talk about our Lord and Savior, Mr. Fool?" The half-giant bent his back and tried his best to make his smile appear amiable. The youth drank a mouthful of Tina and pointed to the side. He smiled and nodded. "Sure, but not here." He then walked to a place where they wouldn't be in the way. The seemingly oppressive half-giant followed warmly. "Go ahead." The youth didn't hide his curiosity at all. The muscular half-giant's expression turned solemn. "My lord claims to be the Fool. In the past, the present, and also in the future, he is the great ruler who dominates the spirit world. He is also the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. He is also the landmark when every living being seeks eternal life. My lord lives above the real world and the spirit world. His benevolence spreads across heaven and the land. There are a total of 6 angels under him. The angel of Mercury is the embodiment of fate, my lord's most cherished angel. The angel of death has followed my lord for the longest period of time and is the consul of the underworld. The angel of redemption is my lord's bugle, the messenger of his revelations. The angel of life is the crystallization of wisdom itself. She is the indestructible spirituality that resides in everyone's body. Upon hearing that, the youth laughed. "Your lord is really impressive. He actually has so many angels to serve him." "Not only that," the half-giant replied gently. "There's also the angel of retribution beside the Lord's throne. He is the Lord's lightning, the Lord's rage, and the Lord's palm. It's all the judge of the fallen and the ones who aren't chaste. In contrast to the angel of retribution is the angel of time. He is a king of ancient times. He eventually submitted to my lord and now strikes the bell of heaven." "Impressive, impressive." The youth sincerely sighed. Upon hearing such a response, the half-giant couldn't help but smile. Then, he described the various miracles that Mr. Fool had performed as succinctly as possible. Finally, he said, "It's already been 15 minutes. I won't waste your time. If you're interested, you can go to the Fool's Cathedral on 16th Phillip Street. This is the biggest cathedral in Byam City. Haha, the rest are still in planning." The young man nodded. "I'll pay a visit if I'm free." After watching the half-giant turn and leave, the youth took out a crystal monocle from his pocket and wore it on his right eye. The half-giant walked straight back to a restaurant and changed into a chef's attire. "Baldur, you went proselytizing again?" the restaurant owner asked with a smile. When the Industry Association recommended this half-giant to learn culinary skills from his restaurant, he had been rather reluctant. He always felt that the other party could kill him with just a swing of his arm, and he didn't seem like someone with any culinary talent. However, he was now very pleased with Baldur. Not only was he humble, obedient, and willing to take hardship, he had quite the intimidating demeanor. This scared off the gangsters who had placed their sights on the restaurant. The only problem was that he would go out every morning to proselytize the Fool. Of course, the restaurant owner couldn't say anything since it wasn't working hours, so he didn't mind. Baldur smiled honestly and walked into the kitchen. He said to his good friend, Bon, who had come from Moon City to seek refuge with him, "I can teach you how to roast fish today." Bon looked rather normal, but his eyes appeared awkward with one looking up and the other looking down. He was one of the citizens from Moon City who wasn't very deformed, and he had the courage to interact with the people outside. He nodded. "I have to pray in a moment." Mr. Fool sent a revelation to get all the residents of Moon City to pray to him at 9 in the morning. We are to wish that we are no longer deformed.